bunny call. The sun erupted from behind the low-hanging gray clouds and nearly blinded Bob. He squinted, lowered, and flipped down the visor. He slowed to maneuver to an minivan around the millionth sharp curve on the seemingly endless winding road carving its way through thickly forested mountains. That's just great, Bob thought. The only thing he'd been looking forward about this trip was the predicted rainy weather. His family was bummed about it, but he was secretly gleeful. Rain meant the flurry of activities would be canceled and he'd be left in peace to do a little fishing, take naps, and read a book. "Honey, look at that," Bob's wife, Wanda, sang out. "Son! Oh, is that what that is?" She playfully smacked his shoulder. "Hand me my sunglasses," Bob said. Bob took his eyes from the road for a couple seconds and watched Wanda lean forward to dig the sunglasses out of the glove box. He admired her shiny auburn curls and her soft contours of her profile. Wanda was petite, pale, and freckled, with small features. Even after 12 years of marriage and 3 kids, she was still the pretty, perky cheerleader he'd fallen for when they were seniors in high school. The only noticeable difference was her clothes, having traded her pom-poms and pleated shirts for the latest fashion. Today she was wearing high-waist short black shorts and netted lavender top over a black tank. The top fell off one shoulder. It looked great. The eyes back on the road, Bob put on his sunglasses. When he took a couple of seconds to check himself out in the rear-view mirror, a couple of seconds was all it took to confirm he didn't look like a jock he'd been in high school. Gone were the long, thick black hair, the sharp jawline, the mischievous dark brown eyes, and the wide, carefree grin. In their place were thinning, graying short hair, soft jowl, tired eyes, and lips clamped to the downward curve. Most of his muscles had gone wherever too much of his hair had gone. He didn't have enough time to work out, and it showed. Bob quickly shifted his attention to the drive. He pulled the minivan into a right lane as the road started climbing upward, and the 2 lanes turned into 3, creating a passing lane. 2 spotty sedans pulled out from behind Bob to zip right by. Bob sighed. "I miss my MG." Wanda glanced at him and wouldn't take the bait. She never did. He talked him into selling his beloved MG when they had their second child. He'd regretted it ever since. He missed everything about that car. It even smelled the distant motor oil leather seat smell it always made. It made him feel manly and young. Bob shook his head and tried not to inhale the scent in the minivan. Peanut butter, dirty socks, and grape juice. "Guess what, everyone?" Wanda called out. "What?" the kids chorused. "They've changed the forecast." Wanda did a little happy dance in her seat as she looked at her phone screen. Bob was a little surprised the phone still had service. It felt like they were thousands of miles from civilization. "Instead of 80% chance of steady rain," Wanda said, "it now says 20%. We're going to have sun. Happy sun, smiley sun. Some come out to play," Bob's 3-year-old daughter, Cindy, began singing off key. "Bright sun, friendly sun. It's a beautiful day," Wanda joined in with Cindy. Cindy giggled and started in on the granting melody again. Her curly auburn pigtails bounced as she bopped through the song. What Cindy lacked in singing talent, she made up in cuteness and enthusiasm. Freckles and happy grin won over everyone who met her. "Come on, let's all sing," Wanda called out. 7-year-old Aaron sat next to Cindy in the car seat. He was excited to be growing out of soon. He shared his sister's freckles and auburn hair, as well as her energy, and predictably joining in the singing. Tyler, 10, lanky and dark, with broad shoulders that telegraphed the athletic build he'd have soon, lounged in his own space, with the third row of seats. Tyler liked to set himself apart, because he was the oldest. But he was still young enough to want to be included in family fun. He still loved game night, movie night, Sunday picnics, and sing-alongs. Now, he did this part by providing a beatbox backup. "Happy sun, smile sun, sun come out to play," Bob's family sang. "Come on, Bob," Wanda caroled, "sing." Bob grunted ground his teeth while his family went through the 2 lines at least half a dozen times. "Give me some classic rock and I'll belt it out with the best of them," Bob thought. But he wasn't going to sing about the stinking sun. Bob kept his lips pressed together and his eyes on the road, where a still wet pavement was glistening in the nearly shining sun. The double yellow line was tethered, pulling a minivan inexorably toward his destination. Bob might be driving, but he had no control. Not really. When was the last time he had control? Before Tyler was born, when he and Wanda married, before they met, since he was born. Was control an illusion? Finally, the song wound down, and Aaron asked the age-old question, "Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet?" Cindy parroted. "Not how much farther? Are we there yet?" Wanda asked Bob. "Not you too," Bob said with a sigh. Wanda laughed, and she looked at the map and unfolded and answered her own question. 27 more miles, she said. Bob found it endearing how Wanda insisted map reading was more fun than using a GPS. It was one of the many quirks he loved about her. Making up songs, like she a dumb song, was one of the many quirks he wasn't so crazy about. Harping continually on family togetherness was one of the quirks he truly hated. When Tyler had been young, it wasn't so bad. Taking his son on fishing trips and ball games was no trouble at all. Even the hikes Wanda had planned were fun. When Aaron was born, the family activities had gotten more complicated, but they still were doable. Adding Cindy to the mix had raised the chaos factor tenfold. Cindy wasn't a brat or anything. She was actually a really sweet child, but her energy level was through the roof, and for some reason that was all the amp up the boys. Lately seemed like Bob had never gotten the peace and quiet, even at night. He could be sure that one or more kids would end up diving into the bed with Wanda and him at some point, every night without fail. Where Bob used to have time for himself, now's the time belonged to everyone except him. His work took a slice, his kids took a slice, Wanda took a slice. He never used to begrudge the time Wanda took, but that was because she wanted time for fun things. Now all she wanted was time for put one of the many family man hats: coach, teacher, playmate, cook, handyman, driver, shopper, janitor, money earner. A couple months before, Wanda's best friend had told Wanda about Capatina. Atina was a Native American name that means rich, Wanda read from the Nearly magazine's thick brochure describing the place. We named our family exclusive Capatina because the man whose family was indeed rich, he kept reading. Isn't that beautiful, Bob? He said absently. Bob had thought Wanda had been reading about the place the same way he'd read about Greenland and Norway and Albania. Wanda wanted to travel, and she loved to research destinations, but it turned out Wanda was serious about Capatina. Why don't we just send the kids to camp, and we can stay home and hang out in the hammock, Bob asked. When Wanda kept talking about it, he just grabbed her and nuzzled her neck. Just the two of us. Wanda wasn't buying it. Neither did she approve of the idea, so they get a nice hotel and plop the kids by the pool so they could have time alone together. He finally pulled out all the stops and suggested a high-priced resort that promised to entertain kids while the parents lounged under big umbrellas and white sandy beaches. Bob wanted to relax. Wanda wanted something else. So here he was, on his way to Capatina. Bob glanced in the rearview mirror to find out why it was suddenly so noisy in the minivan. Now all three of his kids were arranging some elaborate hand-clapping game. Wanda leaned toward Bob. Zoe and I used to camp when we were little girls, he told him in the tenth time. The only downside was that he had to be away from Mama and Daddy. Isn't it awesome we don't have to put our kids through that? We'll all be together for a full week. Awesome. If Wanda noticed his sarcasm, she ignored it. A deer ran across the road in front of the minivan, and Bob hit the brakes. Thankfully, the minivan hadn't been going very fast. It couldn't. It had no pick-me-up for steep grades, especially in high altitudes. Even though he easily missed the deer, Bob felt his blood pressure go up. Can you keep it down? Bob bellowed at his kids. I'm trying to drive up here. Momentary silence. Do you think there are fairies in here, Daddy? Cindy asked him. He wasn't staring out the side window. The dense forest crowded the side of the road. Why not? Bob said. Wanda told him over and over that Cindy was extra sensitive. He could never burst her bubble. If she wanted to believe there were fairies, it's his job to go along with it. Wanda changed the subject. So what are we going to do when we get there? He asked the kids. Bob groaned. Not this again. All three of them started shouting at once. Big bubbles, talent show, karaoke, scavenger hunt, puppets, paint rocks, trampoline, dancing, hula hooping, gymnastics, Cindy called out. Trampoline, archery, horseback, riding, canoeing, tubbing, mountain biking, hiking, Aaron shouted. Agility, kayaking, diving, sailing, swimming, tug-of-war, running, ping-pong, volleyball, bungee jumping, zip lining, Tyler yelled. Wanda laughed delightfully. She did this on purpose to spin up the kids. Bob was tempted to cover his ears with both his hands, but obviously he couldn't do that and drive. What about fishing, he thought. Bob loved to fish. Wanda hated it. But Wanda could manipulate with the best of them if she needed to. She used Bob's love and fishing against them when he was talking to him into this trip. When it became clear that Bob was going to Capatina, whether he liked it or not, Bob had comforted himself with the idea he could wander off and fish on his own. That's when the truth came out. Well, you won't get to go off by yourself, Wanda admitted. They have a fishing tournament, and maybe you could talk the boys into entering one with you. Why did everything have to be so organized? The kids kept firing out activities. Bob figured they'd have to stay for about 5 years to do so, everything the kids wanted to do, and they were staying for only a week. Only? Yeah, right. 7 days was an eternity. 7 days of fun and frolic, Wanda kept saying to him while he was getting everyone ready for the trip. She made it sound like it was supposed to be a good thing. How was Bob going to survive it? Capatina, Bob had to admit, was a great-looking place, or it could have been if it wasn't infested with noisy families. Nestled in a narrow valley between two tall wooden mountain ranges topped with a craggy rock, Capatina hugged the edges of a massive, meandering, deep blue freshwater lake, Lake Hamadi. According to the camp brochure, Hamadi was a Cherokee for forest water. That would have been an appropriate name for a lake in the woods, except there's a fact that the camp is nowhere near Cherokee territory. When Bob pointed that out to Wanda, she didn't seem to care. Assessed via the 10-mile dirt and gravel road that led to the highway at the bottom of the steep grade, Capatina didn't announce itself until you would be really upon it. Then, An understated rustic sign nearly hidden behind maple tree reassured travelers that they were in the right place. Cantina, just ahead. The camp itself was as picturesque as its surroundings. The main lodge was a huge log cabin flanked by two stone chimneys and an ample porch that ran along the front of the side of the buildings. The structure was covered with a shiny green metal roof. The camp's 35 cabins looked like lodges. Children, little log stone buildings were scattered near the main lodge like baby ducks swimming around their mom. Bob and his family were stated to be cabin number 17. Cabin Nutta. Nutta apparently was an Algonquian name meaning strong. Bob's boys thought that Nutta was a hilarious name. We're going to stay in the nut house, Tyler told all his friends when they got into their assignment. Don't mess with my Nutta, Aaron kept saying. Will it have lots of peanuts in it, Daddy? Cindy said, had to ask several times. Wanda said, we'll get nutty. Rob was around, I'm going nuts. He thought the name was idiotic because, again, the Algonquian tribe lived nowhere near here either. The owners of Cantina seemed to reach into the swirling vortex of Native American names and randomly picked a few. Cantina's parking lot was a shady tree-guarded gravel rectangle with the main lodge. When Bob pulled the minivan into the lot, he was reminded you couldn't drive your car to your cabin. That would ruin the ambience, Wanda said when Bob complained about it. Is excruciating back pain from lugging all our crap also part of the experience? Bob asked. Wanda smiled at him and applied fresh lip gloss. Well, I guess that answers that question, Bob thought. Now that he stood here next to the minivan crammed with luggage and toys, not to mention cargo carrier stuffed with some more of the same, Bob's pack started throbbing just at the idea of getting everything into the cabin. And of course, Cabin Nutta was the farthest one in the parking lot. It's right on the edge of the woods, Bob, Wanda had gushed when the cabin was assigned to him. Oh, joy and bliss, Bob said. And there they were. One woman's heaven was another man's hell. Bob looked up at the traitorous sky, which has traded its clouds for vast expanses of pale blue. The sun was almost currently overhead, and it shined out of ferocity. Bob figured it was all at least 80 degrees, and the air felt heavy and muggy. Their feet crunching over the gravel, Wanda had his kids practically dancing around the car. Cindy was spinning in circles, Aaron was doing some kind of dance, and Tyler was drumming the minivan's hood. Wanda was calling out, hi, and how are you to everyone within earshot. Look, Utterflea, Cindy squealed. Bob followed the direction of Cindy's plump pointed finger and saw a monarch butterfly disappear into a clump of salmonberry bushes. He flashed back into his childhood, remembering when his dad took him camping. They picked salmonberries to go and feed the fresh trout dinner. Come on, Dad, Aaron said. We have to get signed up or we'll miss out on all the good stuff. Bob, why don't you go take care of all of that? Wanda handed Bob 4 sheets of paper covered with lists. He knew the list of activities each child had chosen and the ones Wanda had decided they'd do as family. He sighed. It was going to take all afternoon to do this. The kids and I will go scope things out and start the meeting people, Wanda said. When we're done with the sign-up, you can bring the stuff to the cabin. Oh, I can? Goody, Bob muttered. What's that, honey? Nothing. Bob watched his family camper off and he didn't move. He wished he couldn't go into the car and drive away. He just looked at the driver's seat, but what would happen if he did that? The sweet scents of wildflowers weird with pungent exhaust smells, but overpowering both, the powerful aromas of Jupiter and pine command attention. They made Bob think of a gin and tonic, his favorite drink. It tastes like an evergreen tree, Wanda had said the first time he made her one. After that, she started calling gin and tonic that tree drink, and eventually she shortened it to a tree. Make me a tree, Wanda would say occasionally after the kids were asleep on Friday nights. He could use a tree right about now. Suddenly, he got shoved from behind. A kid yelled, sorry, as Bob staggered into the side of a minivan, clutching in the open row door. He noticed an overweight, sweating, middle-aged man wrestle with multiple duffel bags and suitcases. The man met Bob's eyes, and Bob gave him a sympathetic smile. Then Bob shut the minivan's doors and looked around. He was admittedly sorry for that he did. Taking in the can from behind the driver's seat and watching his family spill over the minivan with uncontinued enthusiasm may have been bad enough. Seeing the whole of his purgatory with one wide angle and particularly unbearable, kids ran all over like they'd been in a drug that rendered the senseless, but kept them in perpetual motion. Men were morphing in packs and mules. Sweating dads staggered over under the weight of burdens. Moms were socializing and organizing. In the midst of the chaos, camp counselor blew whistles and shouted incomprehensible instructions. Bob tried to decipher what they were saying, but he couldn't. Steeling himself, he approached the ponytailed blonde, blue-eyed counselor. He blew her whistle and then, was 4 feet away from her, the high-pitched screech catapulted into his ears and zigzagged around his brain for several seconds before he could speak. Excuse me, he said, but which way sign up for the activity? Ridiculously, she blew the whistle again, but this time it was at least a short burst. She followed the shallow light of stairs at one end of the lodge. Go up those stairs and follow the walkway around the porch. Get in the line and it will lead you to the sign-up tables inside. She blew the whistle again. Bob's fingers itched to pull the whistle off her neck, but he contained himself. Thanks, he said with a murderous smile. Bob went up the stairs and found the line of the lodge's front porch. From there, he could see that his family was already settling in. Cindy was holding hands with another girl with one of the black braids and spinning around on a big dock that stretched over a lake. That was it, with the little kids and spinning. Near Cindy, Wanda was talking to a woman, while Bob's boys and another boy took turns trying to skip rocks against the surface of the lake. And there he was, standing in line. He could only take care of paperwork. Story of his life. Bob lost track of how long he waited. Flies droned around his head, and he felt his nose starting to burn. But that teach him to ignore Wanda's advice to put on sunscreen. It's going to rain, he told her confidently. You never know, she said. It was amazing how often she did know what he didn't know. Someplace nearby, someone played a guitar. Someplace even nearer, someone ate beef jerky. Bob wrinkled his nose. The smell made his stomach roil. Other parents were chatting in line, but Bob kept his head down. For the first time since he'd pulled the minivan out of the driveway, he was able to think about the proposal which he wished he was home working on. He didn't have time to take a week's vacation, and if he did, he sure didn't want to take it running himself ragged down the activities with a bunch of strangers. Honestly, he needed to be alone. Bob turned to watch his family again. Cindy and her new friend were now playing a makeshift game of hopscotch between the lawn and lake, while the boys were trying to balance on the pilings along the edge of the dock. He was sure he was going to hear a splash pretty soon. Bob finally reached the doorway of the lodge. Hard to believe, but it would eventually be in his turn. Curious in spite of himself, he looked around the lodge's interior. It was just a brochure depicted. Exposed log walls, lots of wood-heavy furniture padded the cushions covered in vaguely Native American patterns. Massive buckheads presided over the fireplace, and the chandeliers hanging down from the log roof were made of antlers. This was not the best place to be a deer. Bob took the last peek of his family before he stepped completely into the building. As suspected, the boys fell into the lake. Cindy continued to play hopscotch. Wanda laughed at her sons, only because they were laughing too. If anyone had asked Bob if he loved his family, he would have answered a vehement yes, because he did. But that does not mean he liked them all the time, and lately he'd been liking them less and less. They always wanted something. Daddy, look at the picture I drew, Cindy would say. Dad, look, can you throw me the ball to me, Aaron would ask. Dad, please help me with my school project, Tyler would beg. Honey, the garage door's rattling. Please fix that, Wanda would order. Yeah, order. She always said please, but it felt not less than an order than it did when the boss said, get that done today, please. Bob was tired of all these requests, all the obligations. He needed to breathe. It's your turn, dude, someone tapped Bob on the shoulder. He looked around. A young dad who obviously still loved fatherhood stood behind Bob. The dad grinned and pointed over Bob's shoulder. You're up. The table in front of Bob was a hefty tan woman with super short, dirty blonde hair and smile lines around her eyes. Looked up at him. Hi, I'm Majorgy. And she gave him a big smile and admired her very white, even teeth, while she pointed to the white plastic name tag pinned on her Greek Athena shirt. Welcome to Camp Athena. Oh, is that where I am? She was aiming for dry humor, but apparently he missed his mark. Majorgy's smile faltered. He frowned for a second and said, Name? Mackenzie. The woman tapped his eyes on the wireless laptop. Bob, Wanda, Cindy, Aaron, and Tyler? That's right. Okay, let's get you signed up. Have you prepared for a list of activities? Bob handed the woman Wanda's neat list. The camp offered 112 activities and asked for campers to come prepared with a list of at least 20. Ordered by preference. Wanda's list held 72 activities altogether. Bob wondered what Majority would do with that, but she didn't seem surprised at all. Perfect, Majority said and began typing. Bob watched her, his jaw clenched. One of the objections he had to Camp Athena, in fact, to any summer camp, was the rigidity of the whole thing. He had no issues being outdoors or doing fun things, but doing things on a schedule, following a list that drove him nuts. Ha! Maybe he did belong in Cabin Nutta. Seriously, though, he didn't get enough schedules and lists to follow all that at work. At least at work he was getting paid. Why didn't he get subjected to this crap at home, too? Majority stopped typing. I wasn't able to get you into every activity listed, but I managed to get the top 20 for each of your children and for your family as a whole. Awesome juice. Bob enjoyed using that one of Tyler's favorite sayings. Tyler actually meant it when he said it, but Bob's awesome juice meant either that sucks or I could care less. Georgie handed Bob's list back to him, and then looked both ways and behind her before leaning forward. And then she spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Bob heard, Do you want? But the rest was incomprehensible. He leaned forward. I'm sorry? Marjorie leaned forward too. Her breath smelled like chocolate. Do you want to sign up for the bunny call? She asked. He must have misheard her. Bob asked, What's that? Majority turned, pointing toward a small rabbit standing in the far corner of the master room, under the antique canoe hanging in the vaulted ceiling. The rabbit, which looked like bright orange fur, wore a white and black checked vest, yellow-white polka dot bow tie, and a black top hat, which was a floppy ear stuck straight up. The rabbit held symbols, like old-fashioned wind-up monkeys used to have. Bob blinked. How he had missed the rabbit he first looked around. It wasn't like missing an anaconda in a pen full of puppies. The rabbit did not belong. It really did not belong. Bob was mesmerized by the rabbit for several seconds. He couldn't tell if the rabbit was a person wearing a costume or one of those creepy animatronic things he'd seen in a couple restaurants his family had visited when he was young. In any case, it wasn't the kind of rabbit that made him want to cuddle up to it. Its eyes were a little too big to be friendly, and they bordered on crazed. "Mr. Mackenzie? Bob?" Bob blinked. "Huh?" Georgie grinned and winked. Then he signed up for the bunny called the rabbit over there. "His name is Ralpho. We'll visit your cabin." Bob looked at the rabbit. "Ralpho. He'll come into your cabin screaming, clashing cymbals, and spinning his head," Majority chuckled. "It's really something terrifying to behold." Bob could just imagine it. "It's quite the wake-up call," Majority added. Bob didn't get it. "Wake-up call? Oh, right, I didn't say. Ralpho makes his rounds between 5 a.m. and 6 a.m. During that hour, he'll visit every cabin and signs up for the bunny call. It's a bit of a naughty prank we play on the children on their first day here. Most of them love to have a rush of terror when they're scared silly first thing in the morning." Majority chuckled again, in her low voice, the sound reminiscent of a villain's devilish laugh. "Are you interested?" Bob looked at the Majority and Ralpho, and back again. He thought about the annoyingly happy family and their instance that he spent only a week off his summer in his poorly disguised detention center of overworked dads. He thought about how long he stood in his stupid line signing up for asinine activities. He thought about all the luggage he had to scalp to Captain Nutta. And he thought about how his family reacted to loud noises in the morning. That thought began teasing some of good humor to the surface. "Sure," he grinned. This is going to be a riot." "Wonderful," Majority said. She tapped her keyboard again. "Here, all signed up." She smiled at him, and he smiled back. It was Bob's first genuine smile of the day. It was the first moment since the trip that had been scheduled that he felt like something other than a resentment and annoyance. He even felt a little delighted. Majority leaned over to grab a stack of papers she'd just printed. She thrust them in front of Bob. "If you could read these over and be sure to approve, then initial each page." She handed him a pen. He signed and read the excruciating list one more time. He didn't approve at all, but he initialed the pages anyway. Majority beamed. "Excellent." She shuffled the papers and stapled them together. "Here are your schedules," she said. "Ralpho will visit in the morning, and the rest of your activities are blocked out of the calendar." She handed Bob a key and a little booklet. "Key to Cabin Nutta and the book of camp rules," she explained. "Oh, lovely, a book of rules." Bob needed more rules. Like he needed a few more jobs and a few more kids. He didn't say that out loud, he just took the rule book and the key. "Have fun and don't hesitate if you ask if you need anything," Majority said. Bob nodded at her, gave Ralpho one last look, and then headed outside. He noticed a step lighter. He was tempted to do a little spin as he headed out of the door. Instead, he turned to Ralpho one last time and tipped an imaginary hat to his new friend. "Thanks, buddy," Bob said quietly. Ralpho had given Bob the most profound sense of gratification he had in weeks. Bob hauled the last load of luggage into Cabin Nutta and stepped back outside of to catch his breath. It's basically an A-frame and a shallow porch. Cabin Nutta was a simple log structure with two small wide windows, one picture window in the front, and a small window on the loft level. Bob shook his head in the cabin. It wasn't a 5-star hotel you'd envisioned spending the vacation in. "Bob," Wanda called. She went inside the cabin, and Wanda gave him what he would come to think as the look. The look that was lips quirked to the side with an eyebrow raise expression, and meant, "You're not doing what I want you to do." "What?" Bob asked. You need to get a move on. It's time for the opening day picnic," Wanda complained, bustling over to Bob and waving a schedule under her nose. "See? 4 p.m. We're going to be late." "No one is on time for picnics," Bob said. Wanda threw a pair of khaki shorts and navy blue polo shirt in his direction. "Here, change into these. You smell like sweat." "You think?" Wanda's word that sounded accusatory, and he wanted to ask her how he was supposed to have gotten all the stuff in the cabin without working up a little sweat. Instead, he watched Wanda set up Cindy's sleeping kit, a small vinyl pouch tucked in a white wicker basket. The pouch held a sleep mask and earplugs and a basket including a cup of water with a lid. Early in their relationship, Bob had known that Wanda was a loud snorer. She'd fallen asleep on his shoulder at an outdoor concert once. Her snores were somehow audible over the loud music. When they had kids, he found out that snoring was genetic. And unfortunately, it came with a propensity toward light sleep, and the overreaction of being awakened by loud noises or bright light. These days, one of the kids all wore earplugs and blackout sleep masks to bed. Bob never bothered with the mask, but Wanda's snores forced him to wear earplugs, and even those weren't enough to keep him from feeling like he'd spent every night in the working sawmill. That was another thing about this trip that displeased him. All 4 of his snoring family members in one small area. Bob didn't see a lot of sleep coming his way over the next 7 days. One of the reasons he got such a kick out of the bunny call was he thought it would be a meet out of a bit of justice. if he had to torture it all night. At least they'd get a little shock in the morning. Cabin Netta was basic on the inside as it was on the outside. On the first floor, the cabin held a double day bed with a pull-out trundle bed underneath. A table with 5 chairs, a chest of drawers, and a small refrigerator. A door led to a tiny bathroom. Up in a loft, 2 twin beds and matching nightstands were tucked under the roof's steep pitch. The cabin had no shelves or closets. Instead, coat hooks lined with several of the walls, and low benches were set under the hooks, presumably to hold luggage. Wanda had already stashed all the suitcases neatly in rows. She'd also piled snacks, paper plates, and cups, and a roll of paper towels on the top of the refrigerator. I thought there would be bunk beds, Aaron had said when Bob reached into the cabin. Bunk beds would have been fun. When I was your age, your uncle and I were complaining that we had to have bunk beds, Bob told his son. We thought twin beds would have been fun. Yeah, Aaron said, but you're old. Bob wondered what it had to do with it. He didn't think of himself as old, although each passing day the label got closer to sticking. But even if he was old, did old automatically mean wrong? He was beginning to think it did. Bob surveyed the cabin's bed, indulging in a moment's anticipation for the bunny call. Every bed in the cabin was covered in a red blanket. The sheets were dark green. This gave the place a decidedly Christmassy feel that was heightened by the green and red striped curtains in the windows. Bob thought it was a little weird that they said so when they first entered the cabin, but Wanda insisted. It's festive. Exactly my point, Bob said. Although the boys didn't like the lack of bunk beds, they did like one of the cabin's features. It had a trap door in the floor. What's that for? Aaron asked when he found it. Bob made Aaron wait a little while he dropped through the trap door and checked out what was below. Turned out it was just a cabin's crawl space. Bob figured they decided to put a crawl space door inside to prevent critters from getting under their cabins. Or maybe it was an installation thing. Whatever it was, it delighted the boys, who went in and out of the crawl space several times, jabbering about hidden treasure. Wanda snapped her fingers in front of Bob's face. Why are you just standing there? She gave him a push. Change. Obediently, Bob began peeling off his sweaty clothes, replacing them with fresh ones. When he was done changing, he stood at a mock attention in front of his wife, who had already changed into a simple emerald green sundress. Do I pass muster? Wanda smiled, gave him a hug, and kissed him on the cheek as she recoiled. Oh, rough, you need a shave. I'm on vacation, Bob reminded her. That's no excuse to give your wife whisker burn. Bob sighed. Would he ever get a break from anything? He picked up his shaving kit. Not now, Wanda said. We're late. Bob dropped the kit in frustration. Well then, you just tell me exactly when and where and how, and I'll do exactly what you want, he said. Wanda didn't hear the acrimony in his words. She probably thought he was serious because she smiled at him and linked her arm through his. Let's go to a picnic. Spread out over a vast expanse of lawn, sloping down a sandy beach, the picnic was a chaotic mass of food, games, and socializing. Bob wanted to run and hide in the forest the second he and his family reached the edges of the tumult. Camp Etienne welcomes you. A bright green banner shouted from its place, stretched between 2 massive fir trees. Bob doubted the Camp Etienne welcomed any of them, but it was more probable that the camp wanted them all to go away. In fact, Bob was pretty sure Lake Amadity wished the camp had never been built. Bob had entered the architecture firm and the apprentice right out of the school, and in the 12 years he worked there, he learned a lot of the form and function of energy and landscape. Walking sites to prepare plans, he often had a sense for when a place welcomed a structure and when it didn't. Not that he ever shared that tidbit with anyone. He kept his intuitive sense of a place in mind and he designed structures, but he never told his clients he was repositioning a building on site because the earth wanted it that way. He had some sort of weird sense about land and nature, but he wasn't stupid. Come on, Bob, Wanda tugged in his arm. Stop loitering. You look like a deer in the headlights. I feel like a deer in the headlights. I'd probably just be mounted on one of the lodge walls at the end of the week. Very funny, Wanda towed Bob to the end of the row of the picnic tables. They were lined up, covered in dark green vinyl cloths, and valiantly trying to hold several tons of food. Wanda handed them a heavy-duty paper plate. We might as well eat while the kids play. Then I'll corral them and help them to their own meals. Bob looked around for the kids. The boys appeared to have become ninja warriors. They wore green headbands now, and they're having sword fights with long sticks. He glanced toward a cluster of toddlers clambering around the clown, who was smearing paint on a red-headed girl's face. Cindy was hopping up and down next to the girl. Me too, she squealed loud enough that Bob could probably hear clearly in the great distance. Make me buzzy honeybee, Cindy commanded. Bob winced and turned back to his food. He hated clowns. Does it smell good? Wanda gestured to the platter. It was a potato salad, bean salad, macaroni salad, pasta salad, green salad, deviled eggs, raw veggies, and dip, chips, dipped baked beans, and various casseroles that were converted to the picnic tables. Honestly, all I can smell is burnt hot dogs, Bob said. A barbecue was set up halfway between the food tables and the lodge, and the charred smells of the flame belching into the air too high for safety. Bob wasn't sure the chef, the skinny camp employee with the narrow flushed face, knew what he was doing. Wanda wrinkled her nose. The hot dogs are why I encouraged Cindy to get her face painted, but really, can't you smell the dill in the salad? And the thyme and this one? Give them a chance. Woof, Bob said before dutifully sniffing the salads. He still wouldn't smell anything except overcooked barbecue. Wanda giggled. Come on, you're holding up this line. Bob sighed and started dishing up the salads. While he piled the food on his plate, he tried not to dread the inevitable scene that would unfold when Cindy realized there were hot dogs being consumed all around her. Cindy thought hot dogs were cruel. Can't eat doggies, Sandy had protested the first time hot dogs were presented to her. No matter the explanation convinced her the term hot dog, not precisely descriptive of what it was eating. Bob, Wanda gave them a gentle shove. Honey, whatever you're thinking of, you can think about later. Come on, Wanda led him to the long picnic table filled with laughing couples. Where are these seats taken? Wanda asked one of the couples. No, they're all yours. A large, boisterous woman with big hair and a mouth to match sang out. Pull up a bench. She laughed as she just said the funniest thing in the world. Her laugh was high-pitched thrill that sounded like a bird's mating call. Her husband, small, sandy-haired man with sunburned ears, glanced up and offered an unconvincing replica of a smile. Bob matched it with his own social tooth-bearing. Wanda plopped down on the beach and scooted in to make room for Bob. I'm Darlene, the large woman said, and this is Frank. She pointed at the guy with sunburned ears. Frank lifted a fork and returned to eating. Don't mind him, Darlene said. When he gets food in front of him, he forgets how to talk. Eats like a horse, my Frank. And look at him. It's not fair. I eat a carrot and I gain a pound. Bob had no idea what to say to that, so he let Wanda handle it. He heard her saying something sympathetic while he put his attention to his food. The bench was hard and narrow and hurt his butt. He shifted and racked his knee in the picnic table frame. He shifted again and splinter the size of a small knife jabbed him in the thigh. A pair of flies dive-bombed his plate, and he shooed them away. Was this supposed to be fun? He stabbed a chunk of potato and stuffed it in his mouth. It wasn't cooked all the way through. He hated crunchy potatoes and potato salad. He made a face as he chewed, wishing he could spit it out, wishing he could spit out this whole miserable experience. While Bob ate, an animated conversation about camp activities began. Everyone at the table offered an opinion about what's going to be most fun thing to do at Camp Athena. Even Frank, who was finished eating, joined in with the glee and talked to the tennis tournament that would start the next day. Then Wanda piped up to tell everyone that their whole family was competing in the capture the flag competition the next day. Bob almost groaned out loud. He forgot he agreed to that. The very thought of running around the woods and trying to grab a piece of cloth made his teeth hurt. Bob had hoped that after the picnic he could spend the rest of the day sitting in the deck chair, and reminded why he rarely bothered even being optimistic. The picnic ended at 6, and Wanda informed them that their family was signed up for a team competition from 6 to 9, in darts, horseshoes, and a card game, hand and foot, after that. There was a big campfire with marshmallows. It's going to be great fun, Wanda chirped a little later, as she cleaned up the ketchup smeared on Cindy's face. Particularly Bob's having finished last in darts, and horseshoes in 7th in the land and foot tournament. But Tyler was the only one who had a problem with that. Luckily, his disappointment didn't last long. Tyler was like his mom. He didn't dwell on what couldn't change. He just moved on to the next possibility around the corner. That's what life's all about, Bob, Wanda always told him. Possibility. Every day is filled with possibility. You just have to look for it. Bob had thought that this horror was adorable for the first few years he was with Wanda, but now it was guiding at him. Maybe because he hadn't been seeing a lot of possibilities that pleased him. This one, for instance, wasn't high on his good times list. The evening's campfire was a massive conflagration expelling smoke that hung choking swirls over the entire lawn and beach. Bob's eyes burned, and his throat felt raw. Look at the big fire, Daddy, Cindy said, tugging on his hand as if they could move closer. Bob instinctively grabbed Cindy's hand as soon as he'd seen the fire. She loved bright things, and he knew he'd make a beeline for it, which she did. Fire's hot, sweetie, she said. Well, look at it from over here. He tried leading her to the pair of lawn chairs well away from the flames, but she was having none of it. No, fire roost marshmallows, Cindy demanded. Wanda took Cindy's other hand. I'll take her. You go sit. Bob let go of Cindy's hand. Thanks. Wanda blew him a kiss and trotted with Cindy toward the marshmallows and cackling fire. Bob turned toward the lawn chairs, but of course they were all taken now. He scanned the area to place to sit. Sighing, he went toward one of the logs set up around the campfire and then awkwardly perched at the curved edge. A mosquito immediately appeared and landed on his knee. He smacked his knees and killed the mosquito. I thought you guys didn't like smoke, he said to the dead bug. I think they'd get used to it, a balding man with a big gut said as he dropped next to the log next to Bob. Maybe they build up a tolerance in places like this, his voice said, the deep, smooth and smooth. He could have been on a radio personality. Think so? Bob said uncommittedly. He held out his hand. Bob Mackenzie. Stephen Bell. A man shook Bob's hand. Actually, he said, I think my theory's full of it. Mosquitoes don't live long enough to build up a tolerance. Didn't you know that the average female mosquito lives about 50 days and the average male lives about 10 days? Figures, Bob said. The females and babies never leave him alone. Stephen laughed. You got that right. He gestured toward the pair of very pretty blonde girls Bob guessed were 13 or 14. The girls were flirting with a couple teen boys wearing pants so baggy that they were about to fall off. Or they worried themselves to death. Those two girls are mine. Guy shook his head. Don't sleep much. Bob nodded. I can see why. You have girls? One. She's just 3. 2 boys, too. Fatherhood's not for the faint of heart, Stephen said. But it's a heck of a lot of fun. Bob offered a socially acceptable nod and didn't represent at all what he was thinking. It was nearly 11 p.m. by the time the whole family was back in the cabin and the kids were ready for bed. The boys had a good night and fell into the twin beds, asleep. Almost in a second, they hit the mattress. Their snores began vibrating the exposed ceiling and beams immediately. Cindy, on the other hand, was wound up, wearing one of the cabin's extra quilts as a cape. She was dancing around the place shouting, I'm a princess. If you're a princess, where's your crown? Bob asked. Oh, now you've done it, Bob, Wanda said. And sure enough, Cindy started crying because she didn't have a crown. Oops, Bob said. It took Wanda several minutes to convince Cindy that they could make her a princess crown during the crafting time the next day. In the meantime, Cindy had an invisible crown. Okay, Cindy said finally. Wanda and Bob sighed in relief. Cindy still wasn't ready to go to sleep. Story, she begged, crawling into Bob's lap. Bob sat in the back against the metal frame of the double day bed. He was pretty sure the frame in the previous life had a medieval torture device. It managed to attack both his spine and kidneys at the same time. Bob wrapped his arm around Cindy and tried not to inhale her smoky scent. Normally, Cindy smelled like strawberries and vanilla at night. The strawberry scent from her shampoo and the vanilla from the warm vanilla almond milk she liked to drink before bed. Wanda decided to skip the kids' bath time tonight because the day had been so long, and Cindy was already feeling bloopy from too many swallows to make room for her usual before-bed treat. Bob watched Wanda open up the window of the far side of the cabin. She was frantical about having fresh air in the evening, no matter how cold it was outside. At least it wasn't that frigid tonight. Wanda crossed the cabin, pulled back the covers, and slid in next to Bob. She looked at her daughter. Okay, what story are we reading tonight? He asked Cindy. This is the routine. Bob held to the daughter, and Wanda told the story. Bob would design and build houses, but he would never put together a story to save his life. Wanda was the storyteller. Caterpillar! Cindy shrieked, pretty much right into Bob's ear. He cringed, but didn't push her away. Okay, Wanda leaned over and kissed the top of Cindy's head. She sneezed, then nestled close to Bob, laying her head on his shoulder. From there, she began to tell a convoluted story about a caterpillar who built a cocoon all wrong and had to redo it, and he could become a butterfly. At one point, Bob was tempted to insert a couple of anecdotal details regarding the building process, but he thought wisely and remained silent. At the beginning of one of the stories, Cindy kept piping up about her opinion about how things should go. Every time she did, she squirmed and ended up elbowing Bob in some sensitive area of his anatomy. It was like trying to cuddle with a small kangaroo. Bob wasn't a huge fan of this experience, but about 5 minutes in, he closed her eyes and her body went limp. This is part of the night Bob didn't like. In fact, he pretty much loved it. When Cindy relaxed, her sweet toddler Pudge filled Bob's arms with pillowy, warm softness, and then holding her was one of the most sweet and comforting things in the world. Sometimes it was so comforting he forgot he was, and he had to do the next day. He forgot the overwhelmed and angry resentful. He took back his childhood, the memories of snuggling with his well-worn teddy bear. Earplugs, Wanda whispered, holding them out. Bob took the earplugs and gently inserted them in Cindy's ears while Wanda took care of her own. She gave Bob a kiss on the cheek, put her on her sleep mask, and said, "Good night," and she curled into the side next to him. Wanda and Cindy started to snore almost simultaneously. Cindy, almost wearing blats, landed in same ear she shrieked into a few minutes before. This time, Bob shifted Cindy into his arms, but she didn't immediately transfer her to the trundle bed. He just sat there, holding his daughter, and listened to his family rumbling snores. Beyond the snores, the noises of the nighttime forest reached out to Bob's senses. That, combined with the tender sweetness of the family snuggling close, eased the remaining tension in his body. Nighttime in the forest was actually one of the things he'd been okay with about this trip. He remembered lying in his sleeping bag next to his dad, under the stars, listening to the crickets. Ever since then, nature's night sounds had soothed them. Bob tried to hear the crickets now, but all they could hear was Cindy's little plopping splurt flurbs in his ear. That was okay, too. Wait, was that an owl? Bob listened hard. Yes, an owl hooted, not so far from the cabin. Bob's dad, a nature and animal lover, was interested in animal symbolism. He taught Bob that owls were often seen as harbingers of death, and they also be portents of renewal and rebirth. What message did this owl have for Bob? Bob didn't know, but he didn't know these cherished moments holding Cindy would have convinced himself that he had good things in his life. He could talk himself into all is well mentality he wanted to live out every day. Suddenly, Bob stiffened. The image of an orange bunny with a white and black checked vest flitted through his mind. Ralpho! Oh man, Bob whispered. He had signed up for his family for a cruel prank. He was probably going to traumatize Cindy for life. Listening to the snoring concert going on around him, Bob thought about how upset his wife and kids always were when they were waking abruptly. Doing that on purpose wasn't the nicest thing in the world. No, tell the truth, Bob. He berated himself. The truth that was signing up his family with Bunny Call was cruel. What have you been thinking? He had been thinking about it himself. But now he was about to be peacefully sleeping wife and kids. However put upon his might feel on his trip, taking it on them was injustice at all. It was selfish and childish. He sighed. Well, it's too late now. Hopefully the bunny call won't be too bad. Bob inclined away from his wife and carefully placed Cindy in his trundle bed. When he put on his own earplugs and lay back in the pillow. In spite of his exhaustion, he lay there a long time before he fell asleep. Bob sat up in his bed, crawled in at his earplugs, digging them frantically from his ears, and he felt his heart hammer against his ribcage like he was desperate to get out. Sweat glued his gray t-shirt and boxer shorts to his body. What in the world? Usually Bob didn't sleep all that well, but he wasn't prone to panic attacks or night sweats, so what woke him up? He looked around the cabin. Was everything okay? It seemed to be. His wife and kids were snoring in a strangely endearing harmony of buzzing and honking tones. The door were closed, but through the opening window he could hear the peaceful sounds of which he'd fallen asleep. Nothing appeared to be amiss. Bob tried to calm his breathing, but it wouldn't slow down. He concentrated to try to remember what he'd been dreaming before Ralpho. That was what he'd been dreaming about. He'd been dreaming about Ralpho. Obviously his guilt had followed him into his sleep. Bob took a deep breath and got out of bed. He grabbed the pen light and his key ring. Bob used the pen light to find a safe passage past the end of the truffle bed, and a few feet across the floor of the bathroom. There, he closed the door and turned on the light over the sink. He looked at himself in the mirror. Still the same Bob, or was he? This Bob looked a little feral. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair stuck out. His mouth had wretched into a wide grimace. His Bob looked like he made a deal with the devil. Had he? Bob snorted and shook his head. He noticed his eyebrows were getting too bushy. In the last year or so, Bob had started losing hair on top of his head, and he started growing hair where he didn't want any extra. Now how was that fair? Or forget fair, it was a purpose that it served. Leaning over the sink, Bob ran a cool water and splashed his face. While his family continued to snore, he thought about Ralpho again. He woke at a watch. It was 11:50 p.m. He barely slept before he woke up. Did not bode well with the good night's sleep. Just over 5 hours before Ralpho would show up. How could Bob follow it off? If he could, how would he do it? Were the camp counselors available during the night? Yes, he remembered. The cabins had no phones. And Camp Athena had no cell phone coverage. But an idle flip through the rulebook had revealed that every cabin was equipped with a large bell you could use to signal for help in case of an emergency. Bob didn't think this bell ringing emergency. In fact, he was pretty sure the ringing bell would cancel the bunny call. They'd kick him out of the camp. Then again, Bob shook his head. He wasn't going to humiliate his family by ringing an emergency bell to cancel a prank. Even it might get him out of the so-called vacation. Besides, if he did that, they'd know they'd set it up. Bob leaned over the sink again and slurped some water, straightened his wipe into his mouth. He decided he was making way too much out of a silly prank. Ralpho was just some kid in a rabbit suit, right? All Ralpho would do is scare the kids a little, annoy his wife, and that would be that. No big deal. Wasn't part of parenting getting his kids ready for big bad world. If they could undone any of the noisy old rabbit, how do they have any hope of surviving the real world battles, like those Bob faced every day? Bob nodded himself in the mirror and turned off the bathroom light. He convinced himself that the bunny call would be good for the kids. Bob was doing this for the kids' favor. And Wanda? Well, Wanda was a big girl, and she could handle it. And if not well, she'd drag him into the absurd place. A little payback wouldn't be so bad, would it? Bob nodded again, and headed back to bed. Bob lay on this side in the dark, but now much time had passed since the time he checked. He pressed the button on the side of his watch, and the tiny light revealed digital numbers informing him the mere 19 minutes had passed since he last compulsively checked the time. And before that 19 minutes, it had been 23 minutes. Before that, it had been 33 minutes. Before that, it had been 37 minutes. Before that, it was 49 minutes. If he kept this pattern, he'd be waking up every couple of minutes within the next half hour. Approximately 2 hours and 40 minutes of thrashing in bed and opening his eyes to check his watch. That a great night Bob was having. Apparently, he didn't believe all those rational arguments in favor of the bunny call. Bob closed his eyes and tried to get back to sleep. Sure enough, the next time he looked at his watch, 13 minutes had passed. Even 7, now 3. It had been getting close to 3 a.m. 2 more hours. 1.5 hours. 1 hour. A half hour. 15 minutes. 5 minutes. His eyes felt like something had been trying to scrape his way out since the irises all night long. Bob looked around the cabin, but he only saw a lot of blackness. At home, the house was never this dark. Their home had exterior lights, and the subdivision had street lights. Athena's cabins had no exterior lights because, according to the cabin's brochure, it would ruin the nature experience. Wanda had brought a night light from home, but the boys refused to let her plug it in. It would ruin the nature experience, Mom, they'd said in unison before laughing uproariously. And so Cabinetta was nothing but a featureless void. If it wasn't for the sounds of his family snores, Bob would have convinced himself he was alone in a vacuum. Bob held very still and listened. Well, was Ralpho on the move, or was he someplace? Was he right outside the cabin? Bob let his arm hair stand up and quiver in the dark. Wuss, he whispered. He wished he could hear something other than snoring. Ralpho would be right outside of the door, and Bob wouldn't know it until the door started to open. Bob fumbled for the pen light and aimed it at the cabin door. He let out his breath. Okay, good. He could see what was coming now. So what now? So now what? Should he just wait there for Ralpho to burst in and scare his family half to death? What kind of dad did that? Bob threw back the covers and got up. Wanda snorted and turned over. Cindy made a noise that sounded like a chortle. Bob shone his light on the door again. Should he check outside? Yes, you idiot, he told himself. Standing there in the dark wasn't accomplishing anything. Bob crossed a chest of drawers between the bed and window on the right side of the cabin. He felt around in the top drawer of the pair of sweats. Finding them, he pulled them on, and he went to the cabin door and slipped on the sandals that were neatly lined up in a row of smaller sandals against the wall. He opened the door, tensing himself as he half expected to be smacked upside the head with a cymbal. But the cabin's small porch was empty. Bob looked at the blackness that surrounded Cabinetta. He glanced up at the sky. No moon, no stars. Apparently the clouds had come back, but what good were they at night? And where was that rain? It didn't matter. He was distracting himself from the matter at hand. Resisting the urge to turn on his pen light, Bob let his eyes adapt to the dark. It didn't take long for him to be able to pick out shapes. He could see vague outlines of the nearest tree cabins. He could also see vertical pattern of the woods and the edge of the camp between two of the cabins. A handful of distorted shapes baffled Bob until he remembered a rustic playground was situated there. Bob saw a small spark of light in the playground area. He rose. Was that Ralpho? What if that was Ralpho using a pen light like Bob's? Bob strained to see in the dark. When he realized he was looking at a growing end of a cigarette. Good. Rabbits don't smoke. Bob contained a burst of laughter. But rabbits didn't smoke. Was Cabinetta really making him nuts? Ralpho wasn't a real rabbit. Bob watched a minuscule circle of light. It rose and lowered a couple times. When Bob realized it would just make out an outline of a man. A man, not a rabbit. Closing the cabin door behind him, Bob stepped out of the cabin's porch, headed across the 100 feet or so from the cabin to the lit cigarette. The early morning air was cool and heavy with a thickly sweet scent of the woods and the fresh scent of recently cut grass. Dew moistened Bob's toes as he walked away from the snore-ridden cabin. Bob could hear night sounds more clearly. Crickets were industriously chirping. We also heard the rustle and crack of tree branches bending to the will of the wind that were apparently starting blowing during the night. As Bob heard the tiny flicker of light, he heard the man's feet shuffle against the rocky ground and then a long sigh. Hello there, Bob called out softly. The tiny light jerked. Sorry to startle you, I couldn't sleep. Bob listened to the man suck in smoke and then expel it. The smell of ethanol made Bob's nostrils twitch. Me neither, the smoker said unnecessarily. A flashlight flicked on, and the smoker shined a beam of light on his own face. It made the smoker look sinister, especially with smoke pouring out of his nose. But Bob could tell this guy was probably pretty normal looking in the daytime. He had a thick head of light-colored hair, and he had might be blue eyes. The eyes, though, looked sad. Bob flicked on his pen light and shined it on his own face. He chuckled. Not our best sides, huh? The smoker appeared to smile. It was hard to tell. The macabre effect of the flashlight turned the smile into a sneer. I'm Bob. Bob offered his hand. Philip. Philip took his last drag of his cigarette and punched it out between two fingers before taking Bob's hand and shaking it. Bob felt a little intimidated by the pinching a lit cigarette move, but he told himself to grow up. Aiming his light around, he saw that Philip was leaning against the end of a swing set. Bob was tempted to take a seat in one of the swings, and he'd feel even more like a little boy than he already did. You signed up for the bunny call too? Philip asked. Bob's breathing stuttered like a guttering candle. He had to run his tongue around his side of his mouth before answering. Yeah. Philip flicked his lighter on and off and stuffed it in his pocket. Probably not my best decision. His expression seemed a little severe for his situation, didn't it? I've been awake most of the night thinking about it, Bob admitted. He looked at his watch. What's the time? Philip asked. It's 5:08, Bob said. Why doesn't time crawl when things are going right? Philip asked. Bob didn't answer. What was the point? So he stood in the dark with Philip and listened to the wind. He also listened to the tickling of an imaginary clock. It ticked louder than a real clock Bob had ever heard. Ralpho had showed up at any minute. The men listened and waited. Bob's intestines felt like battling serpents flailing around the inside of his belly. Bob was seconds from throwing up, but he managed to get himself under control. The serpent slid back down his gut, but it didn't stop writhing. My mom collected stuff, Bob said. Philip shifted in unexpected words. His back shoved against the swing set. Bob was surprised too. He didn't know he was going to say out loud what he was thinking about. Since he started, though, he figured he'd finish. It was better than hanging out there waiting for an orange rabbit with anxiety ate him alive from the inside. Her favorite collectibles were baskets and china teacups. An image of Bob's mother filled his mind. His mom had been old school and very feminine. She always wore pastel slacks and floral silk blouses, even on house cleaning day. She always tried to be the perfect wife. She kind of spoiled Bob, if he was being honest. He thought he'd have a life like his dad's. He'd come home from work, put his feet up, and read the paper. Talk about culture shock. Not that Wanda wasn't a great wife. Bob remembered he was telling a story. She kept her most prized baskets on the top hutch in the dining room, and the teacups were atop of the sideboard that was next to the hutch. Bob paused and listened to the wind. That was the wind, wasn't it? And then nothing appeared of the night. He continued. One day, I thought it would be fun to try to see if I could throw my basketball up into one of their baskets. I have no idea what seemed like a good idea. I was 9. Philip didn't say anything. A sense of urgency Bob had felt since he got out of bed suddenly multiplied tenfold. He rushed on into the story. So I tossed the ball up in the perfect arc. I've been practicing, and it lands in the biggest basket. I'm jumping around like I won a tournament, making all the crowd noises, whooping and cheering. Then the ball starts to tip the basket. The basket starts to go over. It happens in super slow motion, like a millionth of an inch per few seconds, or at least that's how it seems. And then the basket was on its side. The ball was on its way past the other baskets and down in the side of the hutch. I could see what's going to happen, and in motion immediately, but there's no way I can stop it. The ball comes down and lands on the sideboard, scattering Mom's teacups all over the place. But one of them broke. Mom was devastated. Bob stopped and cleared his throat. Once I made a decision, the rest of it was out of control. He shook his head. I think I made a decision like that today with the bunny call. A loud, half baying, half yelp cry sound in the distance. Bob and Philip whirled around. Was it the wind or something else? Philip coughed, cleared his throat, and said in a smoke-abraded voice, My mom died when I was 5. I hardly remember her, but I remember how my dad was before she died. He was a great dad. Taught me how to throw a ball, always showed me what he was working on when he fixed stuff, read me stories at night. But then after my mom died, my dad... Philip paused and his keen sound sliced through the camp and speared both men. Bob's muscles were taut in fear and dread. Bob didn't think Phil was going to finish the story, but suddenly Philip said, My dad got lost. He just got lost. He couldn't do anything for me anymore. He was all about himself. He turned into a horrid dad. Philip pushed off the swing set. He powered on his flashlight. Philip turned and looked at Bob in the eye. I've become just like him. Before Bob could respond, Philip turned off his flashlight and walked away, the night plucking him in Bob's reality and depositing him someplace beyond his senses. Bob was left standing alone before knowledge that anyone could ever have. That's enough, Bob said. He was going to stop the bunny call. Bob headed off into the wood, going in a general direction. He thought of where the last 2 sounds originated, the same direction as the lodge. Maybe someone would be there, someone who would find Ralphie and cancel the Mackenzie bunny call. It was 100 yards or so from the lodge, but yet it felt much farther as Bob attempted to follow, using only a small pen light. The gravel-covered path, so heavy forested, past darkened cabins. He started at a walk, but then he quickly shifted to a jog, hoping he would trip on a root or errant ball or an oar. He couldn't afford to waste time. Ralphie could show up at the cabin nut at any minute. For all Bob knew, Ralphie could be there now. When Bob broke into the last stand of trees at the edge of the open area in front of the lodge, his shoulders sagged. The lodge was completely dark. It was so dark that it looked abandoned. It was crazy, of course. Someone had to be in there. Bob hesitated in the middle of the dew-drenched, slopping lawn. Should he pound on the lodge doors and wake someone up? The squall echoed through the trees. Bob wiped around and looked at the back path where he'd come down. He stopped thinking and simply went into action. Jogging again, he retraced his steps until he was halfway to his cabin. His family. Then he heard a scuttling sound that froze intestinal serpents and turned his spine to ice. Was that Ralphie? Bob aimed a narrow beam of the pen light into the underbush on the side of the path. A pale white light landed in the dropping leaves of the wild rhododendron. The plant seemed to be trembling. Surely Bob was just imagining that. Of course he was. The wind was just stirring the slick green leaves. Or was it the wind? The leaves weren't moving in the direction that made any sense. An abrupt explosion of snaps and crackles stirred in the rustling that seemed to move right away at the right angle to the path. Without thinking of the consequences, Bob veered to the path and dove into the thick vegetation. He followed the sounds. Pop, crinkle, ting. What was that sound? Bob, abruptly losing balance, he threw a hand out and catch himself and scraped his palm in the rough bark. He turned off his pen light. He listened. There it was again, barely there, a slightly metallic rattle. Was it a cymbal? Trying to make as little noise as possible, Bob started moving again, following the sounds. They moved steadily away from him, heading for the edge of the camp, heading in the direction of Cabinetta. Not necessarily to Cabinetta, but there was at least 5 other cabins around Cabinetta. Yeah, keep telling yourself that, Bob thought as he tracked the sounds through the forest. He was moving by few now, afraid to turn on the pen light again. He had his insane idea that Ralpho was messing with him, playing a scary game of hide and seek. What was Bob dealing with? Was it a camp counselor in a sense of humor, or an animatronic with its circuits crossed, or something more treacherous than either of those? Bob forced his brain to power down thinking centers and focused only on keeping his body in motion. He concentrated there on putting his feet. He plowed through the forest the way Wanda mowed through shoppers after Christmas sales. He had one goal: stop the orange rabbit. He would not be deterred from that goal. But wait, Bob halted in the massive cedar. He listened and listened. He heard nothing. Absolutely nothing. Imagine all the sounds he thought he heard. Or was Ralpho done playing with Bob? What if Ralpho was getting close to Cabinetta? What if he was already there? Bob thrashed back to the path and then he turned on his pen light to illuminate his way. Then he ran flat out. Bob had run since he was in football team in high school. He jogged some, but he never stuck with it. So when he reached the cabin, he could hardly breathe. All he could do was open the door and fall inside. Once there, he firmly shut the door, slid the door, his legs played out in front of him. He heaved in the air into the oxygen and depleted lungs. He was making so much sucking and gasping noise, he was nearly drowning out his family snores. Nearly, but not quite. The import of that hit him. They were still sleeping. All is well. Bob looked at his watch. It's only 5:25 a.m. Bob frowned. How is that possible? It felt like he'd been running around the forest for an hour at least. Bob shrugged. It didn't matter. What mattered was he was there, and Ralpho wasn't. The door behind Bob's back vibrated when a knock sounded. Bob whimpered. He stayed very still. Maybe if no one answered the door, Ralpho would go away. Another knock, this one louder. Bob got to his knees. He waited. Another knock, more insistent. Okay, playing possum wasn't going to work. Pretty soon Ralpho would be pounding on the door and he would wake up Bob's whole family. Wasn't that what he was trying to stop? Bob turned, grasped the knob, and opened the door a few inches. He looked out. All he could do not to scream. Ralpho had been startling to behold across the huge lobby of the lodge. Close up, Ralpho was plain alarming. Taking a half step back, Bob braced for 1 foot behind the door, held the door knob firmly, and blocked the opening with his body. Bob looked up at Ralpho's face. Yes, up. Too far up. Ralpho was over 6.5 feet tall, just to the top of his head. His ears went another foot or so. And speaking of his head, it was a disturbingly big head, almost the size of one of those exercise balls Wanda liked to sit on. Bob forced himself not to look away from Ralpho's eyes, not long enough as the unsettling bright pink. Ralpho gazed down at Bob and waited. Ralpho? Bob's voice crackled like he was barely older than Tyler. He cleared his throat and tried to go. Ralpho, I respectfully request that we cancel our bunny call. Ralpho didn't move. I'm sorry you came all the way out here, Bob continued, and I appreciate your time, but I haven't decided the bunny call isn't the best thing for my family. Ralpho was immutable. So, like I said, Bob bowed ahead. With all due respect, we don't need your services. Bob held his breath. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds. Ralpho slowly nodded, turned, and headed down the steps of Catanetta. Bob shut the door, locked it, and leaned against it. Sighing deeply, tears filled his eyes. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been so relieved. It was over. He'd be able to fix his mistake after all. Bob sank to the floor again. He sat and listened to snores, and made a mental note to record these sounds before he slept at Tina. He might start using them to de-stress. Bob? Bob turned his head faster and he smacked it against the door. He heard Wanda shift on a double bed. Where are you? Wanda asked. Over here. Bob turned his pen light and heaved himself to his feet. Why are you up? I'm not sure. Bob didn't shine his light at Wanda to see how his answer went over. He was hoping he was still mostly asleep. Wanda's brain generally didn't turn on fully until she was awake for a couple hours. Could you aim your light at the bathroom? No need to turn on my light too. What time is it? Blankets and sheets rustled. The old box springs under the double mattress squeaked. Bob checked his watch again. It's 5:28. She lamed his light out in front of Wanda. It lit up enough room so you could see her sleep mask pushed up on the top of her head. She didn't look his way, which was a good thing because she had no idea how to explain why he was standing in front of the cabin door. It's early to get up, she said. Absolutely. Bob heard what sound shuffling footsteps outside the cabin door. His breath caught. He tilted his head to listen. Listen. Was it just a pine cone blowing across the porch? Maybe it was that. That was that. Wanda went to the bathroom and closed the door. No light showed under the door. He heard her doing her thing, and he heard the shuffling again. Shift, poof, shift, poof, shift, poof. It was too rhythmic to be a pine cone. Was Ralpho back? Bob pressed back against the door. He couldn't have said why. Leaning on the door wouldn't prevent Ralpho from knocking, and if Ralpho knocked while Wanda was awake, the jig was up. Wanda came out of the bathroom and gazed steady and illuminated path in Bob's penlight. He didn't even look at him. Going back to sleep, Wanda said. Coming? Be right there, Bob said. I hope, he thought. Outside the door, he came closer. Shift, poof, shift, poof, shift, poof. Bob turned into a statue. He had no idea what he would do. Wanda got back in bed. Light, he said. She flicked off his pen light and heard her plump in her pillow. She exhaled in contentment. Something thudded softly against the door behind him. The door moved slightly. Bob shoved his back more firmly in the smooth wood. Wanda's snores joined the kid's snores. Next, Bob's hip, the doorknob jiggled. What the heck? Bob jumped back in the door and shined his pen light at the knob. He reached a hand out, preparing to grab the knob, fling the door open, and asked Ralph or whoever was out there what he, she, or it thought they were doing. Before he could touch the knob, though, he felt something like a static shock. Just a faint charge on the end of his fingertips. Bob knew it was a warning. He just knew it. Bob, opening the door would be a very bad idea. Bob frowned. What? That was ridiculous. He was losing his marbles. Yes, someone was outside the door. Someone was trying to the knob. But that something was either Ralph or another camper. Bob could handle either, or could he? A metallic scratching sound came from the door. Bob bent over and listened. Someone was trying to pick the lock. Goosebumps erupted in Bob's bare arms. Ralph or someone was trying to break into the cabin. What should he do? Bob looked around wildly. What did he need? A phone? No phones here. The bell. No, that wouldn't work. The bell was outside. It was outside and it was at the bottom of the porch. Bob would have to get past whoever was trying to break in to get to the bell. A lot of good an emergency bell was. A weapon. Bob needed a weapon. He swept the cabin with his light. Of course, it held no traditional weapons. No guns, no knives, no swords. It was a summer camp, not boot camp, and not even a bat. His kids hadn't signed up for softball. His light landed on a tennis racket and fishing pole as Bob swallowed down a hysterical giggle when his brain offered up an image of him fighting off an orange rabbit with a tennis racket in one hand and a fishing pole in the other. Bob heard a clink and a clink. A click and a click. Well, he had to do something. Grabbing one of the ladder back chairs tucked around the table, Bob tilted it and shoved it under the doorknob, just in time. The door started to open, but it caught against the chair. Bob started the chair at the door. He held his breath. Something thumped against the door, and the door moved inward an inch. Shoving the chair across the smooth wood floor, Bob jammed the chair harder under the knob, and it held in place. This stopped the door's movement, but by now it was open 2 inches. Breathing fast, Bob shined his light into the gap. He leaned over to get a better look. The tip of the furry orange paw tried to slide through the opening. Bob jumped back. It was the same time he hissed. Go away, I said I wanted to cancel the bunny call. Ralph didn't seem to care what Bob wanted. He moved his paw back and forth through the door opening. Several seconds, Bob prodded at Ralph's paw with the pen light, trying to push the paw back through the door. But Ralph tried to grab the pen light. Bob snatched the light back and then hit Ralph's paw with it. The paw wiggled a little, but didn't leave the opening. So Bob punched Ralph's paw as hard as he could with his fist. Pain shot through Bob's knuckles, and he saw something dark and moist appear from the orange paw. Before Bob could figure out what he was looking at, though, the paw retreated in 2-inch space. Bob took a deep breath and let it out. Okay, maybe Ralph wouldn't go away now. Bob checked the time. It was 5:36. Surely Ralph would just give up and visit other cabins with standing bunny calls. Bob wondered if he could go back to bed. His eyes felt like they were full of broken glass. How would he take part in activities for a full day with no sleep? A whump sounded from the other picture window. Bob whirled in that direction. Ralph didn't try to come through the window, would he? Bob quickly aimed a pen light at the large rectangular glass covered opening on the side of the table and chairs. He sucked in his breath when his light caught a shadow of a large misshapen head. Oh, no, Bob whispered as he leaped over the window, and it was locked, wasn't it? The window started to open. No, apparently it wasn't locked. Or it was locked and Ralph had managed to unlock it. Or locks were irrelevant to Ralph, and it was just irrelevant as Bob's request that Ralph go away. The window opened farther, and an orange paw reached through, and then an ear. Why don't you just stand there and watch? That's a good plan, Bob. Bob's sarcastic self-talk made a point. He needed to move, so he did. But his lunge for one of the tennis rackets leaned against the wall. He cut himself some slack. It was, after all, reasonable and dumbfounded in the presence of a furry orange intruder. Both of Ralph's ears did most of an arm were through. The window by the time Bob started being on the ears and an arm of the tennis racket. Careful to avoid missing the rabbit and hitting the window, Bob's offensive thwacks were relatively quiet. His family snores didn't stop, neither did Ralpho, apparently the impervious to the blows. Ralpho kept reaching into the cabin. Get out, Bob whispered. Ralpho didn't respond. Bob looked at Ralpho's paw, which was just a few inches from Bob's chest. The paw was covered in blood. What? Blood? Bob started pounding on the tennis racket. He shined his light on Ralpho, whose head was now coming farther into the cabin. Bob started into Ralpho's disquieting eyes. Are you okay? Bob asked. Ralpho stared back at Bob, but he didn't speak. Wasn't this just a guy in a freaky rabbit suit? Ralpho wasn't real, was he? Ralph had slid a little farther inside the cabin. Whatever Ralph was, Bob couldn't let him in, so Bob shifted the grip on the tennis racket instead of hitting Ralph more. He used the racket to shove at Ralph's erosion head. Grunting, he pushed against Ralph with all his might. For a few seconds, Ralph pushed back. It was a bizarre tug-of-war in reverse, but Bob thought it was about a sleeping family, and that gave him the extra oomph he needed. Ralph fell back out of the cabin. Bob quietly closed and locked the window. Realizing he was breathing loudly, he took a few seconds to get control of himself, blowing out a long muted breath. He was pleased when he no longer sounded like a train engine. How could Ralph be bleeding? If Ralph was a guy in a suit, why would he be willing to get injured to pull off a prank? Up until now, Bob's logical brain had been trying to tell him the effort was expecting to keep Ralph out of the cabin beyond preposterous. Whoever was wearing or running Ralph was being persistent. Yes, but it was probably just some part of outrageous joke. Betina's staff played on anyone with the audacity to try to stop the bunny call. Some sense in urgency, with his conviction that he was battling a truly dangerous foe, was more than likely all in his head. But the bleeding Ralph could put a serious crimp in Bob's theory. What if Ralph really did want to get inside the cabin and hurt Bob and his family? Maybe Bob was losing his mind, but then again, maybe not. The door on the left side of the cabin started to slide open. Bob moaned. He'd forgotten. Wanda had opened that window. Bob charged over the window just as Ralph's bleeding orange paw began reaching through the opening. Bob slapped the window closed, catching an intruding paw, and the paw bled more heavily, and it moved, reaching Bob and snatched up the tackle box hidden under the window and slammed the paw into the box. The contents of the box scattered and the noise made Bob pause. The paw curled back toward the window, and Bob opened the window just enough to thrust the paw back outside in the end of the tackle box. He pushed the window closed and locked it. Bob shined his penlight around the cabin again. What would Ralph do next? Come on, think, Bob admonished itself. Thinking, though, it was a bad idea. If he thought he would have to face the fact that it really was Ralph, very determined Ralph, willing to bleed to reach his goal, trying to get in the cabin, what else would he want? Bob certainly did not want to think about that. Right now, every one of his instincts was telling him to keep Ralph out of any cost. It was going beyond trying to stop Ralph from scaring his wife and kids. This is about stopping Ralph, period. Bob would have explained what was going on, even if someone had put a gun to his head and demanded he explain himself. But he would just knew that there would be horrible consequences if Ralph did get inside of the cabin. Bob tilted his head and listened. He realized that he had no idea where Ralph was. Was Ralph still outside? Was his window, or had he moved into a different one? Bob had perfectly still again and listened some more. At first, he heard nothing. He checked his watch. It was 5:43. 17 minutes to go, Bob whispered. And one more window Ralph would get through. Why was Bob just standing there? Outside, a rhythmic shuffling moved past the cabin door. Shift, poof, shift, poof, shift, poof. The sound was moving away from Bob. Ralph was heading toward another window, the one right next to the double bed where Wanda slept. Bob knew he was sure to get the next window was locked, but he was rooted to the floor. Shift, poof, shift, poof, shift, poof, shift, poof. Ralph was almost to the edge of the front porch without to turn the corner. Bob moved. He ran through the cabin as lightly as he could, passing his sleepy little wife and daughter. Just as he reached the window, it started to move. Bob grated the edge of the window and tried to close it. Ralph kept trying to open it. Bob stuffed his penlight through his pocket and used both hands to force the window closed. He concentrated on keeping his breathing even and shallow. He didn't even let himself grunt and groan in exertion. He just pushed the window closed while Ralph pushed the window open. Stalemate. How long did Bob stand there and straining and close the window? It felt like hours, maybe days. Bob's muscles began to spasm. It felt like biceps were filled with a liquid fire spreading upward in his shoulders. He wanted to scream in pain and frustration. Bob, outside, faint pre-dawn light was pushing away through the blackness. Bob could make out Ralph's gargantuan head and ears. Bob was just inches from the adversary. Only a window glass separated them. Window glass and Bob's determination to protect his family. Bob closed his eyes and gave the effort everything he had. Suddenly, the window slid shut, the snick of it wrenching into place, seeming impossibly loud. Wanda stirred, but she didn't wake up. Weakly, Bob locked the window. Then, he dropped his arms and shook them out. He felt like they turned into a pair of Cindy's flimsy jump ropes. Stepping away from his beds, Bob wiped the seat covering his face. He felt a ludicrous sense of accomplishment. A bump in the clatter came from underneath the cabin. Ralph had moved on. Bob pulled out his penknife from his pocket and aimed for the floor. The trap door! Bob ran over the trapdoor and stood on it. He immediately felt like an imbecile. His weight alone wasn't going to be enough to keep the trapdoor closed. At least, not if he was standing. Ralph could easily throw Bob off of balance by opening it. Would sitting on the trapdoor work? Bob sat down on the door. He listened to the bumps under the door. Growing ever closer, the closer they came, the more Bob thought about how big Ralph was. Bob wasn't a tiny guy, but he was pretty sure whoever was in Ralph's suit was strong enough to dislodge Bob from the trapdoor. And then what? What would he do now? He looked around, grasping the solution. His gaze landed on a chest of drawers. Jumping up and running across the chest, he gave it a tentative shove. It was heavy, but it slid easily. The only problem was that sliding around was noisy. Cindy's snores paused a second, then restarted. Bob's gaze darted around the cabin. Think. He spotted the quilt lying folded up in the end of the trundle bed. He mentally thanked Cindy for playing with it. If he hadn't, he probably would have noticed it. Grabbing the quilt, he lay on the ground. Another bump and a scuffle from under the cabin. Ralpho was almost to the trap door. Bob tilted the chest toward him, so it leaned on its side. He let it all the way down to the floor on the top of the quilt. Then he bent over, grabbing the edge of the quilt, and he started dragging the chest toward the trap door as fast as he could. The trap door started to open. Bob jumped on the door. He closed with a snap that made Bob wince, but he snorting around him continued. He leaned back over, grabbing the quilt's edges, hauling the chest toward him as fast as he could. The trapdoor started to rise under his feet again. Quickly, he backed off of it and pulled the chest onto the door. Then, he turned the chest onto its back. He sat on it. The chest started to buck, and Bob felt like he was on some silent, malevolent amusement park ride. It was a combined weight of Bob and the chest of drawers going to be enough. The chest buckled again, and Bob was nearly thrown off. He gripped both sides of the chest and hung on. Bob had never ridden a bull or a mechanical bull, and he wondered if this was like this. His head kept getting yanked around, and he'd have whiplash soon if Ralpho didn't stop, but Ralpho did stop. Scuffling sounds in the cabin moved away from the trapdoor and outside wall. Bob slumped on the chest. Now, was it over? Bob checked his watch. It was 5:56. 4 minutes. Just 4 minutes. Bob listened closer to the swishing and tapping sounds under the cabin. Ralpho was almost out from under the building. His whole family was still snoring. The Wanda shifted in bed. Any kind of kids would wake up soon, and Bob didn't want to leave the chest lying in the middle of the floor. Another few seconds of listening, Bob convinced himself Ralpho was no longer under the cabin. So he quickly pulled the chest back in the wall, right in it. He made a half-hearted attempt to fold the quilt and dropped it in the end of the bed. Then Bob thought about Ralpho's bleeding paws. Did any blood get inside the cabin, like on the tennis racket or tackle box? Bob decided he didn't want to look. Instead, he trotted to the fridge and pulled off some paper towels and a roll Wanda had put on top. He quickly wiped down both tennis racket and tackle box. Plus, he wiped down the windows and the floor beneath each one. Now, wanting very much to climb into bed himself, Bob waited. His instincts were telling him he needed to stay alert. But why? The cabin was secure. Ralpho was retreating. A sudden rap dragged against the back of the cabin. The back of the cabin? What was Ralpho doing there? Nothing was back there. No, wait, the loft window. Bob's stomach and heart switched places. He forgot all about the loft window. Clamping his pen light to his teeth, Bob climbed the ladder up to the loft as fast as he could. Even though every step raised the dread meter higher, he only didn't want to climb up to the loft at all. If Ralpho was up there, Bob didn't know he already could handle it. But he had to. After all, his boys were also in the loft. When Bob had reached the top of the ladder, he hesitated. Then he took a deep, shaky breath. He shined a light at the window in the far wall and peered up into the loft. Bob's light revealed upper half of Ralpho already through the window. Bob let out a choked cry. Thankfully, the astonishment cut off at the sound of the throat, and his boy snored on. Gaping at Ralpho, Bob momentarily paralyzed. His situation was so far beyond anything his mind could process. He felt utterly and thoroughly shut down. All Bob could do was stare. But he had to move. He had to keep Ralpho away from his family. Why did he just keep gawking? And suddenly Ralpho paused in his climb through the window. He gazed back to Bob, and neither of them made a sound. Bob trembled and clutched his loft ladder so hard his hands throbbed. Outside, a dog arrived, and the light shined through Ralpho's orange head, making him look for an instant like some sort of supernova monster. Bob was super glued to the ladder. He listened to his own uneven breathing, and Ralpho began backing out of the window. Ralpho retreated completely from the cabin. His head dropped below the level of the window. Then, silence. Silence all around. Bob closed his eyes, dropped his head to the top step of the loft ladder. Dad? Abruptly, the cabin was filled with an intense white light. The luminous instruction of the consciousness felt so invasive that Bob blinked several times and tried to figure out where he was. It felt like he had been transported to another otherworldly place. Bob squinted. He recognized the wide-eyed face of his sleep-rumpled son. "What are you doing?" Aaron asked. He stood underneath a pull-up string and exposed light bulb that now lit up the loft. Everything cascaded back into place. The bunny call, Ralpho, Bob's frenzied determination stopped the threat in his family. "What time is it?" Bob asked. "Huh? The time." Aaron picked up his cell phone from his nightstand. Really, the only function their phones had out here was a clock. "It's 6, Aaron said. Tears filled Bob's eyes. "Dad?" Aaron repeated. "What are you doing?" Bob ignored him. Now Tyler was sitting up, rubbing his eyes. "Mama up?" Cindy's high-pitched voice demanded down below the loft. "Dad, why are you hanging on to the ladder?" Tyler asked. He threw back his covers and shifted the edge of the bed. Bob didn't know how he could move. He felt like all his muscle had left his body, but he couldn't say where he was. He didn't have the strength. So up or down? Up was closer. Bob climbed the rest of the way into the loft. Without answering Tyler's question, because he didn't know how to answer it. Bob collapsed next to Tyler. He motioned for Aaron to join him. Looking at his father as if he'd grown a second head, Aaron slowly crossed to Tyler's bed. Bob had his face next to his hip, and Aaron frowned but sat down. Tyler and Aaron exchanged a look. Then Bob reached around the back of the boys' necks and pulled them both close. He dropped his arms around their shoulders, and then he squeezed them a long, tight hug. He wanted to say something. He was too emotional to talk. He just wanted to hold on to his boys, his precious boys, for as long as, Dad, you're kind of squeezing the life out of us, Tyler said. Bob let up the hug, but didn't let them go. He cleared his throat and got his voice to work. I love you guys, he said, so much. He looked at both of them in turn. Both boys had creases on their cheeks from their night's sleep. Their eyes were crusty, and they had sour morning breath. Bob didn't care. They were his sons. They were perfect. You know how much I love you, right? He asked them. Tyler and Aaron looked at each other again. Yeah, Aaron said. Yeah, Tyler agreed. We love you too, Dad, Aaron said. A click came from the cabin's first floor, and more light blasted through the little building. Wanda was up. Bob, what are you doing up there? Wanda's scratchy early morning voice sounded wonderfully normal. Come on, boys, Bob said. The boys didn't move when Bob got up, but Bob grinned at them before heading down the ladder. What a wonderful morning. It was great to be alive. At the bottom of the ladder, Bob turned toward the double bed and scooped up the daughter from it. Cindy Lee, my buzzy honeybee, he exclaimed before buzzing in her little ear. Cindy immediately began giggling hysterically. Then he put her arms straight out on her sides and instructed, Fly, Daddy, fly. Bob happily picked her up and ran her around the room with her yelling, Zoom goes the buzzy honeybee, zoom, zoom, buzz, buzz, zoom, zoom, buzz, buzz, Cindy repeated, and then he let loose a high-pitched squeal of glee. Bob, Wanda said, and then standing in the bed in bright yellow silk pajamas, her hands on her hip. What? He asked. Something weird's going on. What makes you say that? Wanda frowned. I have no idea. She shook her head. I must have been having a strange dream. Cindy squealed again. Wanda looked at her daughter, and Bob, her mouth dropped open, her eyes widened. A bright light in the cabin brought out the reddest strands of Wanda's hair. Bob couldn't remember ever being more beautiful. He flew his fuzzy honeybee over his wife and engulfed both his wife and daughter in a long, tight hug. I love you, I love you, I love you, he declared while Cindy said, Buzz, buzz. And Wanda said, What's going on? Bob didn't answer her. He just squeezed. Be skish, Cindy said. Ow. Bob released them. He looked at their gorgeous faces, flushed and smiling. Immediately, Wanda's smile was tentative. It was a mix of what appeared to be confusion, and he was smiling. Daddy pee-pee, Cindy said. Bob set his daughter down. Wanda took Cindy's hand and led her to the bathroom. The second Wanda and Cindy were in the bathroom, Bob looked around the cabin, checking his blood cleanup. He didn't clean anything he missed, and what he'd do in the paper towels he used. He checked his pockets, felt them there. But he didn't pull them up because Aaron and Tyler were coming down the ladder. Putting Ralph out of his mind, Bob hugged his boys again. They tolerated the hug for a few seconds until Tyler announced, I'm hungry. The bathroom door opened. Cindy, her arms straight out of her sides, started buzzing again. Bob reached out and grabbed Wanda by the hand and pulled her close. It's a beautiful day and we're together, and we have lots to do today, he said, spinning Wanda into a dance around the cabin. Wanda laughed. Who are you and what have you done with my husband? Then she gave up and wilded him to sweep her up into a dance. Heading to breakfast at the main lodge, Cindy skipped ahead, but Bob held tight to Wanda's hand. The sun was already ascending into a brilliant blue sky. The evergreens were bright green in the morning light, and they seemed to reaching around the sky, as if in celebration of a new day. Chickadees played in the forest undergrowth. Their free bee calls joined in the few chuck cries of the western bluebirds Bob could see flitting through the higher tree branches. A woodpecker started a rat-a-tat from a tree just out of view, and on a low-hanging branch near a trail, a chipmunk chattered, spick, 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 as it fluffed its tail. Bob felt like he and everything around him was going cartooned. It all felt too colorful, too cheerful, too, well, cartoony. After everything had happened the night before, he wouldn't have been surprised if the families around him broke into song. Campatino was hoping his morning as everything was heading to the lodge for breakfast. Kids were running and playing as they went. Aaron and Tyler raced off to join some new friends in a game that involved a lot of shouting. Today, the activity didn't bother Bob. He was still riding his high off of the profound relief. I take it you decided this place isn't so bad? Wanda asked. Bob grinned at her. There are worse places. Much worse, Bob thought 15 minutes later as he sat at the table with his family, eating his way through some of the thickest, tastiest pancakes he ever known. Wow, what is in these? He asked one of the camp employees who came by to top off his coffee. The perky gray-haired woman leaned over and whispered, The secret is cinnamon and vanilla, but don't tell anyone I told you. She grinned and bustled off. Breakfast was being served in the main dining room, which, like the main lobby of the lodge, had vaulted log ceiling and golden log walls. Bob appreciated that the room was filled with dozens of round tables so families could eat together instead of being forced to join everyone else's long communal tables. The only long table was the one in front of the room, and it seemed to be reversed from the cantina staff. Bob took another bite and watched his kids eat. Aaron and Tyler were stuffing as many pancakes in as they could, acting like they never had another chance to eat, ever. Cindy had both pancake and syrup mixed adorably all over her face. Around them, dozens of conversations filled the room, with a lively hum and blend with the clinks and clatters of silverware and stoneware. The air was sweet, with the aroma of maple and butter. Excuse me, a loud tink-tink-tink of the spoon hitting the side of the glass lowered the decibel level of the room far away. Can I have your attention, everyone? Bob and his family, and most of the other diners, looked toward the staff table. In the middle of it, a tall, tanned man with a beard waved to everyone. Over here, he called. Bob recognized him from the picnic and the campfire the night before. Talking died down. A few more rustling, murmuring gave way to silence. Everyone looked at the man. Remember me from last night? I'm Even, the owner of Campatina. I'm your host. I hope everyone had a good first night. Bob tensed up and kept a smile on his face. Most everyone else cheered. Good, Evan said. Okay, for your announcements. Bob prepared to zone out. He figured Wanda would let him know whenever he needed to know. First, Even said, regarding the bunny calls. Every cell in Bob's body went on high alert. He turned. My apologies to those who signed up for the bunny call, Even said. They should apologize, Bob thought. The bunny calls couldn't be done this morning because the counselor who usually does bunny calls overslept. Rafa wasn't able to make his rounds today. Bob stared at Evan. These are really great pancakes, Wanda said. Aren't they, Bob?
In the flesh.
You're so lucky. You just gotta sit around and play video games all day. If Matt had $1 for every time someone had said this to him, he actually could sit around and play video games all day instead of going into the office and working on developing the things. Game development was harder than people thought. It was a great job, the job Matt had always dreamed of back when he was a kid, pretending to be sick so he could stay home from school and make simple games on his family home computer. But there's a huge difference between working on games and playing them. Many parts of the process were exhilarating. That first burst of inspiration, when the idea came to you, the triumphant moment when you saw all your plans come to fruition. But between first inspiration and a final fulfillment, there were lots of opportunities for head-banging frustration and punching a fist through a wall rage. One small programming error could mess up the whole game, and backtracking to try to identify such an error was incredibly tedious. People who loved to play games often had their skills in gaming and gave them the skills to design games as well. But this wasn't any truer than thinking that since you know how to read a good book, you also knew how to write one. For now, Matt was eating, sleeping, and breathing his job. He had landed his role in creating and refining the AI in Springtrap's Revenge, a new cutting-edge virtual reality game that was the next installment in the popular Five Nights at Freddy's series. It was the most high-profile game he had ever worked on, and he knew it was going to be a tremendous hit. How could it not be? With the exciting combination of virtual reality and established Five Nights at Freddy's characters, the gamers already loved to fear. The early glitches of the game had been worked out, and now Matt was about to do what non-gamers assumed the only part of the job was. He was getting to play test the game. Matt secured a VR headset over his eyes and made sure the whole device fit him tightly. He was going in. There was a small wall on either side of him. These walls formed a dark hallway and the entrance of the maze. At this point, Matt could only see down the hall straight ahead. No entrances to the left or right were visible yet. Just as he was about to move forward, he saw a creation in the adversary, a large green rabbit, appear in the end of the hall and then to the exit to the left. Just because it was a rabbit didn't mean it was cute. Matt had always found humans in rabbit costumes creepy. It was evidenced by an old picture his mom had taken of him when he was 3 years old, screaming bloody murder in the lap of a blanky grinning Easter bunny at the mall. Springtrap, the rabbit in the game, was even scarier than the Uncanny Valley dwelling mall Easter bunny. This costume was so tattered that some of its mechanical parts were visible beneath the fabric, and better part of one ear was missing. His eyes were evil orbs that glowed green when it spotted its prey, and his grin was wide and ghastly. It was definitely a nightmare fuel, which was absolutely what Matt had intended for it to be. Matt was especially proud of his particular character. He wanted to make Springtrap the kind of horrifying character who would endure. Who would visit people's nightmares for generations to come, from Dracula to Hannibal Lecter. There was a kind of immortality in a truly horrifying creation, and somehow a bit of immortality touched the creator as well. Matt had done an exhaustive amount of research in developing the murderous rabbit. He watched dozens of classic horror movies studying the personalities of cold-blooded killers. He read books and articles on serial killers, about how the appetite for violence should only be sated for a little while until they had to choose another victim. The more Matt watched and read, the more he understood. For the killers who lived in people's imaginations, murder was just a source of joy, a means of self-expression, like painting for an artist, or playing an instrument for a musician. Matt wanted Springtrap to show this kind of deep self-realization in the art of killing. He had wanted to create a character who could open your jugular with same happy excitement as a kid opening a birthday present. Matt was no murderer, of course. If he were, he wouldn't have to do so much research. But Matt knew it was to feel rage. to feel so wrong, still used, that he burned with a desire to destroy, to smash, to teach people who have wronged him a lesson they'll never forget. During the game's development, Springtrap became a place Matt could put all these feelings, a repository for all the destructive urges. Springtrap was a child of Matt's rage. The goal at the beginning part of the game was found simple: find your way out of the maze before Springtrap can kill you. But the maze was absurdly difficult, made even more so by the first-person perspective that the VR necessitated. Springtrap was both swift and stealthy, as able to appear seemingly from nowhere and kill you before you knew what hit you. Matt made his way to the end of the entrance hallway and had seen the rabbit choose, and decided to turn right in the opposite direction he had seen the rabbit choose. They ended up, as he knew he would, in a large square room with the 4 closed doors. Three of these doors led to new passages in the maze. One led Springtrap to a certain depth. Because of the way the game was programmed, Matt didn't have any more idea of which door hid Springtrap than any other gamer would. Which door would he choose? After a quick round of eeny, meeny, miny, mo, Matt chose the door straight in front of him. He stepped forward, turned the knob, and pushed the door open. The soundtrack emitted a deafening screech, and the bunny lunged at him, his arm outstretched, slashing at him with a big, shining knife. The VR made Springtrap's attack feel disturbingly realistic. The knife slashed at what felt like dangerous close to his eyes, and then Springtrap lifted the knife high and plunged it downward. Matt couldn't help bracing himself as though he's experienced real physical pain. When the perspective shifted to third person, so that Matt could see the corpse of his avatar sprawled face down on the floor, Springtrap, showing a twisted joy in Matt had intended, smiled and looked of true bliss. He knelt beside Matt's avatar and used the knife to slice off Matt's ear. Springtrap held up the blood-dripping ear, a trophy commemorating his achievement. The words "Game Over" appeared on the screen. Matt was furious at himself for choosing the wrong door, furious that the rabbit creation was taking such obvious pleasure in his defeat. He couldn't even remove the headset to take a break. He just restarted the game and ran down the hallway until he was in the room with 4 doors again. He had a gut instinct the door on his left was the one to pick. He approached the door, turned the knob, and pulled it open. Springtrap lurched out at him, the jaws open wide. There was a soundtrack screech, followed by a gruesome snapping sound. Matt flinched because it felt all the world like Springtrap was split second away from biting his face off. Matt's avatar's corpse again lay face down. What was left of his face, anyway, in a fresh pool of blood. Springtrap grinned his victory, his teeth stained red. He slowly licked the blood from his lips. The words "Game Over" filled the screen again. Matt cursed, tore off his goggles, and threw them down on his desk. He would probably have been more careful with expensive equipment, but he didn't care. Why did he keep losing to Springtrap? Why didn't he win the game he had largely designed? He paced and cursed, then picked up a coffee mug and threw it. The mug smashed into tiny pieces and left a brown splatter on the clean white wall. Good, Matt thought. All the thoughts were destructive. There was a gentle knocking on the door, accompanied with the spoken words, "Knock, knock." Why do people say that? Wasn't just knocking on the door enough? Yeah, Matt snapped, not wanting to be bothered. The door cracked and Jamie from the cubicle close to his office peeked in. She was one of the women who looked like she hadn't changed her hair and clothing style since 3rd grade. Her bangs were cut straight across her forehead, and she appeared to be wearing a jumper. "I heard noises and want to make sure you're okay." "I'm fine. At least, I was before you interrupted me," Matt snapped. Everybody in the office seemed to love Jamie. They raved about the homemade banana bread she'd leave in the break room, and how about she was always willing to help out with the problem, whether professional or personal. But she didn't fool Matt. She knew Jamie was a busybody. It was like she was a vampire who fed on office drama. "Sorry, I guess those were just the sounds of creative process I was hearing," Jamie quipped, crinkling her nose as she smiled. It was cowering, ingratiating smile, like a dog wagging its tail when you got caught peeing on the carpet. "That's right," Matt said, not smiling back. What was he supposed to say? That he got mad because the big bunny had killed him twice in a row? That would have thrown his coffee mug against the wall because he couldn't handle the fact that he was losing to his own creation. Matt was starting to feel like the video game developer version of Dr. Frankenstein. "Well, good luck. See you later," Jamie said, giving a little wave just her fingers. "You want me to close the door back? I never wanted you to open it in the first place." He was going to go in again. This time he would make better choices. He would get past the murderous rabbit. He would lay to rest the nagging suspicion that was the game he couldn't win. Sometimes Matt felt like life was a game. He couldn't win. Sure, he had all the trappings of a happy existence. He had graduated from a good school and married Hannah, his college sweetheart. He had gotten his dream job, and he and Hannah had bought a pretty 4-bedroom house with ample room for her home office, his massive video game collection, and, Hannah had hoped, a growing family. Back in college, Matt had enjoyed the excitement of pursuing and eventually winning Hannah. He had met her in a killer chemistry class freshman year, where he had an A average and he was struggling. He asked her to be his tutor, and they met twice a week. They worked on chemistry, they also talked and laughed a lot. Finally, he asked her, "Would you be willing to go out on a date with somebody who is way worse in chemistry than you?" She said yes, and they soon were inseparable. Once they were dating, she didn't even mind letting him copy down her problem sets. They gave him extra time to spend together doing other, more fun things. Their meet cute story was a big hit whenever people asked how they got together. They always said, "We had chemistry." After graduation, Matt had loved going after and getting his dream job, hunting for and acquiring the right house. But once he won the prize, there was nothing to do but maintain it. And maintenance wasn't as interesting. The dream house had extensive plumbing problems, so many that it seemed like it would just ask a plumber to move into one of the extra bedrooms. The job was great sometimes, but there was also countless boring meetings during which people who knew much less than he did talked on and on about insignificant details. And he was expected to listen to them respectfully, which wasn't always possible. How could it be, when he clearly had the best ideas in the room? And then there was the problem of maintaining a marriage. When they were dating, Matt had been so preoccupied with winning Hannah's love that he never thought about the cost of that prize. Namely, that he was committing to spending the rest of his life with one person and one person only. It had gotten boring quickly. The endless nights in, the same conversations about their days, the same chicken breast and queen salad for dinner, and the same TV shows afterward. Hannah was still pretty and smart and nice, but the novelty had worn off her. Like when you buy a new car and it's exciting at first, but then it just settles into being your car, reliable and useful, but no longer a source of excitement. There had been other problems as well. Hannah wanted to start a family right away, and Matt hadn't. In fact, the more tedious the day-to-day grind of marriage had become, the less he wanted to add kids to the equation. The whole prospect of parenting yawned before as the string of unpleasant responsibilities stretching out for decades. The feedings and diaper changings of sleepless nights of infancy, the endless faring of school-age children, their school and lessons and practices, the drama and the rebellion of the teen years, all of that, plus the stress of having to pay for college. Who needed that? Apparently, Hannah had needed it. Or anyway, she had thought she did. Every Friday night when they would go out to the Neapolitan, their favorite Italian restaurant, she would wait until Matt had been softened up by a couple of glasses of wine to say, "I think it's time." Matt would always say, "Time for dessert?" even though he knew good and well that tiramisu wasn't what he was talking about. "Time to start a family," she would inevitably say. He had tried to put her off in a variety of ways. He had said he needed a few years to focus on their careers, but Hannah had said that since they ran the graphic design business from home, she could balance it with parenting now. Once, Matt had suggested that if she wanted something to take care of, they would get a dog instead of having a baby. That tactic hadn't gone over well. The worst, though, was that when he tried to argue that pregnancy and motherhood would ruin Hannah's petite, attractive figure, that time she caught him silo-throwing the contents of her water glass in his face and stormed out of the restaurant. The fact that Hannah wasn't willing to listen to reason about having a baby was certainly putting a damper on their marriage. And then there was the matter of the harmless little friendship Matt struck up with Brianna, a server at the restaurant where he frequently had lunch. It wasn't anything serious, and it seriously wasn't any of Hannah's business, but she got all upset when Matt had left his computer open and saw that Brianna had sent them a picture of herself in a bikini. He had no idea why Hannah had been so unreasonable. Friends did that kind of thing all the time. Hannah suggested the two of them get marriage counseling, but Matt had refused, and their marriage had ended in divorce shortly after 1 year anniversary. Since then, Matt had a string of girlfriends, the first one being Brianna from the restaurant. None of those relationships had ever lasted over 3 months, and Matt was always the one who got dumped. The string of breakups was a major contributor to the rage Matt was able to summon in creating Springtrap. Women are crazy, Matt had decided, and not much of the effort. To combat his loneliness and frustration, Matt had thrown himself into the design of the VR game even more obsessively than usual. It was a chorus of ironies that the game, much like his relationship, seemed to have turned against him. But this time, he was going to outsmart the rabbit and get out of the maze alive. Matt ran down to the dark hallway, turned right into the room with the doors. He looked around and chose the door behind him. When he turned the knob and opened the door, the entrance was clear. He walked down another dark hallway. There was no sign of Springtrap. He made to a left into a hallway that led to the Hall of Mirrors. He knew this way through, of course. The trick was making sure he wasn't being followed. He moved his way past the panels of glass, each one identical. He was maybe 12 steps from the exit when he felt the presence of something behind him. In a mirror, he saw the reflection of the big green rabbit standing behind him. The rabbit grabbed him by the hair and raised a gleaming knife to Matt's throat. Matt would almost feel the swift, sure slash. Once again, Matt saw his avatar lying face down, this time in a spreading puddle of his own blood. The rabbit licked the blood from his knife blade and laughed, his shoulders shaking. But it didn't feel like the rabbit was just laughing at Matt's mortality-wounded avatar. It felt like the rabbit was laughing at Matt himself. So the rabbit wanted to play dirty, did it? Matt yanked off his headpiece. He reached out his arms and cleared his desk, sending all the contents scattering to the floor. He would show that rabbit who was in charge. He just needed some room to spread out. He was in control of the game, so he was in control of the rabbit. He got to say what it could and could not do, where it could and could not go. He would show it who was boss. When Matt went home later, he wouldn't have much control over his life, But there, inside the game, he was the absolute ruler, and all of the decisions were his to make. He programmed the game such that Springtrap was doomed to wander the maze alone all night, with no victims to stalk and no way out. He also sped up the game's time frame by 1,000, so that for each minute that passed in real time, 1,000 minutes passed for Springtraps. Matt found himself laughing louder and harder as he had laughed in a long time. Sure, the rabbit might be able to kill his avatar, but that was nothing compared to the way Matt would alter Springtrap's reality, could control time and space, and meet out of the cosmic punishment like some kind of ancient vengeful god. Matt left the office and laughed some more on the drive home. Hannah had gotten to the house in the divorce, so Matt was moved into one of the apartment complexes with a pool and tennis courts, which advertised itself as offering affordable luxury. He had furnished the apartment with simple, functional pieces and lots of shelving for his video game collection. When his friend Jason from college had gotten kicked from the curb by his girlfriend at the same time, one of Matt's 3-month relationships had split up. Matt had invited him to move into the extra bedroom and split the rent. When Matt walked into the apartment, Jason was sitting on the couch in front of the big screen TV with a video game controller in hand. It wasn't even 6 o'clock, and he had already changed into his pajamas. A 2-liter bottle of soda and an open bag of cheese puffs decorated the coffee table. "Hey," he said, not looking away from the zombies he was blasting on the screen. "Hey," Matt said. "And how is Springtrap?" Jason asked, like one of the... I asked a friend sick on. Matt smiled. "Springtrap is going to have an interesting evening." "Wait, what?" Jason said. "Nothing." Matt tossed his back on the couch. "The game is going great. Kids are going to love it." "Big kids too," Jason said. "I can't wait to play it myself." "Hey, what can you want for dinner tonight? Pizza? Thai? Chinese?" He nodded toward the stack of takeout menus on the coffee table. Matt shrugged. "Whatever. You pick. I'm going to take a quick shower." He had gotten all sweaty and agitated during the battle of the rabbit earlier, and now he could relax and take his revenge at the same time, knowing that the helpless creature was doomed to wander aimlessly through the maze all night. Matt and Jason ate their Thai takeout straight from the containers while sitting on the couch and watching the episode of Rain of Stones Jason recorded on the DVR. Living with Jason felt like being in college all over again. At first, it had been fun. No complicated female emotions, no home repairs, no yard to mow. After work, it was all takeout and TV and video games, unless one of them had a date. But lately, a carefree college vibe had started to wear thin, and Matt had begun to feel like he was regressing, losing ground at a time in life where he would be gaming. Plus, Jason had started to get on his nerves. He was so ambitious, working on a dead-end call center job and never looking for anything more lucrative or challenging. How could a person be so chill all the time? Before long, Matt was going to make some decisions about how to move forward with his life. As the episode of Rain of Stones grew more violent, Matt's thoughts turned to Springtrap in the VR game, wandering endlessly, aimlessly, with nowhere to go and no one to kill. Matt smiled. It served as a psychotic bunny right for killing him all those times. It was strange that thinking about the Springtrap made Matt feel a little better. Maybe he couldn't control the people around him, but he was in charge when it came to the game. And if he had the things where they were going, he would just have to do a little bit of programming to change the outcome. After the mostly sleepless night, Matt was happy to be back at work. There was at least things were interesting some of the time. In a break area, he helped himself to a cup of coffee. He knew it would be bad. Then made his way to his office to see how Springtrap night had been. At least Matt knew there was somebody who had been a worse night than his. Matt put on his headset and entered the game. He walked around the dim hallway and turned to the right as he observed the room and the doors. He chose the door on his right. Thankfully, Springtrap wasn't there, so he granted access to the rest of the maze. Matt walked around the maze for a long time, and there was no sign of Springtrap, no jump scares, no sneaking up behind him, no quick glimpse of the rabbit at the end of the hall. It was strange. The game was programmed. The way the game was programmed, he should have seen Springtrap by now. Matt took out the headset and opened the game's data log. For several in-game days, Springtrap had wandered around the perimeters of the maze, looking for someone to kill. This is what Matt had expected. But he hadn't expected what he saw next. After all those days, no one would kill, and then killing his life's only purpose. Springtrap seemed to spawn a new version of himself. Immediately, the new version killed the old version, and then the current Springtrap would somehow produce a newer version, which would then kill it. The cycle went on and on. Creation of a new AI, followed by the newly created one destroying the creator. The killings got faster and faster, one right after another. Seemingly, as soon as the newest Springtrap would be able to spawn an even newer model. The murders grew in violence as they grew in speed. Stabbings and slashings, decapitations. When Matt saw the word disembowelment in the data log, he felt the coffee lurch in his stomach. Well, bizarre, the log did at least answer the question of how Springtrap spent the night. What it didn't answer was where Springtrap was now. The rabbit was programmed into the game's code. He didn't have the ability to truly permanently kill himself. He would always respawn. He had to be in there somewhere. Matt searched the game's VR for Springtrap. He searched parts of the game where Springtrap had been programmed to be. After having spawned and killed 500,000 versions of himself over the course of the night, the rabbit seemed to have disappeared. Except he couldn't really disappear. It was impossible. The answer had to be in the code. Matt would be absent-minded sometimes. Hannah used to tease him about the endless ability to lose his car keys or his cell phone. But he had an amazing memory when it came to programming. As a result, it was shocking when he looked at the program for Springtrap and saw that it now bore absolutely no resemblance to the program he had created. Springtrap programming was fractured, splintered, and unrecognizable. He had no choice but to remove it and start over. He went through the usual steps to remove it, but the damaged program remained. He figured that, since he was tired, he might have entered something incorrectly. He tried again, but the results were the same. He tried again and again for an hour, 2 hours, 3, but the results never varied. The damaged program would not be removed. It was as if Springtrap and one last spectacular suicide had blown himself to smithereens, and now all those tiny bits of him were scattered throughout the game's code, as impossible to retrieve as individual specks of dust. Matt started to sweat. All over the internet and every game store, ads for the new Five Nights at Freddy's virtual reality game abounded, including announcing the release date was all too soon. And now the game's program was defective in a way apparently cannot be fixed. Matt's revenge on Springtrap seemed ridiculously small compared to Springtrap's revenge on him. Maybe, if he went into a game one more time, he could figure out some way to reverse the damage. Matt's avatar ran around the periphery of the maze looking for signs of Springtrap. He turned the corner, caught the sight of something green up ahead. Springtrap's lifeless body lay around the maze next bend. I was splayed on the back and its torso wide open. Matt kneeled for a closer look. Springs and gears protrude from the edge of the gaping wound. How would something so mechanical match a look so dead? Springtrap's blank, sightless stare was horrible to behold. Matt reached up to the rabbit's eyelids and closed them. As soon as he made physical contact, Mac felt a sharp sting combined with a mild electrical jolt that reminded him of the pain of getting fraternity letters tattooed on his ankle in college. He pulled the avatar hand away. Matt was too stressed out for the strange state of the game to be in the mood for a date. But Jason had to be insistent on it. The girl Jason was dating had promised him for a roommate would be perfect for Matt. The four of them were now supposed to have dinner in the Napoleon, Hannah, and Matt's old go-to Italian restaurant. This is another reason Matt didn't want to go. Too many memories, both good and bad. But the main reason was that the likelihood of this girl being perfect for him was equivalent to the likelihood of a snowstorm in August. When the doorbell rang, Matt answered and found two young women. One of the blonde, aesthetically pretty, and a sun-kissed complexion. Maybe this evening would be better than he predicted. Why, hello, Matt said to her, turning to his most charming smile. This is a pleasant surprise. Usually I think Jason's kind of an idiot. But when he said we'd be perfect for each other, he definitely knew what he was talking about. He held out his hand. The pretty blonde didn't take the proffered hand and only gave him a small smile back. I'm Megan, Jason's date. Your date is Eva. He gestured toward the brown-haired young woman Matt hadn't noticed standing beside her. Hi, Eva said, smiling shyly. She was dressed in a striped button-down blouse and khakis, like she was going to work instead of on a date. Hi, Matt said, not bothering to hide his disappointment. Eva wasn't ugly, exactly. It was just that, standing beside a specimen as fine as Megan, she looked like a sparrow next to a bird of paradise. Matt also noticed that Eva's smile had not benefited from orthodontia. Her parents must have been too poor to pay for braces, she figured. Matt always found the state of the person's teeth was an accurate indicator of social class. So were shoes. He glanced down at Eva's foot layer. Cheap flats. So, are we allowed to come in? Megan asked. Of course, Matt said, stepping aside. Hey, Jason, he called. The ladies are here. Jason stumbled into the living room. His hair was still wet from the shower. He came up to Megan and kissed her cheek, and then said, Hey, Eva, have you met Matt? Yes, we've met, she said. Matt couldn't figure out why she wouldn't sound more enthusiastic. She was lucky to be going on a date. A guy like him would usually be way out of her league. And speaking of being out of one's league, how did a scubbly guy like Jason get a shot with a gorgeous girl like Megan? Hey, Jason said, I thought we'd take separate cars to the restaurant. That way, if we want to do something separately after dinner, we're all set. Fine with me, Matt said. Taking his own car would give him the ability to cut the evening short if it proved too unbearable. Matt saw Jason open his car door for Megan, so it bit the bullet and did the same for Eva. Of course, Jason's car was the same one he'd been driving since college, and Matt's was a new sports car. He was surprised that Eva didn't compliment him on it. On the way to the restaurant, Eva said, So Jason tells me you're a video game developer. That's really cool. Yeah, Matt said, trying not to think about the disappeared code and the endangering his high-profile project. It is really cool. Right now I'm working on the newest Five Nights at Freddy's game, the VR one. It's going great, he said, trying to convince himself that at least much was trying to convince her. My little brother is dying to get the game as soon as it comes out, Eva said. It's practically all it talks about. You won't believe that I know the developer. Well, she was showing some enthusiasm at least. Matt decided to lob the ball into her court. So what is it that you do? He wasn't particularly interested, but he told himself to try to listen for an answer. I'm in an RT department. That recreational outfitting company where Megan works, she said. Is the reason Jason thought you and I might get along because we're both into tech stuff. Yeah, well, the last thing I want to talk about once I get home from work is tech stuff, Matt said. Eva smiled and looked forced. Yeah, me too. They didn't talk about anything else for the rest of the drive to the restaurant. Matt hadn't been to the Napoleon since the divorce. It was the same as it always been. Dimly lit romantic with the violin music playing softly in the background. The elderly Maitre d', looked at him in glowing recognition. Oh, I remember you, he said. You used to come here all the time with your lovely wife. Well, she's not my lovely wife anymore, Matt grumbled. Why couldn't people mind their own business? The maitre d', blanched at, quickly regained his composure. Oh, I see. Table for four, then. Matt ordered the osso buco, his favorite. Megan ordered the same, which Matt felt indicated discerning taste. Both Jason and Eva ordered spaghetti with meat sauce. Matt was appalled by their lack of sophistication. They might as well have ordered the children's menu. It had been the idea began to form that Matt's mind. Weren't he and Megan such more compatible than Jason and Megan? After all, Matt and Megan were both attractive, sophisticated people. Jason and Eva, though. What if Matt could use this date as an opportunity to charm Megan away from Jason? Megan was clearly more compatible with Matt, and maybe there would be no hard feelings since Jason could have Eva as a consolation prize. Plus, maybe getting his love life in order might give Matt the pieces he needed to figure out whatever the problem in the game was and fix it once and for all. When the waiter came with their salads, Matt said, I think we'd like to get a bottle of Pinot Gringo or the table. Very good, sir, the waiter said. Thanks, man, Jason said. Big spender. Matt shrugged. You can't be stingy if you're going to have a good time. It takes money to have good food, good wine, good friends. It doesn't take money to have good friends, Eva said. So what? She was going to pick an argument with him? Well, it does. It takes money to have a good time with your friends. How about that, Matt said. Not really, Eva said, pushing her salad around her plate. Some of the best times I've ever had with friends have been just hanging out and talking. Yes, but good food and good wine certainly enhance conversation, Matt said. But do you think, Megan? Well, they can, Megan said, but I agree with Eva. Sometimes the best times are just hanging out in your pajamas, talking all night, and eating peanut butter out of a jar. Matt figured Megan didn't want to make her friend feel bad. But when the wine arrived, Matt offered to pour some of Eva, but she put her hand over her glass and said, No, thank you, I don't drink. Well, she's no fun, Matt thought. He poured wine for Jason and then poured Megan's glass extra full, more than she drank, the more charming she would find him. Over dinner, Matt told interesting stories about his life and accomplishments. Sure, they may have felt a little guilty when that he didn't let Jason get a word in edgewise, but it was important that Megan get to know the kind of guy he was. Between the entrees and tiramisu, Jason and Eva both excused themselves to go to the restroom, leaving Matt on the table alone with Megan. The opportunity couldn't have been more perfect. So, I know you've got this thing going with Jason now because, well, opposites attract, I guess, Matt said, smiling at her. The candlelight shined in her golden hair. She was lovely. But I just want to say I find you devastatingly attractive, and I'd like to give you my number, just in case you'd like it for, future reference. Megan's blue eyes flashed. I thought you and Jason were best friends. Matt was surprised to hear her anger in her voice. Well, we are. But you know what they say, all fair in love and war. Because they say it doesn't mean it's true, Megan said. All evening you've talked about nothing more about yourself and how great you supposedly are. Maybe Jason isn't well dressed as you and doesn't have an impressive job as you, but he's great because he's nice, caring guy. Matt wasn't going to sit there and take this abuse from yet another delusional woman. Well, I hope you enjoy your life of poverty and you're nice, caring guy, he said, getting up from the table. He was so angry, he felt smoke might come out of his ears, as though he were a character in an old cartoon. This evening just has been another disaster. I trust that you and Jason will be nice enough to be our alleged date. What's her name? A ride. He grabbed a wine bottle and marched out of the restaurant. It was only then his car was realized he left without paying his part of the bill. Good, he thought. Let him take care of it. Served them right for not appreciating him. He drove home too fast, thinking of what a wretched day it had been. Felt like the problems with the game had infected his whole life, but that was going to change. Matt woke up feeling strangely queasy. Usually morning tummy trouble was a symptom of having drunk too much the night before. He had polished off that bottle of wine last night, but still, it hadn't added up more than 3 glasses worth. He shouldn't be hungover. Coffee, he decided, was a solution, as it to many life's problems. He dragged himself into the kitchen and put on a pot to brew. Though the thought of eating was unpleasant, he dropped a slice of whole wheat bread into a toaster in case his stomach's emptiness was cause of unrest. Once the brewing and toasting were complete, He sat down on the kitchen table, one sip of coffee and one bite of toast later, his stomach roiled violently. Without even having made a conscious decision to move, he found himself leaning over the kitchen sink, retching up not only the toast and coffee, but seemingly everything else he had consumed over the past few days. He rinsed out the sink, wet paper towel, and used it to dab his sweaty forehead. His body couldn't have chosen a worse time to get sick. He couldn't miss work, he had to fix the game. He would fix it by lunchtime, he decided, when he could take the rest of the day off to rest and recover. It was almost noon, and Matt's stomach was still roiling like a storm at sea. He moved the wastebasket next to his desk, so he couldn't hurl into the next eating it. Eating lunch was unimaginable. He had been working nonstop to repair the game with no success. He had consulted every manual he owned. He had read extensively from a variety of specialized sites on the internet. He had even put on a phone call with one of his old professors from grad school, but it was all to no avail. Matt wasn't used to being stupid or like a failure, but now he was experiencing both of these unpleasant and custom feelings. It was like Springtrap, his own creation, had bested him. There was a knock on his office door. "Come in," Matt said. He hoped it was either someone to save him or put him out of his misery. "Hiya, Matt." It was neither. It was Gary, the head of his department, who was guaranteed in any given situation to be of no help whatsoever, and B, deep in his misery. Matt gritted his teeth. "Hey, Gary." Matt hoped his signs of distress weren't visible, but he was pretty sure they were. He was breathing heavily and sweating like he'd just run a marathon. The intensity of the nausea made it difficult to speak. He was afraid he'd open his mouth, something other than words would come out. Gary sat down in the chair across from Matt's desk. He was, as always, impeccably groomed. His hair was in perfect Ken doll part, his expensive suit wrinkle-free. "Have you been on social media the past couple of days?" he grinned, flashing his perfectly straight white teeth. "Kids are going nuts over this game. Some adults, too. It's going to be huge." "Matt, huge." "Huge," Matt echoed, trying to smile but failing. His mouth refused to go up at the corners. "So how's it going?" Gary asked, leaning forward in his chair. "Is everything going forward like it needs to? Because I tell you, that deadline is looming." Matt didn't need to be told the deadline was looming. "It was going great," he said, hoping he sounded more convincing than he felt. "Good to hear," Gary said, like he was trying to decide whether he believed him. "Anything I could help you with?" "No, it's going great," Matt repeated, his voice getting a little high-pitched and whiny the way it did when it was nervous. "Excellent," Gary said, getting up from his chair. "Can't wait to see what you have put together. You'll be ready to present on Friday, right?" "Friday, you bet," Matt said, gulping. Gary left, closing the door behind him. Matt put his head down on the desk in despair. He had started the morning feeling confident in his ability to solve the problem, but skies had darkened. Matt took his lunch break, not to eat, but just to get out of the office and try to clear his head. He walked the half a block to Gus's, that dimly lit dive bar that reminded him of cheap places he used to frequent in college. Maybe he could just sip up on a soda and settle his stomach. Also, Gus wouldn't be crowded at lunchtime, and maybe the combination of soda and the dark and quiet world would help him think. Matt placed his order and Gus filled it. Matt wished the whole relationship was going to be that simple. He sipped his cola and thought, okay, there was no time for a major redesign, but there anything else he could do that might save the game and save his job? Matt looked around the room. In the corner were the couple of old video game cabinets that had probably been there since the games were in the new 80s. He started at the demo screen in an old maze game, watching a weird yellow ball guy being pursued by candy-colored ghosts. And then the thought hit him. I can just program a new Springtrap, the one that follows the path it's supposed to. The old program is so messed up it won't have any impact on the game anyway. No one will even know it's there. Why hadn't he thought of this before? The problem was good as solved. He ate a handful of bar peanuts and finished his soda. Something about the combination of saltiness and fizziness knew his stomach. Then he went back to the office to build a new Springtrap, one that followed the path it was supposed to follow. And this time, Matt wouldn't agonize the rabbit. He had learned his lesson. It hadn't been easy hacking into the company's computer, but Gene had done it. Maybe it was a sign that things were looking up. Life hadn't been doing great for them lately. He had gotten fired from his job at Nerd Team at Good Deal Electronics Store and had to move back with his parents until he could find something else, which hadn't happened yet. It was depressing being a girl man living in your childhood bedroom, looking at all those old trophies from Scholar's Bowl and Math Team and realizing how little they meant. That was why they had been packing on the weight. Depression and mom's home cooking were a dangerous combination. But now he at least had one thing going for him. He had his own early copy of Springtrap's Revenge. Because of the superior hacking skills, he was going to be the first one of the people, if not the very first person to play the game. And his superior gaming skills, he might very well become the very first person to beat the game too. And it would be an accomplishment. He put on the VR headset. He was ready to play. Gene created an avatar that looked like his ideal self, like he would look again when he was back on his feet. Getting into the computer system, getting in his game is a good sign, Gene thought. A success that would be the first in a series of successes. Once his avatar was created, Gene found himself standing in the end of the dark hallway. He was walked to the opposite end. There was a door left and the door on the right. Randomly, he chose the one on the right and found himself in a room with 4 doors. Clearly, he had to choose one. From the past experience with FNAF games, he knew the wrong choice would result in a jump scare and a game over screen. He chose the door on his left. He took a deep breath, turned the knob, and pulled. It was clear. He breathed out a sigh of relief, took a few steps forward, and found himself in another dark hallway. He walked forward and slammed into a wall. He had to say the VR features were impressive. When his avatar hit the wall, he could feel the bump. He felt his way to the right. There was another passage forward. He continued feeling his way along the wall. Between the limited perspective offered by the VR and the lack of light, this maze was obviously no joke. But there was one area in his life where Gene would have full confidence in himself. It was gaming. He was going to find his way out. It was strange. It seemed like a part of the fun negotiating the maze and avoiding the creepy characters who lurked around the corners and jumped out when least expected. But so far, there's no creepy characters in sight, not even a title character. The name was called Springtrap's Revenge, so where was Springtrap? Gene Jr., dinner's ready, a voice called from the kitchen, breaking Gene's immersion for the game. Stuffed peppers and macaroni and cheese. I'll be there in a minute, Ma, Gene yelled back, but he knew it would last longer than a minute. He wasn't leaving this game until he found Springtrap. Besides, if there was one thing he knew about Ma, it was that she wasn't going to let him go hungry. If he took too long to come to the table, he'd make him a plate and bring it to his room so he could shovel in his dinner while he played. He saw something green sticking out from the corner of the maze. He went to investigate, stealing himself from the jump scare. But the version of Springtrap he found was undoubtedly scary, was incapable of jumping out at anyone. Springtrap's body lay motionless and flat on his back, its abdomen flayed open. Springs and gears protrude from the wound. His eyes were open and empty. Gene thought it might be a trick, that any second the green rabbit would spring to life to grab Gene's avatar ankle, but the rabbit's foot just laid there. Gene made his avatar nudge its foot, but it was insert. It seemed to be game over for Springtrap. But that didn't make any sense. If this game was about Springtrap's getting revenge, why would the supposed main character be dead in the beginning? Unless the plot turned into some kind of ghost story. Gene Jr., your dinner's getting cold. I'll be there in a minute, Ma. Just let me finish filling out this job application, Gene called. He knew if she thought he was applying for a job, he'd stay off his back for a few more minutes. He had to figure out what's going on in Springtrap's Revenge, and the only way to do it was to take a look at the code. It was time to put those superior hacking skills to use again. After a few commands, he was in, but he found it made no sense. According to the code, Springtrap had been extracted from every game that bore his name in the title. The program was initiated and the extraction was inexplicably called It's a Boy.exe. Matt was hungry, ravenous. He was sitting on a table for two at Ye Old Steakhouse. His companion on the table was Madison, who thankfully was pretty in her pictures, with shiny chestnut hair and big, doe-like brown eyes. It was their first date, but Matt was having a hard time focusing and required chit-chat because he was so hungry. He realized that he scooted the bread basket in front of him, his mindlessly gnawing on his way through the rolls. I'm sorry, would you like some bread? He asked, forcing himself to push the basket in a direction. No breaks, she said, with an awkward grin. I'm watching my carbs. Not me, obviously, Matt said, trying to humor as he tore off another chunk of bread with his teeth. What was this? Roll number 4? Number 5? The server appeared, and before he could even ask him the order, Matt said, porterhouse steak, very rare. There was a loaded baked potato and creamed spinach on the side. Let's get a refill on this bread basket, too. And for you, ma'am? The server turned to Madison. Matt figured it was a subtle jab at him, the reminder that he was supposed to let the lady order first, but he was far too hungry to care about the etiquette. He was so hungry that he felt his medical emergency. The Cobb salad, please, with blue cheese dressing on the side, Madison said. Matt hoped the server would hurry back with that new bread basket before he started to eat the tablecloth. You know, I've always wondered, he said, you girls always order salads when you're out on dates, like you don't want a guy seeing you eat too much. When you go out with your girlfriends, you order something else, like a big plate of ribs or something? Ribs, Matt thought. Ribs sound delicious. Madison smiled. It depends on how hungry I am. Sometimes I go out with my best friend, we split a burger and fries. You split a burger and fries? Matt said. That's just like an appetizer or something. Madison giggled. It's really not. Half a cheeseburger is plenty, and a girl's can't eat like you guys can. If I look at a piece of cheesecake, I gain 5 pounds. Cheesecake for dessert. Matt definitely wanted cheesecake. He rarely ordered dessert, but he was going for it tonight. Stop, he told himself. Stop obsessing over food and notice your date. Well, he said finally, whatever you're doing, you keep doing because you look fantastic. Thanks, she said, smiling. Good, Matt thought. When in doubt, give a compliment. It always smooths things over. When the food arrived, Matt felt like starving a lumberjack. The rare steak was an appetizing pool of blood, and when Matt cut into it, the meat was purpley red. I think I just heard it moo, Madison said as Matt felt a dripping chunk of meat to his lips. Well, you won't hear it long because it's going to be in my belly, Matt said. The nearly raw meat was delicious, so intensely so that Matt closed his eyes as he chewed. He ignored the vegetables on his plate and gnawed into the meat, over and over again, cutting off big chunks that filled his cheeks as he chewed. He resented how the knife and fork slowed down his eating. Really, it wouldn't make much more sense to pick up the steak and rend it up chunks into canines. That what they're for, aren't they? Table manners, all the rules of etiquette, really were just ways to delay the body of getting what it needed, and Matt's body needed this meat. He wasn't quite sure he had picked the large T-bone from the center of the steak, trying to gnaw on it, growling to himself in animal pleasure. But it seemed he felt Madison's eyes on him. He was sitting across from him, holding a forkful of lettuce in midair, staring at him like he was an exhibit in the zoo. When he felt his eyes on the other customers at the other tables as well, he sat on the bone. I went to the doctor the other day, he lied. He said I appeared to be anemic. I must have needed red meat or something fierce. He must have, Madison said. She reached into her handbag, pulled out her phone, and looked at it for a second. Oh no, she said. I just got a text from my roommate. My cat is sick. I have to go. Thanks for dinner. She didn't stick around long enough to hear Matt say, I'll call you. He satisfied his bottomless hunger. His steak was gone now, and so were the baked potato and cream spinach. He reached across the table for the rest of Madison's mostly uneaten salad. It would be a shame for it to go to waste. As Matt got undressed for his bedtime shower, he caught a glimpse of the reflection in the bathroom mirror and almost didn't recognize it. His belly was definitely bigger. It was bloated from the enormous dinner he had eaten in the steakhouse, but it seemed like more than standard post-meal bloat. Jack didn't look like his handsome face and shrugged. Got a few more pounds. He was still looking good, and historically, being a man with a little extra weight was a sign of prosperity. Matt woke up with a goal in its crystal clearness and simplicity: to make it to the bathroom before it was too late. He threw up the covers and ran. He then spewed the remains of last night's huge expense dinner into the porcelain bowl. He retched and gagged long enough for nothing left to bring up. Strangely, he still felt bloated afterward, and his belly was still distended. It was some kind of weird virus, the symptoms of which the cycles of extreme nausea followed by extreme hunger. If it was a virus, it certainly was hanging for a long time. He would have to ask people at work if they had heard of anybody else having the same symptoms. Matt, are you feeling okay? Jamie asked as he sat in the conference room waiting for the meeting to start. Her brow was knitted in a look of concern, and Matt doubted that was genuine. Oh, it's just a bug I'm having a hard time fighting off, Matt said. The smell of coffee in the room, usually one of his favorite aromas, was nauseating. I'm either nauseated or starving, and I'm bloated and gassy. Do you know how many viruses of those symptoms going around? I don't, Jamie said. And I know all about the bugs because I have kids in school who bring them home. She smiled. Seriously though, maybe you should have a doctor check you out. You're definitely bloated and your color doesn't look good. You're kind of yellowish, like you might have jaundice. Maybe you should get some blood work done and the liver function checked out on the safe side. Oh, doctors don't know anything, Bat said, and neither did Jamie. He didn't even know why he bothered to ask her anything. Gary walked in. It was a negative effect staring at the meeting, but a positive effect at ending any other conversation. Good morning, Gary said, taking his place at the head of the conference table. Well, the release date is in 2 weeks, and the reviews of early screening copies are coming in, and the results are, he looked down his notes, mixed. Jamie let out a little sigh. According to the new reviewers, Gary said, the storyline is good, and the gameplay is challenging, and the jump scare is constant of what the FNAF fans expect. He clears throat. However, every single reviewer agreed in one fact: the AI design of Springtrap is sloppy and not up to the game's usual standards. Gary didn't call out Matt by name, but he thought might as well have. With Springtrap's bizarre series of regenerations and deaths after Matt had led him to wander the maze, Matt really needed a rush to create a new AI to plug into the game. But he had no confidence despite the last-minute nature of the work. He had still gotten a good job. Well, good enough anyway. Oh, is that what reviewers are saying? Matt said, his face heated up with anger. Are you going to tell me who these people are, or are they really just you? Yeah, hey, Gary said, holding up his hands as if defending himself. No need to get all riled up. I'm just saying that it's a competitive climate. Nobody can afford to be doing anything but their best work. I always do my best work, Matt said, raising his voice. In fact, I would be doing it right now if you weren't just wasting my time with this pointless meeting. Jamie reached out to touch Matt's arm, but he jerked it away. I know these meetings take away time that you need to work and think, Gary said, but I promise this won't last long. And after the meeting, Matt, as you were working and thinking, I would suggest that one of the things you would think is an appropriate way to talk to your supervisor. Matt drove home in a rage. He broke the speed limit by double digits and powered through red lights. Let a cop pull me over, he thought, just to let him. Both anger and hunger were gnawing at him. Even though he was bloated and gassy, he felt like a pinprick through his stomach. He just couldn't pop like a balloon. When he drove by a burger joint, the smell of hot grease lured him and turned in. He went through the drive-thru and ordered a double bacon cheeseburger, large fries, and a chocolate shake. Food that was generally dismissed as too unhealthy for human consumption. Not wanting to have to slow down to eating because he was also driving, he pulled into a parking space and devoured the greasy meat and carbs like a ravenous Wolverine. His hunger subsided some. His anger did not. He was in an apartment. Jackson was packing video games in his shelf in a cardboard box. Other filled boxes were scattered across the floor. What's going on? Max asked. Although he was feeling he knew. Listen, man, Jason said, not looking up at him. Megan finally told me what you did. He said almost he didn't because we're roommates. But then he decided I needed to know. He said you hit on her when you were supposed to be getting to know Eva. You gave her the number when you knew she was on a date with me. Not cool, man. Okay, Matt said. If you want me to apologize, I'll apologize. He didn't need an apology, though. He was trying to forcibly take Megan away from Jason. He'd just been presenting her with choices. Jason shook his head. I see. That's just it. I don't want you to apologize. I want you to stop being a jerk. But unfortunately, I don't see that ever happening, so I'm moving out. You spent your whole meal with the other, and I talk about how prosperous and successful you are, right before you left us with the bill. You don't need any help with rent. You can afford the place without me. I can, Matt said, but I want you to stay. He didn't know why, but he had a sudden desperate need not to be alone. It was vague but persistent feeling as if he were left alone, something bad would happen. Yeah, and even wanted you to be nice to her, but she didn't get well that wish either. She was a super nice person, Matt. She deserved better. Yeah, you fixed me up with a girl with a great personality, Matt said, laughing bitterly. You kept the pretty one for yourself. Jason threw up his hands. Okay, look. I can't have this conversation right now. I'm leaving. Tonight I'm borrowing a truck from a buddy. I'll come back in the morning and get my stuff when you're at work. I think it's best if you and I stay out of each other's way for a while. Jason grabbed his keys and was out the door. Matt got a beer from his fridge and sat down on the couch. He had things gotten bad so fast. He didn't really need to ask. He knew the answer. It was that rabbit. He couldn't explain it, but somehow the rabbit was to blame. The beer tasted sour and unpleasant, and Matt felt the sickly booming of the head had gone right to his right temple. He reached up to massage his head and felt a hard knob pushing against the scalp. Was it possible he got hit in the head and a hard knot to form and didn't remember it? And if he didn't remember it, what would it have been? He had some kind of brain injury that was causing him to lose his mind? Or maybe it was physical health, not his mental health, he was worried about. Matt needed someone to talk to about his problems, but there was no one. Hannah had abandoned him, a string of ungrateful girlfriends had abandoned him, and now Jason, his best friend, had abandoned him. As if it weren't for all bad enough, he was unappreciated and criticized at work. Perhaps his loneliness is a sad price to pay for his brilliance. Like so many geniuses before him, he was isolated and misunderstood. For the first time in his adult life, Matt found himself crying real tears. Matt couldn't fasten his pants yesterday. They had been tight fit, but still a fit. But today they were impossible. Today he had lounged around in pajama pants all day, but now, trying to fit into real pants, he was apparent that his belly was swollen to the size of a 34 waistline was only a fond memory. He tried another more forgiving pair and then another, all to no avail. The discarded pants lay strewn in his bed. The problem was that he was a date in a few minutes, and while he didn't find the most rules of etiquette to be stupid and oppressive, he did accept the fact that a public date generally required one to wear pants. He dug through the closest and found a size 36 in the very back. He kept into them, and then they still wouldn't fasten over his belly. Finally, he pulled them down below the mountainous swelling and managed to zip them up. The button still wouldn't close, and he managed to secure them with a belt. It wasn't the ideal situation, but it would have to do. Matt had an urgent meeting for this new date, another internet adequate, in a bar. This way, he reasoned, if the date turned out to be as drastic as the last one, at least he wouldn't have to pay for dinner. The bar was one of those sleek modern places favored by young urban professionals, all chrome and glass and indirect lighting. Walking in, he caught the reflection in one of the many places mirrors, and momentarily startled. His belly was so bloated that the buttons of the shirt were straining, the gaps between the buttons revealing a yellowish skin. His face and hair were drenched with sweat, as if it was his imagination, or was his hair also getting thinner? Still, Max knew he was a lot more going than any losers in this bar. Emma was the new girl's name, right? Emma was lucky to be going out with him. He didn't recognize her at first. He was sitting at the table alone and gave him a little wave. Her face was pretty, like she remembered seeing on the dating site. It was her honey blonde hair, but the picture he used on the site must have been taken a good 25 pounds ago. The girl was chunky. It was a good thing he hadn't committed to taking her out to dinner. He probably wouldn't afford to feed her. Well, it was too late to slip out now. He was already spotted him. He pasted on a smile and walked up to the table. Emma? Matt? She smiled broadly and gestured him to sit down. So what were you drinking? Appletini? One fruity girl drink coming up. He lets me go conserve with the barkeep. He went to the bar and ordered the girl a drink for Emma and a martini for himself. It was strong, but he had a feeling he was going to need it to get through this date. Yum, thank you, Emma said when he sat down a toxic-looking green drink in front of her. Thanks for figuring out this place. It's really cool. I'm ashamed to admit, I don't get out much. Most nights after work, I just put on my pajamas and watch Netflix and eat a gallon of ice cream, Matt thought. But he just smiled and nodded. Yeah, sometimes I just end up hanging out with my roommate and playing video games, Matt said, and then he remembered Jason wasn't a roommate anymore. No need to tell her that, though. He already decided he was never going to see her again. Well, you're a video game developer, she said, sipping her cocktail. So when you hang out and play video games, that's like research, right? He managed to train a smile. Something was happening in his abdomen. Pressure was building in an unpleasant way. Most was like the force was pushing his belly from the inside. He took a sip of his martini, which hit his stomach like battery acid. He had a grimace because Emma asked, "Are you okay?" Sure, he said. But he wasn't. He felt like he was going to burst like an overripe berry. He couldn't sit there and make polite chit-chat, but let me just go ahead and tell you right now, this is going to work out. So you enjoy your drink, and I'm going to say goodnight. Now, wait just a second, Emma said. You've barely even talked to me. It's way too soon to figure out whether you think I'm an interesting person or not, so tell me, how do you know it's not going to work out? Was she going to force him to say? Apparently it was okay. She was. Okay, Emma, I'm sure you have a great personality, but when you post a picture of yourself in a date site, it needs to look like you. Not you 25 pounds ago. Emma's mouth dropped open. I can't believe you have the nerve to say that to me. First of all, it's all shallow and offensive, and second of all, you looked in a mirror lately? Free. There's everywhere in this place. Your picture online is 35 pounds ago. Did I notice that you came in? Sure. But that didn't bother me. What would bother me was you're a gigantic hypocrite. Fine. Well, I think the one thing we can mutually agree on is this date is over. Matt stood up and then he heard an odd pop sound through something making popcorn. He felt a cool breeze over his torso. Looking down, he realized his bloated belly had caused all the buttons of his shirt to pop off and now exposed the general public to see. Emma laughed. She laughed so hard she snorted. She laughed till her eyes watered. I can't believe it, she said between giggles. This is the best bad date ever. Wait till I tell my girlfriends. Matt tried to clutch his shirt closed and fled the premises. As soon as he hit the sidewalk, the pressure from his belly snapped his belt buckle, and he had to hold up his pants on his other hand to keep him from falling down. He relinquished the grip on the shirt long enough to let it into his car. He was needed to get home and his terrible night would be over. Back at his apartment, Matt changed into a baggy t-shirt and a pair of elastic-waisted pajama pants. Tomorrow he would have to go shopping for new clothes, but that would be shopped. But he was going to turn into one of those tacky people who wore pajamas in public. The pressure in his stomach was getting worse, and the weird knot in his head was turning where it was retching his skin and his scalp. Maybe he had some medicine that might help him. He went to the kitchen, chewed up a couple of antacid tablets, and drank a glass of water. He waited for relief, and it didn't come. Instead, he pressured and streaked. Even the soft t-shirt he was wearing felt irritated. He took it off and looked down at his watermelon-shaped belly. The pressure on the inside was pounding, pummeling. He looked at the skin in his belly. There was movement underneath. He felt a pounding, faint imprint of an indeterminate shape showed up on his skin. Matt sniffled and screamed as he realized the truth. Something was inside him. It was trying to get out. The painful pounding became more insistent, a drumbeat of agony. If it was out of him, whatever it was, the pain would stop. Get it out, he thought as he squeezed his eyes shut and clenched his jaw. He grabbed his t-shirt and bit down the fabric just to have some kind of outlet for pain. If he got it out, the pain would stop. But how? There was no place for it to go. Another surge of pain hit him, this one crushing. He doubled over and grabbed a kitchen counter support. His gaze turned to the kitchen knives hanging on the magnetic strip wall. He could cut it out. Cutting would relieve the pressure. It would get whatever was out. He could be free of whatever this burden was. He wanted to be free. He grabbed the largest, sharpest kitchen knife and lay on his back on the floor. Starting the decision was the hardest part, but the pain made inside him greater than any pain he caused himself. He sank the knife dip into his top abdomen and drew the blade downward, biting down his t-shirt so the neighbors wouldn't hear a scream. There was pain, but there was no relief. The pressure stopped, the blood flowed, and Matt saw, emerging from the incision, a long green rabbit ear. The whole rabbit emerged, wet and slimy with mucus, a perfectly formed string chopper the size of a healthy newborn infant. But unlike the newborn infant, the rabbit would pull itself out of the incision, land on the kneeling position on the kitchen floor, and rise to stand. The blood loss was making Matt fade in and out of consciousness. Even in the idle state, he could see the creature that spawned was spring-trapped, but now not spring-trapped. This one was realer, more organic than the one in the video game. Matt's mind drifted back to the story his mom had read him when he was little about the stuffed toy rabbit that wished so hard to be real that it became real. Springtrap stood over Matt's bleeding body. It was an amalgamation of code that somebody like him was programmed into a computer. The Springtrap was real. The green rabbit sat down on the floor beside Matt and rested Matt's head in its furry lap. It felt nice. Matt was losing so much blood. Could a person lose this much blood and still stay alive? The rabbit stroked Matt's cheek. The Matt didn't know if he heard the word come out of the rabbit's mouth or if it was only one in his head. Daddy. So, you entered the apartment and you found him like this? The police officer was taking notes as they talked in the blood-drenched kitchen. Yes, officer. Jason was shaking, and he couldn't feel his heart thudding in his chest. I was moving out of this apartment. I came here at 10 o'clock to get my stuff. 10 a.m.? The officer asked. Yes, sir. I thought Matt would be at work, but instead I found him here. He heard the sob in his voice. He was trying to hold it together, but it wasn't succeeding. So you were roommates. But you were moving out of the apartment, the officer said. Have you had a disagreement? Yeah, kind of. Just a little one. Nothing that would lead to something like this. And I mean, I'm not a violent person. I would never do something like this anyway. Jason wished somebody would cover up the body, but even when they did, he knew he would unsee it. It was like Matt was gutted like a fish. His shirtless torso was a gaping hole. Blood that gushed from the sides of the wound and now forming a large congealing puddle in the kitchen floor. Now the now bloody kitchen knife Jason had used countless times to chop vegetables was Matt's lifeless hands. Did your roommate have any enemies? Anyone who would wish him ill? Officer said. I mean, Matt said, a prickly guy. Not always the easiest person to get along with. But because he could be annoying, it doesn't mean anybody wanted him dead, the officer nodded. Had he shown any signs of depression or suicidal thoughts? I think he was kind of depressed. Yeah, Jason said. He had a nasty divorce and breakups and a few rebound relationships after that. I also got the feeling there was a lot of stress at work, though. He wasn't the kind of person who would talk about that kind of thing much. Jason looked down at his friend's body. It was the last thing he wanted to see, so why do you keep looking at it? Why would someone do this to themselves? The officer looked up his notes. Well, son, in my line of work, you never stop being surprised about what people are capable of. He looked down at the body and then squinted to see something he had noticed before. He put on a plastic glove and squatted down on the floor, reaching for something. It was a clump of something green and fuzzy, like an artificial fur of a stuffed animal. Do you have any idea what this could be? The officer asked. Jason looked at the unfamiliar green fur. It was covered in unpleasant slime and a clear mucus. I have no idea, Jason said. The officer rolled slimy hairs between his fingers and thumb, and looking at them in apparent confusion, then shrugged and wiped his hands on a clean paper towel. Standing at the smudged window in room 1280, the nurses deliberately kept their backs to the patient and watched the priest approach the hospital. They all breathed as shallowly as they could, trying to ignore the sensation of being observed and judged. He has to be warned, one of the nurses said. He won't believe us, the second one said. The head nurse's face was hard as stone. Then he'll find out the hard way. Arthur pedaled his vintage bicycle, Ruby, through the stone archway at the base of the drive leading up to Hercules Hospital. The archway, like much of the hospital itself, was engulfed in thick green ivy. The bicycle's antique balloon tires chopped at the moist pavement, spitting fallen leaves in their wake. A black SUV passed Arthur, and a little boy in the back seat turned in to stare, watching Arthur until the SUV rounded the drive's curve with a calmed entrance in the imposing medical center. Arthur knew that he and Ruby made a striking picture. Arthur didn't have to wear a long, flowing back crossback flooded out behind Ruby, but he liked wearing it. It buoyed him, made him feel like he was lifted by angels' wings. Or maybe he just didn't thought it looked good, in which case he needed to do better in his first deadly sin. Ruby was evidence of that as well. The priest didn't need the fully restored 1953 bicycle with gleaming chrome fenders and a shiny red paint, but a priest would enjoy what he had, couldn't he? Ruby was a gift from a dying man. How could Arthur refuse to accept her? Arthur smiled to himself. The truth was neither nor Ruby's appearance interested him much. He really was just a meek man who allowed himself a couple of indulgent flares because they made him happy. A few drops of rain hit Arthur's face, making him regret leaving his Saturnal hat, size large enough to fit over his red bicycle helmet, at home. It's going to rain, Arthur housekeeper, Peggy had warned him. The sun loiters behind every cloud, Peggy, he told her. It just needs a little faith to coax it out. Peggy had laughed at him, as she often did. Arthur glanced up at the rolling steel gray sky. Layered behind the gray were inky wisps of cirrus clouds that curled like beckoning fingers. Arthur put a hand down and pedaled faster. Just another couple 100 feet, and he'd be under the hospital's portico, sheltered beneath the dubious protection of the stone Cerberus statue that hunched atop of the columns of the hospital's entrance. Hercules Hospital was one of the more imposing hospitals of which Arthur had been called. The structure had been built centuries before using rough-hewn stone, painstakingly extracted from the local quarry at the cost of a countless man's life, and it held generations of pain, struggle, and sorrow within its walls. But Arthur knew it was also held hope and love and joy. That was always what he chose to see. Then he looked up at the road. Arthur's gaze was drawn to the sky above the hospital. He smiled. One of the streaming golden rays of sunshine touched the backside of the red tile roof, peering through the blackness and slicing through the gray clouds pressing down on the building. See, Ruby, Arthur said. Like I said, it just needs a little faith. Ruby didn't respond, but Arthur had to laugh at himself when he just pulled up on his bike right under the portico. Rain began to fall in heavy drops. They splattered on the pavement and filled with air of sweet ozone smell. Well, rain is good too, he said and flipped up the hem of his cassock and got off Ruby's cushy leather seat. Excuse me, Father, were you talking to me? Someone said. Arthur turned around to find a young woman in the rain slicker, her blonde hair pulled into a top ponytail, juggling a pink backpack and an orange tote bag and a red umbrella. She had a square face and a wide mouth that were squared from looking masculine by her lively blue eyes and the bright makeup she wore. She smiled at Arthur attentively. Hello, young lady, Arthur said. He gave her a half bow. Arthur had turned just 47 the previous spring, but he looked older because his hair had turned mostly gray a decade before, and deep emotions had carved lines on his face. Recently, he decided he was now old enough to refer a young woman as young lady, when he was a young man himself. He was always befuddled by what we could call women. Miss and ma'am seemed to offend more than often than not, for a reason that confused Arthur. Hey, you. That was always inappropriate. Hi, the young woman said. Arthur held out a hand. I'm Father Blythe. Inwardly, he cringed at the formality. He preferred being called by his first name, but his bishop had made it abundantly clear that only so many of Arthur's indiscrepancies would be tolerated. "I'm Maya," the young woman said. He took Arthur's hand. Maya's hand was small, soft, and very, very cold. Arthur held it slightly longer than he would have, willing some of his warmth into the chill of her fingertips. "Mia for Mia said as Arthur released her hand. "I'm a nurse here. Or I'm going to be. Or I mean, I am. Well, as of 15 minutes from now I am, I guess. Or I am because I was already hired?" Maya's voice was mellow and sweet and filled with endearing uncertainty. Arthur smiled. "Congratulations," he said. He looked at Maya more closely and saw the dark blue nurse's uniform was hiding under a yellow rain slicker. Thanks." Maya looked at the hospital's entrance and frowned. Her lower lip quivered for just a second. Arthur pulled a bicycle chain and locked the satchel before she slung across his body. He bent over the secure ruby. It was all his faith, but prudence had place in the world too. A car pulled in under the patio and let out a large woman barking orders at the smaller woman, who followed her into the hospital. An older couple walked slowly toward the entrance, hand in hand. A janitor sat on a nearby bench, staring at his feet. Two fat pigeons hopped along the walkway, pecking at invisible morsels. The rain was coming down harder now. It thrummed on the pavement and hissed under the trees of the passing cars. A metallic trickling sound came from the downspouts at the bottom edge of the hospital's columns. Arthur straightened and realized Maya was still standing next to him. He stared at the hospital entrance. "Are you okay, Myra?" Arthur asked. Maya blinked. "What, me? Sure. I mean, I will be. I hope. Yes. Well, I'm better than I was. She stopped and turned. "Why is the dog that guards Hades up here?" She pointed at Portico's ceiling. Arthur frowned. He wasn't sure of that himself. It's Greek mythology. Cerberus was tasked in preventing the dead from leaving the underworld. Arthur didn't know whether the Cerberus statue was meant to suggest it was going to keep the dead from entering the hospital, or whether it's going to keep keep the people who died in the hospital from moving on. The symbolism was made even murkier by the hospital's names. Hercules, the son of Zeus and Alcmene, as a mythological hero. One of his 12 laborers was capturing Cerberus. The hospital's name and statue left Arthur wondering if this was a place of good or evil. Either way, he had a job to do. "I'm not actually sure," Arthur said, "but it's just a statue." Maya didn't seem convinced. Arthur glanced at the plain black banded watch. "Shall we?" He indicated to the hospital's automatic sliding doors, which had switched open and closed at least a dozen times since Arthur had locked up Ruby. Maya lifted her chin. Yes, I guess I have to." She glanced at her own watch. "I made sure to get here early, and I'm not going to be late if I don't go in now." Arthur took a step, but Maya didn't. Arthur stopped. He wanted to get on why he was here, but Maya seemed to need help, and helping was what Arthur did. "Do I perceive a hesitation?" Arthur asked. Maya sighed. "This job wasn't my first choice. I wanted a position at Glendale, you know?" Arthur nodded. He visited Glendale Hospital often, and he had to admit he preferred it as well. He only visited Hercules one time so far, just the previous week, and he already knew it wasn't going to be his favorite place. But Arthur wouldn't be choosy. He was called. Hercules was actually far more modern than Glendale, Arthur offered as encouragement. 10 years before, Hercules had been bought by a millionaire who practically gutted the hospital before renovating it into the state-of-the-art medical center. The renovation made sure to keep all the original exterior architectural details, and even the hospital's interior was designed to reminiscent of an older era, with crisp white walls, black and white tiled floor, thick baseboard, and a crown molding. The result of the sort of time whiplash where cutting-edge technology shared space with crystal chandeliers and wrought iron skullwork. "I know," Maya said, "but..." She sighed again. "I guess it's better than a prison hospital. That's where I was before." Arthur was surprised. "Really? I never saw you there. You got out of the prison?" "I go there when I'm needed," Arthur said. A siren screamed, squawked, then burbled into a abrupt silence as the ambulance knocked up to a stop in front of the hospital's emergency entrance, 50 feet from where Arthur and Maya stood. "Shall we go inside?" Arthur suggested. He put his hand lightly on Maya's upper back in an attempt to propel her forward. It didn't work. Maya grabbed the sleeve of Arthur's cassock. "What do you mean? You go where you're needed." Arthur stepped back to avoid two teenage girls carrying a bouquet of balloons that looked big enough to pick him up and carry him away. He mentioned for Maya to join them next to the cluster of panicle hydrias, the plant's large white cylinder flowers hanging from them violently even though the early fall chills pressed upon him. Once tucked out of the way, Arthur faced Maya. "I give the dying their last rites." Maya shivered. "But you seem so cheerful, so kind. How could you see that way around the dead?" Arthur smiled. "Death isn't a sad thing, it's a transition. I'm kind of like a tour guide for people making a transition. Or maybe like a traveling companion. Instead of letting fear take people away, I step in and take fear's place. Once fear is gone, the soul can reach the other side in peace." Maya gazed into Arthur's eyes, and he wondered what he saw there. He perceived his eyes would be boring, brown eyes of a simple man, but what did others see? Arthur waited. Sure, he still needed to be more than he needed to be hospice wing, and he summoned him, at least for another moment. Finally, Maya took a deep breath and nodded. I'm glad I met you, Father. Me too, Maya. She held up her arm, elbow out. Well, will you escort me to my first day of the job then? I've been assigned to the hospice wing, and I bet that's where you're going. Arthur smiled, looked at his arm, took Mia's arm. Indeed I am, Mia. Let's go. At the curved desk of the nurse's station in the hospice wing, Arthur passed Mia up to the tall, sharp-edged woman, with too many teeth and dark-eyed gaze, that unsettled Arthur. Nurse Ackerman was the head of the hospice wing, and Arthur had met her last week when he came to introduce himself. He admonished himself for disliking her immediately, although, to be fair, he doubted many human beings did like her. As they passed the open doorways, Arthur occasionally glanced into rooms, and he felt moved to do so. Some rooms felt heavy and somber, and Arthur said a prayer for the patients and families in them. Some rooms felt illuminant, sometimes even more evanescent. The people in those rooms didn't need Arthur's help. They understood the truth of the journey ahead. The E prayed for them. Anyway, you could never have too much support. Nurse Ackerman led Arthur past room after room. So how far along the long hall had he wondered if they somehow passed through an invisible barrier into another hospital? The longer they walked, the denser the air felt. The worse it smelled, too. Arthur was used to the hospital smells. It smelled bitter medicine, sharp urine, fatigued waste, and pungent antiseptics. But this was something else, something acrid and ancient. The patient you are about to see, Nurse Ackerman said, is a special case. Arthur almost jumped out of his skin when Nurse Ackerman opened her mouth. He was already surprised by her escort down the hall. He hadn't expected her to speak, too. She's barely spoken to him the last time he was here, and then to only give him the room number and send him on his way. Her voice was sharp, and her appearance held a disturbing semblance that made his hair stand up. On the back of Arthur's neck, every consonant sounded like it was spitting on and then stabbed with a forked tongue. She continued. The man has been on life support for years. How many years, Arthur asked. Nurse Ackerman's shoulder blades rose in appearance. Irrelevant, she snapped. He's been here all this time? Nurse Ackerman ignored Arthur. When the state finally took him off life supports, why did the state do that? Where's his family? Nurse Ackerman whirled around and impaled Arthur with a searing look. He has no family, she nearly shouted. Her tone suggested Arthur should have known that somehow. Yes, he'd done a little research on this place. Talked to a couple colleagues, but he had heard of any special case. Nurse Ackerman rubbed at a large mole under her left eye. She took a breath, turned away from Arthur, and resumed talking. Arthur glanced back over his shoulders, be sure he wasn't still in Hercules Hospital, and would be able to find his way back to Ruby. At this moment, his bicycle seemed impossibly far away. As I was saying, the state took him off life support, Nurse Ackerman continued, with the air of someone long suffering. Even so, he wouldn't die. A miracle, Arthur said with a quick prayer of thanks. Hardly. The word sounded like a shot reverberating off the stark white walls and closed doors around him. Closed doors. Arthur looked at the old-fashioned, wide, six-panel dark oak wood doors with frosted glass windows. All the doors were closed in the end of this hall, and none but the panels revealed light within the rooms. Why? Arthur opened his mouth to ask, and then thought better of it, and remained silent. Nurse Ackerman stopped before the door and looked strangely darker than all the other doors they had passed. But the glass panel indicated the room's light was on. He glanced up to check the overhead lights. Was one of them out? Before he can confirm his suspicion, Nurse Ackerman pushed the door open. He's in here, he said, not necessarily. Arthur glanced at the number by the door. 1280. As soon as the door was open, the origin of the smell Arthur had noticed was obvious. This came from whatever lay in the hospital bed at the other side of the room. Of course, the smell was even more noxious, and it was more easily discerned. It was a smoky smell, but it was not like any smoky smell Arthur had ever encountered. It was like the smelling burning meat, smoldering plastic, and molten steel all at once. Arthur picked out the stirring odors of carbon and sulfur. What was in this room? Arthur didn't have long to ponder the question, because Nurse Ackerman stepped aside and made a sweeping hand gesture at the bed in front of her. She reminded Arthur of those women on game shows, the ones who had outwardly indicated potential prizes. Lying there and the man had come to see, Arthur stopped breathing. He clutched the door jamb. He ordered his legs to keep holding him up. His patient could not be called a prize, except perhaps in hell. Arthur had seen a lot of horrible things in this texture as a priest. He'd been into car crashes, airplane crashes, and all manner of natural disasters. He prayed over people's missing limbs, missing eyes, missing large chunks of their bodies. He'd seen so much disfigurement and physical horror that he would have, until this moment, been apparently confident in saying he'd seen every misery that could thrust upon the human body. But this wasn't the appearance of a man alone that took Arthur's breath away. It was what? Not the smell, not the incongruity, not the impossibility. Arthur's brain begged for oxygen, and he remembered to inhale, sucking in a lungful of rancid, decay-tinged air. Arthur wiped at the tears that suddenly filled his eyes. They weren't emotional tears. These eyes were reacting to the puzzling acidity in the room. Arthur worked his tongue around in his mouth, gathering up enough saliva to speak. He looked at Nurse Ackerman and noticed that her eyes were squinted and her nose was more pinched than usual. "What's his name?" Arthur asked. "We don't know. No family has claimed him. He has no records." "What about fingerprints?" Arthur asked, and then immediately realized that was a stupid question it was. Nurse Ackerman let out a gurgling snort at Arthur's supposed pass for a laugh. "A DNA sample was taken, but it matches no individual in an existing DNA database," she said. Arthur nodded. "As you can see," Miss Ackerman continued, "he has a brain function." She gestured to the monitor open with a series of jagged green lines played across the dark green. "That's an REM sleep pattern." Arthur stared. He'd take her word for it, and all tall, spiky lines meant nothing to him. According to Dr. Hanner, the hospital sleep expert, that particular REM pattern indicates nightmares, horrific nightmares. Arthur's gaze, which had been locked on the man in the bed, whipped to Nurse Ackerman. Was there just a little too much glee in the tone when she used for horrific nightmares? Yes. Her mouth twitched at the corner as if she wanted to smile. Arthur frowned and raised an eyebrow at him. An overhead speaker's right outside the door. Room 1280 blasted out. "Nurse Ackerman, please come to room 907. I'll leave you to it," she said, "but I'll be back. There's more for us to discuss." What they were discussing? Arthur didn't feel like he was discussing anything. All he was doing was trying to accept what his senses were telling him. He was also trying to remember his training, his humanity, and his decency. Nurse Ackerman's footsteps slapped the floor and retreated down the hall. But Arthur didn't let go of the door jamb. He knew he needed to. He had to enter the room, but not yet. First, he wanted to see if he could get his brain to understand the facts that reported to being real. A disconnect that had bridged it before he could step into the situation and do something, anything besides whimper like a small child. A man. Really? Could Arthur really call this a man? It wasn't more than a corpse than a man. Well, no. Some of the facts were considered designation of corpse. The REM monitor, for example. Fact 1. The man appeared to be burnt to a crisp. That lay in bed in 12 room 80. Resembled a human being very in that exquisite shape. It had a head, a torso, 2 arms, and 2 legs. There, the similarity to humans ended. Fact 2. The burning had been so severe, so complete, that the only thing remaining was essentially a charred skeleton. Almost. Actually, Arthur wished the man was just a charred skeleton. If he were simply blackened human bones, he'd have been easier to look at. But the ruinous fire damage would have been throughout the body. Although he had no hair, the man did have skin. Or was it skin? Arthur had never seen anything like the dermis on the man. It looked like a fire had scorched away at so many layers of his skin that it was just an ashy covering far too translucent for comfort. Arthur guessed that fire was siphoned all moisture from his body's covering, leaving it with extensive cracks, like the surface of a dried-up lake bed. Through those cracks, Arthur caught unwelcome glimpses of uncharred tissue. Fact 3. The man's organs worked, at least the ones Arthur could see, and that in and of itself was repellent in ways Arthur had never experienced before. Though the translucent skin cracks, Arthur could literally watch his man's disintegrate and blackened heart pumping. He could see the heart-shriveled lungs expanding and contracting. He could glimpse the seared kidneys and the bladder so carbonized it seemed like it was about to collapse in on itself. Fact 4. The man had no face. A hole in his skull indicated there was a nose there used to be. Dark, cavernous pits, lacking eyes, looked at nothing. A toothless mouth gaped without lips to protect it. Fact 5. The man did have a brain. The REM pattern suggested this, and unfortunately Arthur could see bits of gray matter between the cracks of the man's burned cranium. Fact 6. The man had blood flowing in his veins. What looked like scorched worms creeped above through toasted tissues, pulsing under the skin around the crisp skeleton. Arthur assumed these were veins. The blood on the sheets seemed to confirm it. Fact 7. And this is the most disturbing fact of all. It was a culmination of the other facts. It was the fact that Arthur couldn't fit into his understanding of the world, his understanding of the universe, his understanding of the power that governed everything. This was the fact that this man was alive against all odds. What was he? Arthur returned to his original question. Was this patient a man? Again, brain function would suggest he was. But what truly determined humanity in life? The soul. Did the gruesome collection of bloody, incinerated human remains have a soul? Arthur decided it was time to enter the room. After all, it was his job to find out. Peeling his fingers from the door jamb and rubbing them to put life back into him, he took the hesitant step forward. Arthur could hear his sucking rush of respiration even over the sound of the monitor's rhythmic beeps and wheeze to click the man's impossible breathing. Stopping, Arthur looked around the room for the first time since Nurse Ackerman had opened the door. There wasn't much to see. The room was a white-walled, like every other room in the Hercules Hospital. The man's bed sat in the middle of the room, surrounded by monitors. On one side of the bed, an IV pole held one pouch of, fluids, nutrients? Did the man need either? An IV line ran into the port tapped in the man's radius, or his ulna. Arthur couldn't tell from where he stood. Even though he wasn't a life support, the man did have electrical leads affixed to his head and his heart. It was surreal to see the life-affirming equipment attached to what looked like something in a morgue. The man even had a pulse ox monitor in his left index finger bone. How was that working? Pushed off to one side of the bed, a high black paddled vinyl visitor's chair next to an empty rolling tray. The chair was positioned so its user could use a narrow window that overlooked Hercules' possible parking lot. The wall opposite the window held a whiteboard. In other rooms, you might see medication schedules written there, but this one was clean. Next to the whiteboard, an LED X-ray viewer hung over the wall. When Arthur stepped over the window, he looked out and saw a long driveway he and Ruby had pedaled up just 20 minutes before. Why did it feel like it happened in another reality? Maybe in some other lifetime. Standing by the window, Arthur suddenly felt an icy rawness bore a hole in the middle of his back. The feeling was so powerful that Arthur spun around awkwardly, reaching behind himself, trying to rub the assaulted area. What was that? It felt like something was trying to reach into his soul. You felt it, didn't you? Nurse Ackerman was back. Felt what? Arthur asked. You know what? Arthur ignored the nurse and sat down in the vinyl chair. He couldn't look at the man quite again. So he looked at Nurse Ackerman. Her uniform pants were too short. He could see her black socks for an inch or so off white skin, even them and hem in her pants. We'd be remiss if we didn't warn you, she said. We? Myself, Nurse Thomas, and Nurse Colton. We've worked in the hospice wing the longest. We know that he wrinkled his nose at the word, what that is. And what is he? Arthur stammered. Evil, Father Blythe. Evil, pure and simple. Arthur shook his head. Just because he looks like that, that's not the evil, Nurse Ackerman cut in. He waved her hand, a revolting mass in the bed. Then what is? It's what made inside of that. Inside, as in under the bones, in the organs? Nurse Ackerman flicked her hand as Arthur was asking stupid questions. Who cares what's in there? She shook her head and sighed. I knew you wouldn't believe me. Opening a file Arthur had been noticed she was holding, she crossed an X-ray viewer. There, she slapped 3 brain scan images into place and pointed. Look. Arthur gingerly stepped around the man's bed as if it might attack him. Nurse Ackerman lifted her chin toward the brain scan. See? There. She pointed at the scan. And there. Arthur leaned forward, had no idea what he was looking at. I'm sorry, you need to explain. Nurse Ackerman sighed. These are coronal, sagittal, and cross-sectional scans of the man's brain. Can you see the same thing in all of them? Arthur couldn't. So he said, you'll need to tell me what we're seeing. She sighed again. Our brains have 4 lobes. The frontal, parietal, occipital, and temporal. She tapped the area of each strain. Unless the brain has a tumor or damage, some of the trauma, like an injury or stroke, signals to each of the 4 lobes will be relatively coherent. Although this man shows no sign of tumors or brain injury, the lobe signals aren't coherent. She tapped the scans again. Arthur focused the sagittal scan, which showed the man's bearing and profile. There he could see what it looked like. 2 different colors and textures in each area. He pointed at them. Is that what you're talking about? No, Zachary nodded. Your doctors believe each lobe of the man has 2 distinct electromagnetic signals. This is unheard of. What does this mean? Arthur asked. Nurse Ackerman made a chuckling sound. The doctors claim they don't know, but we know. She gave him an eye roll and clearly indicated he was daft. Me and my fellow nurses. What do you think it is? We don't think, we know. What do you know? 2 signals. She jabbed each lobe. Mean 2 living things, 2 entities. We're both vying for control of the brain. That's why they're present in all the lobes. But they're at odds with each other. We think they're tormenting each other. Arthur had no idea what to say to that, so he blurted out the first thing came to his mind. Where's the evil? Nurse Ackerman threw up her hands, then waved the scans. There! How can one brain have competing signals? It's the very playground of evil. Arthur thought maybe Nurse Ackerman would visit a different wing of the hospital, perhaps the psychiatric wing. But no, that wasn't kind. He should have more empathy for the woman. Anyone who was taking care of a man in the room was entitled to have a crazy theory or two. At least, she and the other nurses had a theory. Arthur had nothing. Nothing but his faith. Every man was good in him, Arthur said. But that's not a man. Okay, every living creature has a good in it. Nurse Ackerman reached out and yanked the scans for the viewing box. I knew you wouldn't listen. Arthur turned and looked at the man in the bed. That's my job, to see the good. Nurse Ackerman only shook his head and walked out of the room. Mia pulled a flimsy beige plastic chair out of one of the round tables in the staff break room. The room contained a small fridge, a counter, a microwave, and half a dozen tables and chairs. It smelled like a barbecue sauce and spoiled cheese. If Maya hadn't been so hungry, the smells would have ruined her appetite. But she worked up such an appetite so strong she could have eaten her lunch in a sewage treatment plant. Mia opened her bag of lunch and pulled out a turkey sandwich her boyfriend had made her that morning. He was so sweet. She put up a paper back thrower in front of her and opened a cola. She took a bite of the sandwich and washed it down with cola, noticing the do's and don'ts posters tacked over the plain white walls. They didn't make her feel welcome, nor did it make her feel any better about her decision to take the job. It was a stepping stone, right? That's what her boyfriend said. Keep your nose clean, do your job, good job, and you'll be moving up in no time, he said. Mia took another bite of the sandwich and chewed appreciatively. That's when her new boss, Nurse Ackerman, and two other big wing nurses of the hospice wing marched in. Mia immediately dropped her head and pretended to be reading. How long was he been in there? Nurse Thomas asked, flopping in the chair table behind Mia. Mia could smell her lavender-heavy perfume. Father Blythe? Nurse Ackerman said. All morning, moron. Two chairs scraped the floor, and Mia knew other two nurses had sat too. Nurse Colton was right behind Mia. Already, Mia had noticed several times that Miss Colton needed a stronger deodorant. Mia had already planned on listening to whatever nurses said. When she heard Father Blythe's name combined with moron, he tuned in more closely. Father Blythe was a very nice priest who had walked her up and started her new job. He had been so kind and patient with her. He was cute, too. Not in a boyfriend kind of way, but in an adorable old man kind of way. Short and slight, with slick, wavy gray hair and gentle brown eyes. Father Blythe looked like a grandfather Mia wished she had. She liked him immediately, and made her mad to hear someone call him names. Nurse Ackerman was a moron. Mia had learned early in the nursing school that not all nurses were nice. Some were so unpleasant, Mia wondered why he had gotten into nursing in the first place. But Nurse Ackerman was the worst she met so far. The woman was just plain icky, never smiling, stalking around and firing orders. Nurse Ackerman showed immediately that Mia wasn't going to get anything from her new boss except for criticism and judgment. And that what was it with the losing last names? We use surnames on this wing, Nurse Vermont. Nurse Ackerman said when Mia had introduced herself as the friendly I'm Mia. Fine. Mia didn't want to be friends anyway. And then there was Nurse Thomas. She was nice enough that there wasn't much there. Mia wondered how Nurse Thomas managed to keep her job. Round and sweet looking with her curly graying black hair. Nurse Thomas looked like she should be at home baking cookies. She called everyone sweetie and she loved to pat people on the back. But she wouldn't remember to bring her feet along if they were attached to the ankles. Already at morning, Mia had spent what seemed like half her shift finding things that Nurse Thomas had lost. Nurse Colton was the only reasonable, normal nurse Mia had met so far. In her mid-40s, Mia guessed, Nurse Colton was not an athletic-looking woman with brown hair, chopped short in a boyish cut, and a gray tan. She was nice enough, Mia supposed, that she was too serious, as if she had something heavy on her mind. Mia picked up her sandwich to take another bite. What did you tell him? Nurse Colton asked Nurse Ackerman. Well, we know. I told him there's evil inside the man. Mia held a sandwich in front of her face. Evil? He refuses to see it, of course. Nurse Ackerman said dismissively. Well, we know better, don't we, sweeties? Nurse Thomas said. I can barely think about it without being so scared I want to throw up. Yes, we know better, Miss Colton said. Nurse Ackerman got up and plucked a plastic bag of the carrots in the fridge. No wonder she's so skinny, Mia thought. He's idealistic, Nurse Ackerman said. I am too, Nurse Thomas said. But then the writing's on the wall. It's on the wall. Mia took a bite of her sandwich and willed herself to be invisible. He's new, Miss Colton said. He'll catch on. I'm not so sure. He's determined, Miss Ackerman said. Time will tell, Nurse Thomas said. It always does. The nurses chatted for a few more minutes about some of the patients Mia had already met. She wondered what the man with the evil inside. Was he a patient? He must be if Father Blythe were visiting him, or maybe Father Blythe was visiting someone else. Mia listened, but she never heard another word from the priest. Did she need to find him and warn him? But warn him about what? It sounded like he had already been warned and didn't believe the warning. Father had been sitting in the vinyl visiting chair for over 3 hours. During that time he accomplished a little, except that he could now look at the man in the bed without nearly losing his breakfast. He made him feel slightly better about himself, with the self-congratulation it was unearned. Arthur knew his belly was empty now, so he had no breakfast to lose. And he had no business being pleased, either. He hadn't yet been able to approach the man's bed. He was still completely repulsed, not by just the man, but by the bloody sheets he lay on, whatever it was leaking from the tubes snaked out from underneath him. Attached to heavens knew where, those tubes curled off into the bed and ran into bags hanging on the bed frame. Arthur could hear the body waves dribbling into plastic that were regrettably see-through. Arthur didn't venture to look ever since Nurse Ackerman left. Arthur hadn't said one word out loud. All he'd done was stare and pray. Now he decided he had to do something else. What if the man wanted to communicate? Arthur had no idea how or even whether it was possible, but he did give him a chance. Sitting in his chair, 5 feet from the bed, he was not giving a man a chance. Arthur took a deep breath and scooted his chair a foot closer. Yes, that's very brave, Arthur muttered to himself. He chuckled. One of the monitors let out an unusual beep, or rather a normal beep on an unexpected time. In 3 hours, Arthur had learned the monitor's rhythm, and now the rhythm had varied. Was it because he talked? Breathing shallowly through his mouth because he got closer to the man, the words, the smell were. Arthur dragged the chair nearer to the bed and made a screeching sound to the floor, but the monitors didn't react to that. Arthur got the chair within a foot of the bed, just outside of the distance he thought the man could reach. He knew it wasn't friendly or caring, but Arthur wasn't ready to risk touching or being touched by the man yet. In the 3 hours he sat there, he realized that part of him, a truly traitorous part of him, had believed that Nurse Ackerman had said was something evil keeping the man alive. Just thinking of that disturbed him greatly. How could he be a priest, believe that evil is more power over body than good? What if someone good was keeping the man alive? Wasn't that more believable? Of course it was, he told himself. It was divine energy that created worlds. Couldn't that energy sustain life beyond time when life was viable? Certainly it could, although Arthur's logical side argued divine energy wasn't the only kind of energy in the world. Stop it, Arthur admitted himself. The monitors beeped out of rhythm again. You can hear me? Arthur asked, scooching the chair closer to the bed despite himself. The monitor's beep stuttered. The man in the bed didn't move. Arthur leaned forward. My name's Father Blythe. No, forget that. My name is Arthur. Is there anything I can do for you? I just want to help. The monitors beeped erratically for several seconds. Arthur had a silent prayer, asking for strength. Divest me of habitual notions of what is and isn't good. What is and isn't possible. Let me see past my senses are telling me. Give me the strength to see this man as the love I know he is, and help me interact with him accordingly. Arthur sat still and took several slow breaths before reaching out and taking the man's scorched finger buds in his hands. It required every ounce of his heart not to recoil in the dry, raspy phalanges in his hand. He felt like he was holding hands with a tree branch that had just come through the forest fire. No, that wasn't true. It was worse than that by far, because in addition to the snobby hard object in his hand, he could feel the pulsing slither of the man's veins beneath the parched skin covering. Give me strength, Arthur prayed again. He must have gotten it. It was the only explanation for why the scream when the finger bones and veins had felt he held moved. He did, however, drop the hand. He was human, after all. Was it because he was polite, or was it because he was afraid of whatever entity had moved the fingers? Entity, what is he thinking? It wasn't an entity, this was a man, hideous circumstances. It wasn't a foe to be vanquished. He was a human being, worthy of love. You are loved, Arthur said. He could feel the truth from his words, couldn't he? Actually, he wasn't sure. He usually felt a flush of warmth and a surge of lightness when he had those words, but now nothing. The man, however, felt something. He must have when he began moving his index finger. At first, Arthur thought the finger motions were random reflexes caused by nerve firing indiscriminately. Then he realized the finger motion was purposeful. Could you do that again? He asked. He didn't let himself wonder how the man could hear him. The man had no ears. And Arthur didn't want to look into the stored tissue at the side of the man's skull or to see if his endurance or whatever else might be made possible to translate vibration into sound were still intact. Apparently the man could hear him, because the feeder repeated the motion. Arthur watched closely. It's an F. he said excitedly when he realized a finger had written a letter in the air. The finger stopped. Arthur took the information. Just a second. Arthur dug out his satchel and pulled out a small pad of the paper and pencil. Opening pad, he wrote down F. Okay, I'm ready. Would the finger move again? Yes. This time it traced an A in the air. What in the name of all good and holy are you doing? Nurse Ackerman yelled from the doorway. Arthur fumbled the pencil, and it fell from his finger. And then he bent over to pick it up. He bumped his head on the bed frame. He also inhaled the odor of whatever fluid was draining from the man onto the bed. It smelled like a cross between bile and vomit, and Arthur's gag reflex activated. He stood and backed away from the bed, facing the nurse, trying not to vomit. He's communicating, Arthur announced. Nurse Ackerman strode in the room. I can see that, he said. And what makes you think that's a good idea? Well, it's a breakthrough. It's progress. Progress is always good. If you think that, you're dumber than you look. Arthur chose to ignore her. Do you even know what he's communicating? Nurse Ackerman said. For all you know, he could be hexing you. Hexing him? Arthur kept his face blank. But Nurse Ackerman had a point. What if the man was trying to communicate? Would it ever be clear? What? Well, let's find out, Arthur said. We should have called a different priest, Nurse Ackerman snapped. Just ignore her, Arthur said to the man in the bed. He sat back down and repositioned his pencil over the pad. Give me the next letter. The finger moved again. Nurse Ackerman gasped and began murmuring under her breath. Arthur wrote down Z. Faz? Okay, he said. Let's keep going. Arthur had written down Fazbears die. By the time Nurse Ackerman returned to the room, this time she wasn't alone. She had two other nurses with her. Both in the same dark blue uniforms, the other nurses also wore similar open-mouthed, wide-eyed expressions. They were obviously appalled by what the man was doing. One of the nurses, a round, grandmotherly-looking woman, covered her mouth with a hand. The other nurse, a tan woman who looked like she spent the weekends climbing mountains, put her hands on her hips and glared at Arthur. She hoped that she wasn't going to get aggressive with him, because she could take him without breaking a sweat. They didn't say anything, though, so Arthur kept mowing, one letter at a time. The man spat out his communication in the air. Then he was done, complexion indicated by no further finger bone movement. Arthur had a string of incomprehensible letters in his hands. Fazbears dissenter. Fazbears dissenter. What did that mean? Arthur frowned at the letters and turning slashes between various sets. He tried several combinations. Fazbears dissenter. Fazbears dissenter. Fazbears dissenter. Enter dissenter. I think I have the center right, he mumbled to himself, but the other parts, he tapped his pencil on his pad. Wait, what if he missed letters? What had been hard to interpret his motion his bony fingers? Okay, if Arthur played with the letters some more, landing on finally Fazbears dissenter. Arthur thought back over. Dissenter. It mean the abbreviation before, but some of the charities he worked with. Distribution center. Arthur shouted. It had to be. What about Fazbears? He needed a phone book, he told the nurses, who remained at the foot of the bed watching Arthur as if he were a live reality show. I needed to look up Fazbears. Fazbear Entertainment? The grandmotherly nurse whispered. What? Arthur asked. Quiet, Nurse Thomas, Nurse Ackerman hissed. Nurse Thomas covered her mouth with a plump hand, but it was too late. Arthur processed what she said. Fazbear Entertainment Distribution Center, Arthur cried out in glee. That is amazing. He looked and turned to the nurses. They were all pale, and even the tan one, and they all stared at him, and the man in the bed was obvious dread. This is remarkable, Arthur said. He has never done anything like this before. Certainly not, Nurse Ackerman shook her head. You don't understand the forces you're playing with. Forces? Arthur decided he had enough of the nurses. He turned back to the man. Let's see. How can you tell what this place means to you? Arthur thought for a second. He considered asking a man in Air White why he'd just given Arthur the name of the place. But he could take hours, and Arthur figured the man didn't have the strength for that, given that he should have been dead long ago. Lengthy communications didn't seem like a good idea. Plus, as excited as he was, Arthur really didn't need to leave the room. It seemed to him the sulfur smell was getting stronger, and now there was a hint of feces odor wafting up in the bed. Did the man's bowels work? Arthur had wondered before, but he was going to look now. I have an idea, he said, relieved that he did have an idea. He could hear the nurses whispering in the doorway. He blocked them out. Why don't I make guesses about why this place is important to you? When I get the right one, you can either raise a finger or react to the monitors, pick it up. The monitors hiccuped. and Arthur took that as an assent. He threw out the first guess. It's where you used to work. Nothing. You have family there. Nope. You have unfinished business there. No reaction. You hid something there. I guess that made Arthur smile. It was a dead giveaway that he loved mystery and adventure books and movies. Arthur noticed that the nurses had come farther into the room. Now they stood in the semicircle and a couple feet from the end of the bed. Arthur wondered if they were still there, if the thought of what he was doing was so abhorrent. Why didn't they just leave? It was the last place you were before you got hurt. No movement, no monitor reaction. You need something from there. Nothing. You've always wanted to go there. The monitors blipped so infamously Arthur thought he was imagining it. But what if he wasn't? Is this place where you want to go? The monitors react. We can't go anyplace, sweetie, the round nurse said. You can only go, well, someplace other than Earth. Arthur stood and walked over to the nurses. You mean hell? He whispered. Nurse Ackerman gave him one sharp head nod. The tan nurse said, well, duh. The other monitors in the room went crazy. Beeps were sounding so fast they blurred together into one long screech. Arthur turned back to the men. They suddenly understood. You want to go back to this place before you die. All monitors fell silent, completely silent, for 5 seconds. The only sound from the room was the combined breathing of Arthur, the nurses, and the man. And then the monitor started beeping in a normal rhythm again. Arthur turned back to the nurses. He wants to go to Fazbear Entertainment Distribution Center before he dies. Impossible, Nurse Ackerman said. Arthur sat in a low-slung, dark blue visitor's chair in front of the clustered desk that belonged to the assistant of the Hercules Possible administrator. Judging from the boy's age, Arthur suspected he was more than 2 people removed from the person in charge. But that was okay. Arthur knew how to climb bureaucratic ladders. So I'm not sure what you want, the assistant's assistant said. This time it was Peter Fredericks. Call me Pete, he called Arthur. Pete's desk in a corner cubicle in the room of similar cubicle is nowhere near the Hercules Hospital administrator's office. Most of the people in the cubicles were talking on the phone. Those who weren't on the phone were typing in their keyboards. The room was filled with half conversation and the click-click of typing. Arthur filtered out the sounds and focused on Pete's. As if I said, Pete, I want to know if there's anything on the file of the man in robe 1280 that indicates why he might not want to go to Fazbear Entertainment Distribution Center before he dies. Well, yes, you said that. Pete scratched the sparse facial hair on his chin. It appeared to be a following attempt at the goatee. Probably intended to cover up the acne here. But I don't know why you want to go. No, Pete said in a voice that hadn't been yet found in an adult depth of tone. I want to know because it might help me make it happen for him. The man in room 1280 can't be moved, when Pete said. Man in room 1280, he looked down his desk and chewed on the cuticles with a great concentration. So I've been told. But nothing is impossible, Arthur replied. Moving, him is... Arthur braced his hands into a soft cushion under his butt and moved himself with effort forward in his seat. Pete, isn't the very existence of man in the room 1280 proof that nothing is impossible? If we can't be in the room still breathing, still able to communicate, a desire might it not be possible to fulfill a desire for him? Think about it, Pete. Pete glanced out at Arthur. His face was white and the walls of the tiny cubicle. Pete was clearly thinking about the man in 1280. And he didn't want it to be. He looked down again and tapped the very thin file folder on the desk in front of him. An open container of Chinese food tipped against the stack of thicker folders and threatened to spill its contents. From the aroma, Arthur guessed it was sweet and sour chicken. Well, there's nothing in there. Nothing about a Fazbear or anything. I see, Arthur said, and he battled a chair in a few seconds and finally managed to stand. Well then, I'll need to talk to someone who can give me permission to take man to the Fazbear Entertainment Distribution Center, I assume. That's not you? Pete stood, bumped a thick stack of files on his desk, and spilled it Chinese food. Yep, sweet and sour chicken. Pete ignored the sticky mess on his desk and scurried after Arthur as he turned to leave. Grabbing the sleeve of Arthur's cassock, Pete said, No one's going to give you permission. We'll see, Arthur said. Arthur stepped out of the hospital and stood under the portico. And he watched the mist waft sideways in a steady southerly breeze. He and Ruby would be soaked by the time they got home. Not in a hurry to start his wet, cold journey, he scanned the black and silver molten sky. There was no rays of sun to be seen now. Twilight hovered. Arthur took a deep breath and rained clay to air. He needed years' worth of such rest to clear his olfactory system of the torments that had been endured today. It wasn't some kind to think about how Madame Ran in room 1280 smelled, but Arthur couldn't help it. After over 7 hours by the man's side, he thought the smell might never leave him again. Nurse Ackerman had tried to get Arthur to leave right after the man's communication breakthrough, but Arthur had refused. He spent the next 3 hours sitting and man praying, asking for help. Arthur needed to know if he was simply helping a tortured soul or something else. He never got a clear answer, so in the absence of definitive evidence to the contrary, he chose to stay positive as man needed help. Hi, Father Blythe. Father smiled. Mia, he said as he turned. How was your first day at work? Arthur would probably have answered the question for her. Her ponytail had slid over her head, and the dust of the strands had come loose to fly around her face. He kept blowing one of them away on her nose. Her mascara was smudged, and there was blackish stain in her uniform. I guess it was okay, I guess. Well, not okay exactly. My dad used to say when I asked him a question, well, Mia, that's what he called me. All the one word like it was my name. He'd say, well, Mia, my Mia, it was a day. So I guess I had a day. It was a day. Arthur nodded. Sometimes we can do is have a day. Mia tilted her head and studied Arthur. I think you had a day too. Maybe. Arthur nodded. That I did. A group of boisterous men in soccer uniforms converged in a portico. They were mud and grass stained and appeared to be celebrating a victory they had charged into the hospital entrance. Arthur guessed one of their teammates had gotten injured. Mia stepped closer to Arthur as one of the men whistled at her. Arthur ushered her back to the friendly panical Hydria as they stood next to the morning. Arthur couldn't believe he spent a whole day at Hercules. Peggy had been furious with him. She'd called her to have her reschedule his appointments for the day. Now he was going to have to tell her to reschedule the rescheduling. Have you been here all day? Mia asked. I was thinking about that. Yes, I have. It wasn't a plan, but man's plan. God laughs. Mia giggled and then covered her mouth. Oh, I hope that's not like an insult or something for a priest. Arthur laughed. No, not at all. I stood in silence and watched cars coming and going under the portico. They both coughed and a loud diesel engine belched a gas 3 feet away. Arthur's stomach growled. He realized he hadn't eaten anything but a protein bar since he left the rectory. But Mia looked like he wanted to say something, so he lingered. Plus, he just enjoyed being relatively fresh air, looking at the lovely human being. Father Blythe? Yes, Mia? Can I ask you something? Of course. Mia looked around, then stepped closer to Arthur. Her hair smelled like ammonia, but her breath smelled like peppermint. Father, do you believe in evil? Arthur raised an eyebrow. I do. Do you think there's evil in there? Mia lifted a shoulder in the direction of the hospital. Arthur frowned. He believed evil was everywhere, but so was good. The eternal battle was waged daily, all over the world. Why do you ask? Mia wrinkled her nose and twisted her mouth. Can I ask another question? Arthur nodded. Did you spend the day with someone in the hospice wing? Arthur's frown grew deeper. What are you digging for? Well, telling her he was in the wing didn't reveal any confidences. Yes, I did. Why? Mia opened her eyes wide. The Arthur could almost hear her brain cells shifting gears. I don't know about the nurses on that wing. I mean, besides me, but I don't feel like I'm really one of them yet. It's the others who, Nurse Ackerman, Nurse Colton, and Nurse Thomas. Ah, so it's just that. As the moment a zippy red sports car whipped into the driveway of the portico and beeped its horn. Mia's face lit up as she saw it. That's my boyfriend. She blew a good-looking young man behind the wheel a kiss. He turned back to Arthur. I'm sorry, I need to go. Of course. Mia took a step forward to the red car. But Mia, she turned. Some people have closed minds. Always keep yours open. She looked at him. Her face was solemn as he seen it. I will, she promised. Bye, Father Blythe. Bye, Mia. Father watched the sports car whiz by. He thought about the man in room 1280, his attempt to get answers in the hospital administration office, and his brush off Pete. Made it clear Arthur wasn't going to find out why the man wanted to go to Fazbear Entertainment Distribution Center. But no matter. It wasn't Arthur's business. It was his job to ensure the man got there. However, it was easier said than done. Pete and Nurse Ackerman were the only ones at Hercules Hospital who thought that such a trip was impossible. Arthur had a battle ahead, and he just hoped that he was on the right side of it. Mia's second day of work started weirdly. Unable to find her fellow nurses when she arrived at the nursing station for her excitement, Mia had shrugged and then went to room, checking on her patients. Mia didn't love taking care of hospice patients because she had too much empathy for the families. She knew they often suffered even more than the patients, but she did find the work satisfying when she did it right. She wouldn't have minded a new job as much it wasn't any other nurses. And the other thing, Mia shook her head and strode briskly down the hall. Popping in and out of rooms, she checked IVs, adjusted pillows, filled pitchers, and emptied urine collection bags. Then she reached the last room and told the attendant to stay for room 1200. She wondered why the rest of the doors on the strangely long hall were closed. She lingered in the hallway just outside the last open door. A strange room was across from her, its door slightly open. Mia saw a shadow flit past the opening. Sucking in a deep breath, Mia tiptoed across the hall, making sure her crepe sole didn't squeak on the tiles. She hesitated outside of the storage room. She was about to open the door and investigate what she heard noises. She knew immediately that she found her fellow nurses. Mia was about to walk in and ask what was going on, but she heard the word kill. Mia went into still and silent as the floor she stood on. She took a stealthy step to the wall and pressed against it, but it put her ear to the silver opening that hinged side of the door. I suppose we mustn't, Miss Thomas said. Someone has to do it, Miss Colton said. I don't have a problem with it. It's not like murder, because it's not human. It's extermination, said Miss Ackerman. We're going nothing more and less, ridding the hospital of vermin. Oh, I wish it was much more, Miss Thomas said. Don't you? Killing rats or cockroaches is good, of course, but ridding the world of evil, that's more than pest removal. That's a calling. It's heroic. Nurse Thomas' voice had climbed to a new level of self-righteousness. Heroic? Mia's fingers twitched. She wanted so bad to throw open the door and ask what the three odd women were talking about. Well, I agree with you both, Nurse Ackerman said, but others don't see it quite the same way. Technically, he's one of our patients. We're going to kill a patient? Mia turned around. What should he do? They don't pay me enough to call that thing a patient, Nurse Colton said. I don't need the people to understand. I know what's right. Killing evil is right. Nurse Colton must have been standing close to the door, because her body odor nearly bolted out of the smells of the bleaching wood polish and usually emitted from the storage room. Mia hoped she didn't have any telltale odors or scents herself. She caught the end of her ponytail and inhaled, but she only got a faint whiff of her conditioner. Absolutely, Nurse Thomas continued. Mia dropped her ponytail and returned to listening. Then we agreed, Nurse Ackerman said. The women must have been nodding, because they went silent. I'll be the one who does it. I'm nurse. It's a responsibility, Nurse Ackerman declared. Well, do whatever you need us to do, Nurse Colton offered. I need morphine, Nurse Ackerman said. I can fudge the tracking, and Nurse Colton said. We can take a little there and a little there from the other patients, Nurse Thomas added. We have to hurry, Nurse Ackerman said. We don't know how quickly that priest will move. He's determined enough to get the hospital to cave, and we have to get this done before the thing in room 1280 can leave. The nurses must have nodded again, but now Mia could hear faint rustles in the inside of the storage room. She decided it better go. Pushing over the wall, Mia took a step, and that's when she saw her trying to convince herself she hadn't before. A little boy slithered out of the storage room. He came sideways through the slim door opening. Mia slapped a hand over her mouth and stifled a scream. She gritted her teeth, aspirated herself. She had the same reaction when she was just a boy, seeing this boy just the day before. And then he was the only little boy, a cute, playful little boy, with his early black hair and rosy cheeks. The boy's adorable factor was diminished slightly just by two things. First, he wore a cheap alligator mask that covered before his forehead and his eyes. The gator's mouth rested on the boy's impatient nose. Second, the boy had a toothy grin, just like a little too devilish to be endearing. One of the notch pads acceptable on a scale of mischief. He was a little boy, and little boys like to look like this. Mia's cousin, Lucas, was the case in point. That child always looked like he was up to no good, and he usually was. So why did this boy make Mia want to scream? Before she could answer her own question, the boy winked at her and scampered down the hall. Mia turned to watch, but realized the nurses were about to exit. Mia darted to open the door as the last patient she attended before loitering outside the storage room, looking for the boy again, but she was gone. Then Mia burst into room 200. Mr. Nolan, the room's occupant, looked up at the crossword puzzle. Hello, Nurse Vermont, he said. How fortuitous. What is the other word for hell? 6 letters, starts with S. Shades, Myra blurted, wondering why the word was on the tip of her tongue. Mr. Nolan, whose grunt face is haunted by sunken eyes of the soon to be gone from this world, slowly wrote his puzzle. Exactly right. You're an angel. It took 2 days for Nurse Ackerman to acquire enough morphine for her task. At least she hoped it was enough. She wasn't actually sure what was enough was. Just in case, normal treatment dosages versus overdoses had never been irrelevant in the man in room 1280. Nothing about him was normal, so there was no reason to assume medication would affect him the same as any other humans of the size and weight. Allowing for this, Nurse Ackerman and other colleagues gathered through enough extra morphine to kill an entire wing of evil patients. He figured she'd start with what she thought might work and add to the necessary. As soon as she had a quantity of morphine that gave her at least some level of confidence in the success of her mission, she didn't waste any time. A friend who worked at admin had informed Nurse Colton that Father Blythe was relentless in his campaign to get the man in room 1280 to Fazbear Entertainment Distribution Center. Nurse Ackerman strode down the hallway, her rubber soles smacking the tiles. Her thoughts about Father Blythe made her footsteps even louder than usual. She clenched her fists. She was so angry with the man. How could Father Blythe be so clueless and blind? Couldn't she see that he was being duped, being used as a tool for wickedness? Wasn't the very place the man wanted to visit a clue? Nurse Ackerman was research for Fazbear Entertainment, and she was alarmed by what she found. The company's distribution center was a central hub for all Fazbear-related toys, costumes, and decor. It shipped to restaurants and specialty and retail stores. She looked at some sort of toys and costumes, and they were unsettling to say the least. What better container for pure malevolence than some creepy toy? Nurse Ackerman suspected that whatever was inside the man in room 1280 had a plan that needed to be stopped. Checking over the shoulder one more time, Nurse Ackerman picked up her pace. She hoped she'd have enough time to finish the job at hand before Nurse Vermont finished her lunch. Nurse Vermont was another challenge the nurses had to handle. The timing of her addition to the hospice wing roster was unfortunate. She was just a little too perky, a little too energetic for comfort. Nurse Ackerman had given Nurse Vermont a little test the first day, talking about the man in room 1280 and Father Blythe in the break room while Nurse Vermont ate. And if she turned and asked what they were talking about, they'd have to include her. But she just eavesdropped, and Nurse Ackerman didn't trust eavesdroppers. At the doorway of room 1280, Nurse Ackerman paused. She looked behind her. The hallway was empty. It was time. Putting her shoulders back, Nurse Ackerman entered the room. She had been considered closing the door, but she couldn't do it. None of the other nurses had ever closed themselves inside room 1280. Quite frankly, they were afraid to. She was only needed a minute away. Crossing the loathsome thing in the bed, Nurse Ackerman took out the first glass vial of morphine and thrust it into the needle end of her syringe. She ignored the flutters of excitement that danced over her skin. It wasn't that she was eager to kill, it was that she would be such a relief to rid the hospice wing, her hospital, her world, of this stain upon mankind. It was a steady hand. Mr. Ackerman injected the first morphine into the man's IV port. She watched their heart monitor. Its rhythm didn't falter. She had suspected this to happen. Smoothly, she pulled out a second vial. But that's when she heard a giggle. Nurse Ackerman pivoted toward the door, but no one was there. Stepping away from the bed, she went to the door and looked in the hallway. Had Nurse Vermont finished her lunch? The hallway was empty. The Nurse Ackerman heard another giggle, and this time it was from behind her. A blast of cold rushed around her spine and tightened into the vice grip of her bowels. Slowly, as if it was to face some wild animal she didn't want to spook, Nurse Ackerman turned. She didn't know what she expected to see. She was prepared for literally anything. How could she not be? Anyone who had a man in room 1280 as a patient would have already ready for anything, but she saw nothing. Everything was just as it had been when she entered the room. Even so, she stood next to the man for several moments to be sure, watching him to see if he would discern the change. She couldn't. Well, that wasn't true. She could notice one change. The smell in the room was worse now than it had been when she first came in. It was intensified, as if someone had been fiddling with the hospital's thermostat, and allowed the room to heat significantly. The odor was ghastly. She better get on with it. Nurse Ackerman still held a second vial of morphine, so she quickly inserted her syringe and emptied it into the IV port. Again, she watched, and again, nothing. Nurse Ackerman straightened her spine and pulled the rest of the morphine vial out of her pocket. 11 more. She laid them on the edge of the bed in a tidy row. She injected them if she had to, one right after the other. She wasn't going to wait for the result. Reaching for the third vial, she heard a giggle again. Her hand stopped in midair. The giggle came from right next to her. A little black-haired boy stood by her side, looking up, and she was grinning a grin so fair that it acted like a siphon, striking the strength from Nurse Ackerman's limbs. She felt herself start to crumble toward the floor, and she caught herself at the edge of the bed just in time. What? He was just a little boy. Why was she so afraid? He ran out of the room. The Nurse Ackerman tried to ready her racing heart straight. She needed to get herself under control. So she would return to what she needed to do, but her mind, her memories, wouldn't let her calm. Instead, she transported, wholly against her will, into her past. She was deposited next to the bed of her dying son, the one who had left this world and taken him every smile Nurse Ackerman might have ever smiled. Even the agony she was living, Nurse Ackerman experienced for the millionth time that moment when her son's death had reached into her heart and torn it apart. She had always been in the shell of a woman, but Elijah's death had carved her out. Everything a barely functioning person who found a place among the living things who had tortured her with reminders of her life that once shared with her son. Even though her heart was frozen, she'd become a hospice nurse to help others to walk in her shoes. Stop this right now, she admonished herself. She didn't have time for this misery. Nurse Ackerman pushed aside her past, along with the question of who the little boy was and why he was there. He also boxed up the puzzle why he was so terrifying. One thing at a time, she told herself. Once again, she reached for her vial. Before her fingers could close around it, though, a child-sized shadow flashed in front of her. It was streaked by as the vials flew off the bed and hurtled toward the floor. They were shattered on impact. Morphine puddled constantly in the tiles. Nurse Thomas's plan was simple because Nurse Thomas was simple. A lover of growing flowers, cooking her family large, fattening dinners and needle-pointing Bible verses, Nurse Thomas, Beatrice to her friends, had become nurse because she also loved people, simply loved them. She wanted to serve them, however she could. These truths about Nurse Thomas were a little counter to where she was currently was. and what she currently was doing. Right now, she stood outside of room 1280, holding a pillow she tended to use as a weapon. But really, Nurse Thomas's goals were all congruent. She told herself, but she was about to do an act of love. An act of love was pure and simple as she was. Beatrice was going to do the same reason she did every day. She was going to do it to help people. Nurse Thomas looked over her shoulder. She was alone. Just because she wasn't going to help doesn't mean it was wanted to see and do again. To no one besides Nurse Ackerman and Nurse Colton seemed to understand. Pausing to say a short prayer outside the room 1280, Nurse Thomas hugged the pillow and then opened the door. She ducked her head as soon as she was in the room. She always did it in this room 1280. It was a way of seeing well enough what to do and what she needed to do without having to look too closely at what was in the bed. She didn't want to look at what was in the bed because it was the grotesque thing she'd never seen. A macabre combination of writhing slime and firebrand dross. A man-shaped mass of bone and tissue in the lead literally made Nurse Thomas's eyes burn, as in they're looking at a solar eclipse without shades. This effect was so intense she'd been tried wearing sunglasses in this room to see if they'd help, which they didn't. Reaching through her mouth because Nurse Ackerman was right, the smell was much worse than ever. Nurse Thomas approached the head of the bed, giving the pillow one last squeeze. The held it in two hands in front of her. She knew Nurse Ackerman and Nurse Colton both thought her idea of killing the thing in the bed was silly. Maybe it was, but sometimes the easy solution was the best one. Morphine hadn't worked, that was for sure. Nurse Thomas and fellow nurses had spent an hour the night before discussing the little boy Nurse Ackerman had seen. Both Nurse Thomas and Nurse Colton had seen him too. They even got Nurse Vermont to admit that she'd spotted him. Nurse Thomas didn't think. Vermont had told them everything she could see, but she told them enough. Earlier today, Nurse Thomas had overheard a couple orderlies talking about how people were seeing a little black-haired boy out of the hospital. The mystery of the boy wasn't necessarily related to room 1280, or was it? After Nurse Vermont wasn't home, and after handing over the hospice wing of the wait shift, the three nurses had shared coffee in the cafeteria, discussed the question, what had ever been important than the boy? What do you think the shadow was? Nurse Thomas had asked Nurse Ackerman as she tried to ignore the food smells in the room. She was hungry and couldn't wait to get home to eat cooked macaroni and cheese and green bean casserole. I think it was it. Whatever's inside the man. How did it get out? Nurse Thomas asked. I can't explain any part of this. Nurse Ackerman's voice was too loud and started to reveal several nurses and doctors sitting nearby. Forks clattered. Someone dropped a glass. She immediately dropped her voice to a whisper. It doesn't matter. What matters is we need to try again. That's when Nurse Thomas volunteered her homespun little plan. She'd smother the man in room 1280 with a pillow. Nurse Ackerman wanted to try again with morphine, but Nurse Thomas convinced her that the man in 1280 had never was inside the man in room 1280. Would be ready for that. They needed to take him or it by surprise. So that's where she was. The previous night, Nurse Thomas had practiced. She'd done a bit of research and she discovered it took 3 minutes to suffocate someone with a pillow. She had to find out if she could hold a pillow forcibly over something for that long, or even longer. Learning from Nurse Ackerman's experience, Nurse Thomas figured normally lethal doses of morphine didn't kill the thing. Suffocation was an extra effort as well. Nurse Thomas took pillowy herself, but she wasn't. Hours of cooking, cleaning, and guarding, and neither work, had given her an unexpected upper body strength. The strength came in handy when she did her pillow experiment with a doll she thought for a niece. That's when no problem holding a pillow over the doll for 7 minutes. Although her muscles were burning a little by the time she was done. She received the strength she needed now. She was sure Nurse Thomas took a step forward the bed. She paused and listened. And there was no giggling of the kind Nurse Ackerman had described. Apparently the boy wasn't around. Tightening her grip on the pillow, Nurse Thomas marched on the bed and shoved it down hard over the man's face. Or at least over where his face should have been. Nurse Thomas' muscles are tense, poised, and ready for anything. Yet nothing happened, at first. And then the pillow started filling with blood. It came through the middle of the pillow and soon it was spreading outward, seeping incoherently toward Nurse Thomas' fingers. And that's when she didn't let go. She was focused on the end result. After 6.5 minutes, the monitor's steady beep 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 picked up its face. Then, glory be, another minute it shifted its sustained tone to flatline. She was doing it. Just a few more seconds should be enough. The pillow was almost fully saturated with blood, and now Nurse Thomas noticed a sickly green fluid that was coming through the pillow as well. She gagged but kept pressing. That's when the shadow darted in front of Nurse Thomas and tore the pillow from her grasp. Before she could even think about retrieving it, the pillow ruptured, its contents ejecting into the room and all over her. Sticky, odious blood went into her mouth and up her nose, putrid slime through in her eyes, and bits of cloth and the foam stuck to the fluids that solaced her skin and coagulated her hair. Nurse Thomas didn't make a sound, but the monitors did. They shifted her steady flatline tone back to a stable, even rhythm. Nurse Thomas fainted into the middle of the sickening mess on the floor. Arthur was getting frustrated. He often didn't get frustrated because he believed in universal timing, but that timing seemed to be a little off right now. It was now 5 days since the man in room 1280 had been able to communicate with him. Since then, Arthur had picked the man daily. Although he had stayed a couple hours each time, the rest of the time he was at the hospital. He was in the administration offices trying to get someone to listen to him. What harm could it do? He said over and over to at least a dozen different people. He simply couldn't understand why moving the man into 1280 was such a bad thing. Either he'd survive the experience and get whatever he wanted from the visit to Fazbear Entertainment Distribution Center, or he wouldn't. And if he didn't, well, Arthur couldn't help but think that would be a mercy. The hospital administration didn't agree. They all stood distracted. It seems the whole hospital has a buzz of repeating sightings of a little dark-haired boy wearing an alligator mask. Dozens of people had seen the boy, and thus far, no one had been able to talk to him. The police had called in and found the boy and figured out where he belonged, but none of the officers ever spotted him. Every time the boy was seen, the officers rushed to the location and reported. The boy was gone before the officers arrived. Meanwhile, patients and staff had seen the boy in locations all over the hospital. Apparently, a janitor even saw him in the hospital's basement, near the backup generators. As far as the hospital administration and police could determine, no one was missing a child who matched this description. Because no one had ever spoken to the boy and no one had been able to grab him, people were now wondering whether he was a ghost. A ghost with an alligator mask, of all things. But that wasn't Arthur's business. He had his own problems to solve. And today, he was taking a breather and arguing with the hospital personnel. He was having lunch with Mia. "Here I am," Mia called out as she wove her way through the wooden picnic tables in the outdoor eating area of the cafeteria. The tables were set up in pinkish stone pavers, within a larger patio lined with stone planters filled with orange and yellow mums. A half-dozen dark-eyed juncos and a couple of sparrows hopped among the flowers. The sun was reasserted as diamonds over the sky, and it was lighting up with fall's jewel colors, turning the trees surrounding Hercules Hospital into massive pieces of brilliant reds, yellows, and oranges. Only the faintest of breezes made the tree branches sway and the leaves on the ground gambol about. It was a glorious day. Mia's bright presence made it even brighter. "I hope you all have been waiting long," Mia said. "Not at all. Truthfully." Arthur had been there for 25 minutes. She had only been 15 minutes late. "I also hope you didn't bring your lunch, because my boyfriend made these amazing provolone and corned beef sandwiches." "Oh, you're not a vegetarian, are you? Or can you eat corned beef? Is it kosher or whatever?" Arthur said, "I'm not vegetarian," he said. "Oh, good," Mia replied. She pulled out 2 thick sandwiches of hoagie rolls, both tightly wrapped in plastic, and one hand to him. "How's it going with the admin?" she asked as soon as she'd taken a bite and washed it down with a soda. "It's not," admitted Arthur. Taking this fact that he'd run into Mia every day he'd been in the hospital as a sign of encouragement. Arthur had finally told her he was trying to get permission to take the patient out of the hospital, take the place the patient requested a visit. Mia surprised Arthur when she responded, "Oh, the man in room 280? How did you know?" he asked. "I overheard Nurse Ackerman and the others talking about him, and they caught me listening, so they told me about him. I haven't seen him yet or anything. They think I'm not ready for that. I think I'm more ready than they think I am, but whatever, I'm plenty busy." She took a bite of sandwich. "I'm not sure you're ready either," Arthur said. He hated the idea of the chief-row girl having to see... But wait, what? That wasn't very kind, was it? The man couldn't help what she looked like. Arthur didn't bit into his sandwich and immediately knew why Mia was so crazy about her boyfriend. The man was a sandwich saint. "This is amazing," he said. "I know, right?" She grinned. They both chewed for a few seconds. Then Mia finished chewing. She said, "The man in room 1280, that's bad, huh?" Arthur shrugged. "I've overheard him talking about other things too," Mia said. "Who?" he said. "Nurse Ackerman and the others." Mia was quiet for a minute. "Certainly prominent. What other things?" he asked. Mia bit her lower lip and then waved a hand. "It doesn't matter." She took a drink of soda. "You've heard about the boy, right?" Arthur laughed. "How could I not? Everyone's talking about him." "I saw him," Mia said. "Was she bragging?" "Really? At least 4 times so far. Always wearing that silly mask." Arthur settled in the sandwich and listened to Mia describe the curly-haired boy and the devilish grin. He had to admit mild curiosity about the child. Arthur himself hadn't seen him. But that was okay. "You know," Mia said, "you could use the boy to your advantage." "How?" Arthur wasn't a fan of using anyone, much less a little boy, but he figured might as well hear what Mia had to say. He found her voice as comforting and wanted Peggy's hot toddies in the cold night. "Well, the whole thing is messing with the massive paperwork for the people in the admin. It's a nightmare for documenting all the sightings in coordinate with the police. I'm sure you don't suggest you're going to follow him around the bug heck of it unless they let you take the man where he wants to go. I used to do that when I was a kid. If you just keep asking, keep pestering people, then they're really busy. They eventually say yes and just get rid of you. Works like a charm." She laughed a bit into her sandwich. Arthur thought for a second. That's not a bad idea. Mia grinned. She had a piece of lettuce between her 2 front teeth. On her, it was charming. Nurse Colton had a plan she was sure was better than those of Nurse Ackerman and Nurse Thomas. It was the advantage of being both simple and sophisticated, and it should be lethal. She expected it, assuming she wasn't thwarted by a mysterious shadow that derailed the actions of her fellow conspirators. But unlike Nurse Ackerman and Nurse Thomas, Nurse Colton expected the shadow to intervene. She had a plan to stop it. Nurse Thomas had home sick for 2 days. Neither Nurse Ackerman or Nurse Colton knew whether the sickness was physical or psychological. Obviously, anyone who experienced the monstrous deluge of foul bodily fluids like that drenched Nurse Thomas had the right to be a little hysterical. Fainting seemed to be an appropriate reaction. Nurse Colton didn't begrudge Nurse Thomas at all for escaping consciousness for a while. Nurse Colton and Nurse Ackerman had both been masked, gowned, and gloved when they cleaned up the down pillow. They also put a camper on upper lips and dampened the smells. However, they both gagged repeatedly and took an hour to clean the room. And Nurse Thomas, what was the shadow? What was the discussion the three women had in Nurse Thomas's house in the previous evening? They had decided the intention of the thing in the bed. Or what was the thing in the bed? This is why Nurse Colton thought she knew what to do about it. She had some experience in this sort of thing. She felt pretty good about her plan, whereas Nurse Ackerman was cut off from her emotions, and Nurse Thomas was too enslaved by hers. Nurse Colton thought there was perfect balance of her heart and brain. She felt deeply, yes, but she also had a depth of reason two other women lacked. She had to have this balance. Nurse Colton had seen her out since she was 16. When the parents died, Nurse Colton had decided to forego foster care. She insisted to run away, found a woman who made fake IDs, and got a job as a cruise ship, a job that gave her free roam to board. Over time, she had saved up enough money to pay for nursing school. Now she was here because people lost people like her parents. It was only right to use what she knew about to help others. On her way down the hall to room 1280, Nurse Colton saw a little boy run into the storage room. She still had no idea whether it was real or supernatural. She suspected the latter, but it was some kind of ghost. She didn't know what to make of him, and she didn't know how to make him go away, so she figured she'd deal with one mystery at a time. At the door of room 1280, Nurse Colton stopped and set down a tote bag she carried. Looking back around the hall, she pulled out the licorice oil combined with the carrier oil. She had a dab of oil mixture above her upper lip. The strong aroma, she hoped, would block out the compatible stink in the room. After one more look down the hall, Nurse Colton pulled the plain white pillar candle out of her tote. She stepped into the room 1280 and she set down the candle. Then she put out another candle, set it a couple feet from the first one. One after the other, she placed candles around the perimeter of the space. Once she had the candles in place, Nurse Colton pulled a lighter from her tote bag and methodically lit every candle. After the candles were lit, Nurse Colton closed her eyes and imagined expanding the candle's light until it filled the entire room. Then she turned and looked at the man in the bed, and she said, "This room is filled with the light of good. No shadow can enter and do mischief here." She stood very still, and her attention was strong enough. Yes, it felt right. Nurse Colton believed in the power of intention and human will. Both had helped her survive the loss of her parents and build a new life on her own terms. Both would serve her now. She was sure of it. Good. It was time. Nurse Colton sat down in a tote bag and looked at the man in the bed. Unlike Nurse Thomas, Nurse Colton preferred the face of ugliness of life head on. Yes, the man's fire-blighted bones, nearly calcified insides, filled her with revulsion, but she could handle it. Now she was going to rid the world of it. Nurse Colton pulled out a syringe and held no drug. It was a syringe of air. She figured if the right thing in the bed could breathe, it could die of air embolism. Leaning forward, Nurse Colton began injecting the air into the IV port in the thing's forearm. She had no doubt she'd succeeded because she knew she was staying in a protective circle. The circle was so strong that even the shadow, whatever it was inside the circle, when it cast it, the circle would stop the shadow from doing what it wanted to do. As she began to depress the plunger in the syringe, her protection circle failed. Locked in the air in front of Nurse Colton, the shadow swept across the syringe. The syringe leaped from her hand, spitting just before shooting like an arrow toward Nurse Colton's throat. Stabbing deep into her skin just above her collarbone, it vibrated, sending jitters through her neck. Nurse Colton knew if she didn't grab the syringe immediately, the air in that syringe was going to kill her. So she reacted instantly, jerking the syringe from her neck, only to have it snatched from her again. This time she held it up in her hands in surrender. The syringe fell to the floor and snapped in half, and a hot, musky blast of air reached through the room and extinguished every candle flame. The candles flew back and smacked the walls. Nurse Colton had never been her attention so violently defied, and she was rattled. But she wasn't going to show it. She looked like a vile mass in bed. "It will find a way," she said. A giggle came from outside the hallway. Nurse Colton rushed through the door and ran right into Nurse Vermont, who stood like a statue, staring down the hall. "He went that way," Mia told Nurse Colton. "Who?" she asked, looking stunned. "The little boy." "I'm beginning to think that's not a little boy," Nurse Colton admitted. Mia nodded. "Me too." The nurses stood in silence, looking down the hall And then Mia asked, "What just happened? You saw?" Mia nodded. She wasn't afraid. Nurse Colton cocked her head and studied Mia for several moments. "You're curious," she concluded correctly. Mia nodded again. "Okay, come in." Nurse Colton went back into room 1280. Mia tried to follow, but she was stopped at the door and covered her nose. Mia liked to keep lists. She kept lists of best things in life. Best experience, best sights, best taste, best smells, best sounds, etc. But she kept lists of the worst things in life. 3 of the smells were the worst smells of the list: rotten eggs, dead bodies. She's unfortunately once been the one to discover a body of an elderly woman in the adjacent apartment, but without family to check on her. It was a smell that had led to the discovery. And a skunk spray. The smell in this room was worse than Mia's 3 worst smells combined. "Oh," she said. "Try this," and Miss Colton handed Mia a small container of ethanol oil. Mia sniffed it and then rubbed some above her lip. It was better, but not great. Still, Mia stepped into the room. She didn't know what she expected to see, but it wasn't this. What was this? "The poor, poor man," she whispered. Nurse Colton looked at the bed and sighed. When she said, "Yes, but the man isn't the problem." Mia glanced at Nurse Colton and then returned her gaze to lay in bed. Mia had never been squeamish. In fact, she had been kind of enjoyed the gory stuff. She looked at the elderly cadaver she discovered, stared right into the massive maggots, and thought, "Cool, it was nature at work." But this wasn't nature. This is the exact opposite of nature. It was a violation of every idea of nature. Neither is skeleton nor man. This brittle bone container of decaying organs and tissue still somehow managed to sustain life to result in the brain activity. Mia could see one of the monitors. It was strong, fundamentally wrong. It was the inside of the problem, Mia said. "Yes," Nurse Colton said. Mia thought it was a conversation she heard. The conversation about evil and extermination and how they connect context. Turning, Mia met Nurse Colton's direct gaze and nodded. "I think I understand." Mia was a genius. Arthur felt like a little spoiled child following the administrative staff around, asking over and over permission to take the man to 1280 to Fazbear Entertainment Distribution Center. He couldn't, however, argue with the results. In spite of the ferocious and numerous affections voiced by the nurses of the hospice wing and even to the others of the hospital when they started a petition, Arthur received a call late one evening before telling him he could take the man to room 1280 to Fazbear Entertainment Distribution Center if he came in and signed a multitude of papers absolving the hospital of any responsibility for whatever might result from the trip. So once again, Arthur pedaled toward Hercules Hospital. Today he was wearing a full rain gear, because there was no arguing the colossal turning storm clouds that dominated the sky. Not a single ray of sunlight was shining its way through the black-gray cloud stacks that made more like twilight at 10:10 in the morning. Rain began falling as the hospital came into view. Arthur kept his head down, navigating by the markings for the bicycle lane at the right edge of the driveway. Every car that sped past sprayed Arthur with water and buffing Ruby so her tires wobbled a little on the pavement. Arthur was so relieved when he glanced up and saw he was almost the Portico. And then his feet rumbled as Ruby's pedals had been seen what he thought he'd seen. Glancing up at the Portico, taking in the majesty of the building's vine-covered facade and the intricate sanctuary, he had never seen a child's head peek out from behind the stone Cerberus. Arthur braked, wiped his eyes, and started looking at the gauzy rain curtains separating from him and the hospital. He squinted, focusing intensely on what the Cerberus and the top of the columns flanking the Portico. No, nothing was there. He was just imagining what he'd seen. All that talk of the little boy had put the idea in his mind, but he didn't think he'd imagined it. Arthur tried to make a last look, and then the rain curtains turned into solid walls of water, pounding the earth as if Mother Nature was trying to obliterate an enemy. Now Arthur could see nothing but rain, so he stood on Ruby's pedals and got both himself and the poor drowned bicycle under cover. 10 minutes later, still dripping in water wherever he went, because he carried his wet rain gear with him, Arthur sat in front of every different desk and the desk he sat in front of during his campaign to trip to Fazbear Entertainment Distribution Center. This wasn't the desk of some low-level paper pusher. This was the desk of someone in power. In this case, legal power. Arthur sat in front of the desk of Carolyn Bannon Graves, Hercules Hospital's head attorney. This wasn't the desk of some low-level paper pusher. This was the desk of someone in power. In this case, legal power. Arthur had in the front desk of Carolyn Brandon Graves, Hercules Hospital head attorney. Miss Graves had been nicer chairs than Pete and all the others in the administration office. Arthur was quite comfortable with the burgundy leather wingback chair. You understand, Father Blythe, that any damages resulting from the patient transport, be they property or personal, shall be wholly and completely in your responsibility? Arthur nodded. I understand. His stomach did a somersault. What if something went wrong? Arthur adjusted his attitude. Where was his faith? He was a man in room 1280 would be watched over. The attorney pushed the stack of papers across the clean polished surface of the mahogany desk. Please read through these agreements, sign where indicated, and initial where specified. Arthur started to lean forward. "Not here, Miss Father Blythe," Miss Graves said. She made a motion, and a thin, well-dressed woman appeared and picked up the papers. "Please go with Miss Weber here. She will take you to the place where you can read and sign. I'm afraid I have another appointment." Arthur dutifully vacated the wing-back chair, feeling victorious. Mia hovered in the hallway outside of the hospital's legal offices. She had been told Father Blythe was still signing papers, giving them to the authority to take a man in room 1280 to Fazbear Entertainment Distribution Center. In spite of those papers, she hoped that he'd be able to talk them into giving up the idea. Leaning against the wall, Mia nodded and smiled at everyone who went by, but she didn't really see anyone. Her mind wasn't in this hallway with her. She was reviewing what had led her to this place and the time in this mission. Mia hadn't really understood why the only job she could find was a hospice wing in the Hercules Hospital. She was highly qualified and had experience references. She should have been able to get a better position, in fact. She'd been feeling pretty resentful of being stuck with that, and she'd gotten. If it wasn't for her boyfriend continually reminding her that the job was a stepping stone, she'd have been taken pretty miserable. But between his encouragement, his wonderful sandwiches, and her own naturally optimistic nature, she'd been reasonably content here. Except for being creeped out by her fellow nurses in the hospice wing and her disturbing hushed conversations. But now, she understood them. Oh boy, did she ever! Mia had also understood why she had gotten this job. She was needed here. "Why, hello, Mia." Mia focused and realized Father Blythe was standing in front of her. "What are you doing here?" Mia smiled and watched Father Blythe juggle a stack of papers, orange rain gear, and bright red bicycle helmet. The rain gear dripped on Father Blythe's black leather shoes for some reason. She always smelled like coconuts. "Actually, I'm here to talk to you, Father," Mia said. She glanced around the busy hallway and then looked down in the hallway in the waiting area. "Could you come with me for a second?" Father Blythe glanced at his watch. "Peggy's going to be meeting me out in the front of the church van. It's wheelchairs accessible. I'm going to trade her Ruby for the van." Then he looked into Mia's eyes. "But, okay." Mia looked Father Blythe's arm and led him down the hall. She smiled at everyone as they went, noticing several nurses gave Father Blythe disapproving frowns. In the waiting area, Mia sat down in one of the tan plush chairs and motioned to one next to it. Father Blythe sat beside her. "What is it, Mia? You seem troubled." "I am." She looked at Father Blythe's warm brown eyes. He had such a kind face, such an open face. She should see that he'd known suffering, but she could also tell that he was resolute in the intention to see the good in everything. He had one of those mouths that curved upward. Even when his face was expressionless, he was designed for seeing light in darkness. Realizing that he was waiting for her to speak, Mia looked around to see she was there alone. She leaned as close to Father Blythe as she could without getting weird, and hailed and then in a rush, "Father, I know I gave you the advance and the permission to take the man in room 1280 out of the hospital. But you can't take him. You just can't. The man in room 1280, he can't leave this place. I can't explain why I know this, but I know it. He can't go where he wants to go. You can't take him. The other nurses are right. I thought they were lunatics. I admit. I did. But now I understand. They're right. There's something in that poor man. Something in there that you can't take where he wants to go. You can't. It'll be devastating, even catastrophic if you do. I don't know why or how, but I know it. You have to believe me. Mia stopped. She realized that he was going to gush forth another 1,000 or even million words if Father Blythe wasn't going to change his mind. It was right there on his face. Lips pressed in a compassionate regret, thick gray brows drawn together, crinkles drawn in the corner of his white set eyes, slightly weak chin tucked. These were all the telegraphing that something come out of Father Blythe's mouth. "Mia," he said when he finished her case, "I'm so sorry, but I have to take this man where he wants to go. It's his last request." "Just because this is his last request doesn't make it a good one," Mia attempted fleetly. "Why is this important to you?" Father Blythe asked. Mia had no logical answer. She wasn't about to explain what she'd seen in the hospital room. She knew how crazy it sounded. She couldn't lose this job, but beyond what she'd seen, all she had was feeling, an intuition, maybe it was a premonition. "It just is," she said finally. Father Blythe sat down in rain gear and bicycle helmet. He tucked his paper under his arm and took Mia's hand. "Mia, I've lived long enough to see all kind of evil that exists in our world. I haven't seen it all by any means, but I've seen more than enough to understand that my glass is always full attitude is no basis in earthly reality. I would be jaded by now, I suppose. I should be pessimistic, ready to see the worst, but I'm not. I'm not because I chose to let the past color the way to see the present. I choose to expect in every moment to find what's good. But what if you don't? Then there's always the next moment. And if there isn't," Mia could hear the fear in her voice. She brushed away the tears that threatened to spill. Father Blythe breathed in and out slowly. "Then I'll move on to whatever my journey holds next for me, I suppose. That's all we can do. That's all I'm trying to do for the man in room 1280. Mia swallowed and nodded. "You wouldn't change your mind?" "I'm sorry, but no." Mia stood to Father Blythe gather his things. "May I hug you, Father?" she asked. Of course. They hugged and tried to pour into Father Blythe, but expecting a huge amount of warmth she felt for him. or was it worry? They separated and he said, "Bye, Mia. I'll see you again soon." "Bye, Father," she said as she gave her little wave and headed down the hall. Fazbear Entertainment Distribution Center was a massive collection of reddish and whitish buildings that Arthur couldn't believe he had never noticed before, looking like long flat metal-sided blocks haphazardly placed in the clusters of a gargantuan child. The buildings just had been there at least 20 years. Slow, hung, and dotted with narrow windows. Every one of them needed paint, or at least a good cleaning. Arthur was pretty sure the buildings had been bright white and bright red when they first been built. Along the sides of the building, slanted drivers led to the cracked concrete loading docks. Even the big rig trailers, tucked into at least a dozen of those docks, looked like they had been in service for a good long while. Some were rusted, many were dented, all were dirty. Admittedly, there was a dreary day, but Arthur was sure even in the bright sunlight this distribution center would look like it needed a lot of TLC. The address of the distribution center, which Peggy had gotten to Arthur along with the instructions for getting there, turned out to be the building, but rather than a small empty guardhouse and an open gate. Once through the abandoned entry, Arthur didn't know exactly what to do. He realized that the man at the destination of the Fazbears Center was most likely picking Iowa as the place he wanted to visit. What specific part of the place did he want to go? Arthur glanced in the rearview mirror of the sheet-enshrouded bundle of the wheelchair, locked into place behind the van's passenger seat. He still wasn't used to seeing the palpitating dry organs and veins of the upright position. He also wasn't used to the smell. Although he did try to talk himself out of it, the trip from Hercules Hospital to Fazbear Entertainment, Arthur was sure the man smelled worse with every mile they traveled. The van was filled with the grim stench of sulfur, feces, decomposition, blood, and bile. Ever since the man in room 1280 had been transferred from his bed to the wheelchair, he had been leaking blood and viscous black fluids. The drinkly mixtures were now soaking in the sheet around the man and pooling on the van floor. Arthur knew it was going to take hours to clean up this van after the trip. In spite of this, the man sat upright on the seat. He was strapped in, but his head was drooping. Of course, he had no eyes, but his eye sockets were directed ahead, as if he had to see exactly where they were. Feeling less and less sure about what he was doing, Arthur told himself to stop judging the poor man based on his appearance. He cleared his throat. "So, do you know where you want to go?" Arthur didn't really expect a response, but he got one. The man raised one of his crusty finger bones and pointed in the direction that seemed to indicate the largest building in the Fazbear collection. It was also the building Arthur noticed that a large covered courtyard leading to the grass-fronted wall. That was probably the main entrance. Arthur realized he would have called ahead to get the permission of the man at the distribution center, but maybe his failure to do so had been unconscious. What was the old saying? It was better to ask for forgiveness than for permission? Something like that. Arthur didn't want another battle like the one he had to fight in the hospital. To that end, Arthur decided not to head to the main entrance the man had indicated. "I'm going to find a side entrance, I think," Arthur said out loud. "Something more private. Are you alright with that?" The man didn't move, but Arthur thought he could hear sloppy percussion emanating from the man's chest. Was Arthur hearing the man's heartbeat? Arthur suppressed the shivers that started at the top of his head and did a pego down the neck to his spine. Arthur did the van in gear and pulled it around to the side of the main building. The man's tires made fizzing around the wet pavement. Arthur wondered how he transported the man into the building without getting him wet. Somehow dousing a body barely in skin didn't seem like a good idea. As soon as Arthur turned the corner of the big building, he saw a solution to his problem. The side of the building had van-sized loading docks under the overhang. "Ask and ye shall receive," Arthur said, smiling, and said a prayer to thanks for help. At the far end of the row of the loading docks, a couple of husky warriors wearing black braces and scowls loaded with boxes in the dirty white van. They had paid no attention when Arthur pulled the church van parallel to the platform opposite the end of the docks. "This should work," he said to the man. Of course, he got no response. Jumping out of the van, Arthur took the cleansing lungful of fresh air. No, not French, actually. The air smelled like grease and solvents, but at least it smelled better than the air in the van. Arthur opened the side door, moved the wheelchair, and jock-eyed into the position of the ramp. Trying not to be too prissy about it, Arthur touched the blood-stained sheet and adjusted to better to cover the man. He had nothing to wipe his fingers on, but he ignored the issue and wheeled the man into the building. Inside the roll-up door openings of the loading docks, the building revealed itself to be the heart of Fazbear Entertainment Distribution Center. It was stretching so far into the distance that Arthur couldn't see the end of it. Floor-to-ceiling shelves with stacks and stacks of boxes and plastics and closed packages. Peggy had told Arthur that Fazbear Entertainment created parts and costumes for animatronics used in restaurants and other venues. It also created costumes for humans to wear, various toys and other merchandise related from the most famous characters. Arthur assumed that this was all in the boxes and packages. It also explained the faded murals of the pale yellow walls. The murals depicted a variety of outlandish animal characters of questionable purpose, despite their cheery appearance. Arthur couldn't be sure if they were intended to be friendly. In front of the shelving area sees a took boxes and packages and journeyed through the building. Journeys that would probably end up near loading docks. A few workers monitored the conveyors, while the others drove forklifts down the rows in the shelving area. A tall man with red hair wandered about, carrying a clipboard, but he wasn't looking this way. The building was surprisingly quiet. Only the muted clatter of the conveyor, the hum of the forklift worker motors, and a few shouts and thumps broke up the cavernous hush of the place. Well, here we are. Arthur turned to look at the man, and then the man started to convulse. Several thoughts tingled in Arthur's head as he watched the bones and organs and tissue in the wheelchair shake uncontrollably, that some of the man's rib bones cracked. When blood flew, tissue genders began spewing. Arthur thought, they would have let me bring a nurse, and what should I do? And why did I sign all those papers? And please guide me. Arthur leaned over the wheelchair just as the man collapsed under the mound of bone and indescribable mass of fried human parts. At a loss, Arthur began to pray silently. Before Arthur could get enough 2 words prayer, the man's remains heaved, and they burst like nightmarish egg blowing in a disgorge of new life. Expelling rank-smelling, sticky black blood and the tar-like substance of frightful spray over the Arthur and the building's smooth concrete floor, the explosion of bone and veins and organs happened in an instant. In an instant, Arthur saw a void that remained gaping like a portal to hell itself. Then he, frantically wiping nauseating fluids and slimy body bits off his face. As he did this, he saw the man's body tumble in the wheelchair, and Arthur knew the man was dead. Instinctively, Arthur began praying again, but as he prayed, he heard something that wiped even the thought of prayer out of his mind. He heard a rush of pattering footsteps, little sprightly footsteps capering away toward the shelving area of the building. What was that? Arthur wiped his eyes again and looked around. At first, he saw the man's remains. For the first time since Arthur had gathered the courage to look at the man, all exposed the insides are still. Then Arthur's gaze landed on a trail of tiny footprints that were tamped in the man's charred blood and fluids. He followed the trail and saw the footprints continued from a man, etching the floor of the man's blood like fearful hieroglyphs marking the way. The way to where? The man had moved on, but something hadn't. Father, is everything okay? A man's voice pitched in high shock asked Arthur. Arthur turned. The speaker was a red-headed man with a clipboard. He stared at the floor, his eyes blanched and his eyes wide. Actually, no. I think everything's okay, Arthur said. For the first time in his life, he was sure of it.